A warning. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, Harry Potter belongs to JKR. I write purely for fun and it's posted here so anyone can read my efforts, free of charge. Anybody wishing professional standards of writing should go and buy a book. JKR has apparently got a new one out. Chapter 34. Albus was taking an evening stroll around the castle. This was at least better than sitting in his office moping. He'd been so busy thinking about the public embarrassment missing tonight's ball would cause him that he'd totally overlooked the much greater problem that was right under his nose. Albus had also been mulling over what to do about Severus when it hit home that he hadn't actually seen his potions professor for a while. During the summer break, it wasn't uncommon for staff to be missing for weeks at a time, but Severus would usually tell him when he set off on an ingredients gathering trip. As Albus cast his mind back further, the last time he could recall seeing the head of Slytherin was when Severus saw his students off to the Express. This led Albus to do something he would not normally do, enter a professor's accommodation without their permission or knowledge. In Severus's rooms he found no sign of his potions professor, literally. It was evident Severus had packed everything he owned and skedaddled out the castle, no fond goodbye or even a note. This left Albus in a precarious position. If he told Barchoke that it was Snape who passed on the prophecy, it would now appear as if he'd helped Severus flee before revealing the informant's identity. The headmaster was also in a quandary over what to do about a potions professor come September. Severus hadn't handed in his notice, and advertising his position might alert people that he'd done a runner. Just when Albus thought he'd finally got the defense job sorted, along comes something else to upset the apple cart. He was left asking himself why the Fates suddenly hated him so. Dolores thought the Fates were against her as well. She would admit to herself that thinking on her feet was not one of her best traits. She was more of a careful schemer who strived from the shadows to achieve her long-term goals, but that wouldn't work tonight. She had approached a few people who shared some of her opinions on magical society, hoping to create a collective sense of outrage at this odious circus tonight's ball was turning into. Really, she was just looking for someone to do the dirty work in her place, but Dolores was finding no takers. The boy cunningly revealing he might one day be the Goblin Ambassador had won him a lot of plaudits tonight. That the ministry wouldn't then have to deal with the beast was certainly a plus. If the boy decided to forsake them and live as a goblin, the public would tear down whatever government allowed the travesty to happen. Here might be a compromise that was acceptable to all. There was also those who weren't present tonight but whose absence still played a big part in Dolores not finding the support she was looking for. That Albus Dumbledore was refused an invitation for the ball again counted in the boy's favor, especially amongst those with the same leanings as Dolores. At the back of all their minds too was the omission of the Malfoys, now social pariahs in their community. The fact that their wealth was locked away until the son came of age sent shivers up the blood spines, and this boy was rumored to be the one responsible for their spectacular fall from grace. No, it would appear Dolores was on her own tonight. Gordon had told her that when he tried to instigate a confrontation with the boy at Hogwarts, this supposed hero had point-blank refused. This led Dolores to believe his extra defense training was because the boy who lived needed it. All she had seen from the boy so far was cutting Dumbledore's wand with a sword, after Black had punched the old fool out and put him on his back. Dolores was confident of winning any confrontation with the brat. It would be the engineering of it that would take all of her skill. A direct attack on the boy would see her lose support, even after she trounced him. Dolores needed to choose her victim carefully, one that would have him rushing to their aid. All his friends were out for the same reason as the brat was. Publicly, she couldn't appear to be a bully that was picking on children. This left Dolores running her eye over the rest of his company. Part of her would really like a go at that Veela creature, but a mature Veela wouldn't need a little boy springing to her aid. It was also known they could transform and throw fireballs at their foes, not something she fancied facing. The more she studied, the more her choice became obvious, the muggle bitch who thought she and her mudblood daughter had the right to be here tonight. The problem with her choice was that Amelia Bones and Augusta Longbottom never let her intended target get out of their sight. Dolores was getting desperate, but not desperate enough to tangle with either of those two witches. Emma couldn't hide her delight at dancing with her daughter's boyfriend. Oh thank you, Harry, if Arthur had asked me one more stupid question, I swear I would have screamed. If that's the ministry's expert on the general British public, mystery collect plugs, and batteries too, Weasley, then I hate to think how poor his knowledge is on your nation. Electricity. Even Augusta knows better than that now. Molly's been staring daggers at her husband all evening, but I think the chance to talk with two live muggles is too big of an opportunity for him to pass up. Well, it also gets me away from the daughter staring in my direction all through the meal. The break from Hogwarts must have lowered Hermione's tolerance, she usually can just ignore it. She knew she really shouldn't tease, but Emma couldn't help it. The mother in her had grown very fond of Harry. I noticed the only time she wasn't staring at you was when you looked anywhere near her, then her face was redder than her hair. Do the girls stare often, Harry? They stare at the boy who lived, not me. My friends don't stare because they've taken the time to get to know me, not some myth. Emma had spotted some girls in Florida who'd never heard of Harry Potter but still eyed up this handsome young man. Harry's shoulders were so broad and muscled that they'd had to purchase t-shirts supposedly for ages 15 to 16 to achieve a proper fit. With shorts and trainers completing his outfit, you would never have placed him as just approaching 12. Emma felt those muscles tense as they danced before they sprang into action. She would not have considered herself light as such. That didn't account for Harry being able to lift her effortlessly off her feet and spin her around. No sooner had Emma feet regained contact with terra firma when Harry had released his hold and quickly turned to face where she had been mere seconds before. Dolores had sensed a golden opportunity when her two intended victims took to the dance floor. Her original intention was to stick out her foot and trip the bitch before instigating an argument. That was before the green-eyed monster of jealousy saw the angry red mist descend to cloud her judgment. This woman was beautiful, even Dolores couldn't deny that. The muggle moved with a grace and elegance that she herself coveted, but it was the way she smiled and chatted to the boy in her arms that saw Dolores' bile rise. She was suddenly transferred to other times and different places where the rules were always the same. The pretty girls got all the boys. That this bitch was a muggle magnified the problem immensely in Dolores' eyes. As they danced toward her, an intended trip was rapidly transforming into a kick. By the time they reached where she had positioned herself, uncontrollable jealousy had Dolores wanting to harm this bitch for all the humiliation and hurt she'd suffered from pretty girls over the years. She took a step forward and swung her foot as hard as she could at those delicate ankles. Dolores was prepared for the impact. What she wasn't prepared for was hitting fresh air. How could she have missed? Her striking foot continuing unchecked threw her totally off balance, and saw her rump hit the floor with a tremendous thump. While sitting there trying to comprehend what had just happened, a hand reached out to help her. She looked along that arm until her gaze locked onto the greenest pair of eyes she'd ever seen. Are you okay? That bit of floor is slippy. It almost had Emma down just then. They had instantly gathered a crowd that was far from silent. Slippy my ass, she tried to kick that lady. Dolores saw it reflected back in those green orbs. He not only knew what she'd attempted but had somehow foiled her attack. The muggle bitch looking over his shoulder added fuel to her now raging temper. This was not who the most famous wizard in their society should associate with. As far as Dolores was concerned, he'd already made his choice, and chosen badly. Get your paw away from me, goblin. You dishonor the proud name of Potter with the choices you make and the company you keep. Your parents would be ashamed of you. The band may have been still playing a waltz, but this was now the event attracting all the attention. Harry glanced at his still offered hand before replying. That is something none of us here will ever know, since people who shared the same opinions as you saw them murdered in their home. I think what would make them ashamed is that they gave their lives, yet this attitude still remains. His offered hand was withdrawn and Harry's gaze got harder. I have been awarded your society's top honor tonight, but you still consider me far beneath you, purely down to you thinking what flows through your veins is better than mine. Would you care to duel and see if you're correct? I'm sure we can find another vial somewhere and then people can guess just how pure your blood is. Before anyone could intervene and put a stop to this, Dolores quickly shouted her agreement. I accept your duel to first blood. We'll see just whose blood it is that gets spilt. Harry agreed, and then turned to find all his guests were now right behind him. He could see Sirius wanted to object, but his father pushed forward first. I'll hold your coat, son. This effectively killed any argument, though Hermione was now in front of him too. She began unbuttoning his waistcoat before giving advice most of the listening crowd could certainly hear. Remember, Master Sharpshot, don't mess about. Take her out quickly. I want more dances with my boyfriend tonight. The waistcoat was now off and in his father's hands as his girlfriend started on his shirt. Padma had seen how the crowd reacted to Hermione's words and decided to take it a step further. I thought Harry took Master Sharpshot out pretty effectively, Hermione. Greatest bladesmith the Goblin Nation has, and Harry cut him to pieces. What your boyfriend can do with that sword is just scary. Dolores had of course been listening and interrupted. I choose wands for this duel, not swords. Hermione had removed his cravat and cuff links, leaving Harry standing there with his shirt open to the waist. He turned to face his opponent. You are welcome to choose whatever weapons you want, as am I. If you wish to apologize for your attempted attack on Emma, and the slandering of my family, I will accept and we can move on. Otherwise, you will face my blades. You challenged a centurion to a duel. You are about to find out just what that means. Hermione removed one of the bejeweled discs that decorated her belt. One twist and Harry had a shield on his arm. I've got a spare here if you need a second. This earned her a kiss from her boyfriend as Fudge then attempted to sweep the whole thing under the carpet. Harry, is this really necessary? Can't we reach some agreement to avoid bloodshed? A sword against a wand is hardly a fair fight. I don't wish to see you hurt. This saw his three friends burst out laughing. Neville further amazed his grandmother by standing up to the Minister of Magic. Barchoke arranged dueling dummies for us to practice on. These are top of the range models, but we can't let Harry fight them. Two of them together can't hit Harry with a spell before he hacks them to pieces. Professor Weasley couldn't repair the last two he destroyed. I would guess she will get one, perhaps two spells off before Harry's blades find their mark. I don't know what she does at the ministry, but I would guess she won't be at work on Monday. Harry had a shield and his knife on one arm while he drew his sword, taking a few practice swipes. I've given my terms, Minister. She came looking for a fight. I would hate to disappoint. The Grangers are under my protection, yet she still made the attempt. Even then, I was prepared to overlook that since it was so childish an attempt. Not now. Glad his boots were made of dragon hide and would cope with the change, Harry activated his armor. Hermione may have been terrified inside, but none of that showed as she gave Harry a quick kiss for luck. Make it quick, Harry. Don't give her a chance to get a lucky shot in. Dolores was rapidly reevaluating her options. They didn't look good. To back down now would be the end of her career, but to fight might be the end of a lot more than that. She enjoyed her position in the ministry. She also enjoyed picking her nose on occasion. If that blade got too close, Dolores might lose both her job and her wand arm. She tried to stall. Dolores was ready to try anything. Armor? What kind of honor is there in fighting with armor on? The same type of honor there is in challenging a 12-year-old boy to a duel on his birthday. You thought you would be fighting a little kid. Instead you're facing a highly trained centurion. Do we need a referee, or are there too many witnesses for you to attack me when my back is turned? The band had long since stopped playing, unable to compete with the entertainment this confrontation was providing. Harry's comments drew loud gasps from the large crowd, most of whom were amazed at just how well this young man had judged his opponent. Dolores was backed into a corner and couldn't see any way out. She drew her wand and fired the first curse. Her emotional state being what it was, she cast the curse a lot stronger than she'd intended. It sliced the back of her hand open and she held it up to her opponent, almost wetting herself to find him now right in front of her with that deadly sword poised to strike. How could anyone move that fast? First blood, I believe. Is your honor satisfied? Dolores was feeling quite pleased with her solution and put as much venom into the word honor as she possibly could. The back of her hand was also in agony. She hoped it didn't leave a scar. Her opponent then showed what he thought of her honor by turning his back on her and walking away. This was about as big a show of disrespect to an opponent's honor as possible, without committing the ultimate social faux pas and actually spitting in someone's face. Dolores dearly wanted to raise her wand, but she now had a face full of furious Fudge. You will leave here immediately, reporting to my office at 8 o'clock, Monday morning. At that time, you will be reassigned. If you're not there at 8 sharp, I will assume you do not wish to be reassigned and have resigned from the ministry. Dolores left the ball with her head down and leaving a trail of blood behind. Her hand hurt like the devil, it would probably leave a scar too. She was about to be demoted and some toady would take her place on the fast track to success. Dolores knew she was finished in any administration headed by Fudge. What she needed to do now was keep her head down and give people time to forget tonight. Meanwhile, she would be looking about for a challenger to Fudge, and getting in quick before anyone else. This was certainly going to be a long-term project. As long as Fudge had the support of the boy who lived, he would be untouchable as minister. Dolores wasn't forgetting that brat either, he just shot straight to the top of her, get even with, list. This was a very short list since she usually ensured those names that appeared on it soon got what was coming to them. She would have to play this one different. Plotting the death or dismemberment of a national hero was not something that was going to happen overnight. She'd acted in haste tonight and paid the price. Fudge demoting her would see his proposal sail through the Wizengamot. Dolores would get even though, she always did. Harry had buttoned his shirt, leaving it open at the neck, and slipped his waistcoat on. After that fiasco, the rest of the night would be informal as far as he was concerned. Hermione was right beside him and he could see her beginning to fret. Both could benefit from a long hug but neither wanted to show weakness here. Harry, your dance card just filled with my name for the rest of the night. That's fine with me, Hermione, but I need to finish my dance with the beautiful lady who was my partner before this started. Emma attempted to intervene. Harry, it's fine. No, Mum, Professor Weasley taught us that your reactions after a fight can be just as important. We are all going to continue as if everything is normal, and enjoy the rest of the evening. One dance, Harry, then you're mine. Emma could actually feel him shaking as they danced. Harry, wouldn't you rather sit for a while? Actually, I'd rather get the hell out of here, but we can't leave yet. It's just the adrenaline, Emma, I was psyching myself up to attack that woman. I would need to have shown I wasn't a pushover and actually harmed her, not something I was looking forward to. Her doing that actually worked better for me. I don't want to give the impression I'm some bloodthirsty nutter with a sword. I don't think you could ever be accused of being like that. Dumbledore thoughts are after the troll, and some of the people here would too if I'd just sliced the witch's wand arm off. After the troll, I stood in a shower for about an hour before hiding in my room for the rest of the night. After Malfoy, I was in a toilet throwing up when Hermione found me. With Master Sharpshard, I was too concerned for Hermione to let anything else bother me. This drew a shiver from his dance partner. Don't remind me, watching the memory was bad enough. You've had a hard life for a 12-year-old. Oh no, Emma, I've had a great life. My father is a very wise goblin. He wanted me to see the world and I've loved every bit of it. The summer holidays have been the best time I've ever had. You now have some idea how wealthy my family is. I could easily spend the rest of my life living in my own private and privileged world. I think that is something my mum and dad would be disappointed in. I know my father wouldn't stop me but I just couldn't do that. All three have put their lives on the line to save mine. I think I need to at least try and make something of myself. Harry, you've already done more than enough to make all three of them proud of their son. I watched your father's memory of when you fought your trainer after he hurt Hermione, then tonight you stepped in to protect me too. How could anyone not be proud of you? Does this mean you would accept a lodger for the rest of this weekend? Well, since we'll all be going to your private island after the Wizengamot meeting on Monday, I would say that was a distinct possibility. She could feel his shakes lessening as they danced, both were simply ignoring the stares of the other dancers. Emma decided to make something clear. Harry, that room at our house is now considered yours. Providing your father agrees, you can stay whenever you want. Dan and I certainly don't mind, and I doubt Hermione will complain. She was rewarded by his first genuine smile since the incident. The dance ended and Hermione was waiting for them. The young couple took to the floor and was soon oblivious to everything and everyone around them. Ginny had watched the entire incident from behind her mother. Bill had told her Harry was very close to his three friends but this just drove that home. They were all there for him without a moment's hesitation. Ginny was trying to tell herself this was just a hopeless crush but Merlin, Harry was so handsome. She'd almost put her elbow in the soup simply eating at the same table as him. Watching him dance with the girls at the table had built a hope in her she too might actually dance with Harry on his birthday. That was gone now, and probably just as well. Had he actually held her, Ginny Weasley would probably have fainted on the spot. Emma returned to the table and was determined to take control of the conversation this time. Molly, Arthur, I can't praise your son, Bill, highly enough. We've actually seen him teaching and we're very impressed. He's certainly had a wonderful effect on those four. They all really look up to him. Molly's entire face lit up and Emma knew she'd hit the bullseye. Muggle or magical, mothers love to talk about their children. She would much rather talk about that than have Arthur ask her what you used a rubber duck for. Dolores considered herself lucky in a way. The press had gone positively gaga over Crow and his friends, with barely any mention of their altercation that happened later. Working under Ludo Bagman in the Department of Magical Games and Sports was also slightly better than the punishment she though Fudge would stick her with. She had envisaged manning the graveyard shift in flu control for the next few years, or even exile to rot in magical creatures. This was not the deepest, darkest depths of the ministry Dolores thought she was destined for. A comeback was certainly possible from here. Now all she needed to do was light a fire under Ludo's ass to raise the department's profile, though making sure she got most of the credit for any achievements they managed. It was still the same game and Dolores Umbridge was an expert at it. Harry and Hermione were running along the beach, purely from habit their swords were strapped behind them. They'd arrived on the island after the minister's goblin proposal had surfed through the Wizengamot on the wave of positive energy still abounding from Friday's ball. There would be a ceremonial signing of the amended treaty at the end of August with Barchoke taking up his new position then. Dolores Umbridge didn't exactly have many friends so her demotion wasn't even commented on. The island was just under 5 miles around, though it appeared as a group of sandbars on maps, and to the naked eye if you didn't have permission to be here. As their sandals performed a steady slap, slap, slap rhythm on the damp sand, Hermione thought this was her favorite time of the day. Not because of any love of exercise, though she had come to like that part too, this was the time in every day when it was just her and Harry. They had been exercising practically every morning since just after the troll incident last year. Whether it was running around Crawley, the tunnels under Gringotts or the park outside Grimmauld Place, Hermione thought this had 'em all beat. She wondered if Harry could get the room at Hogwarts to recreate this. Now, wouldn't that be something to get her out of a warm bed on a cold winter's morning in the castle? This made her smile, knowing that the mere thought that the young man currently running beside her would be waiting downstairs was all the motivation Hermione Granger would ever need. It probably appeared strange to outsiders how much she depended upon Harry, how much they relied on each other. To them it just felt so natural. She entered King's Cross Station without a friend in the world, and left the express knowing she'd just made the best one either would ever find. Some might also question how quiet Harry could be, but not anyone who really knew him. Before she left for Hogwarts, her mother had given her the boy talk, but none of that applied to Harry. Yes, he certainly struggled sometimes putting his feelings into words. She was sure though that was more to do with being raised as a goblin than any question of immaturity. Harry didn't need words with her. Every time he hugged her or when Hermione looked into those green eyes, those actions spoke volumes to her. That they'd fallen asleep in each other's arms after the ball was somewhat expected. Waking up still there and covered with a quilt showed the enormous trust both sets of parents placed on them, something neither had any intention of breaking. Just being with Harry meant this would have easily have been the best summer of her life. That they had seen and done some amazing things together was just the cherry on top. They could see the beach chalets up ahead, meaning they were near the end of their run. Hermione reached out and took Harry's arm as both of them then slowed to a walk. I've been practicing with my bracelet since your father blood bonded it to me. This drew a wide smile from her boyfriend. None of us actually thought you would wait until we were back at Hogwarts. How is the practice going? Trying not to blush at how well he knew her, Hermione thought a demonstration would be the best way to show Harry. Her bracelet expanded up her arm and wrapped around her shoulder, slipping partially under the sports bra she was wearing. Hermione, that's fantastic. When you fight with a sword, your shield arm is the most exposed. If we can get that shield expanded over your torso, you will be almost as protected as me. Harry praised, followed by taking her in his arms and offering a kiss in reward for her efforts meant Hermione's morning was just perfect. They walked arm in arm the last quarter of a mile to where they were staying. There were 8 chalets beach huts spaced along the white sands. They may have appeared rustic and basic from the outside but stepping onto the porch brought you every comfort magic had to offer. The twins were sitting on one of those porches, eating breakfast and watching the young couple approach. Parvati's eyeballs nearly joined the cereal in her bowl at the sight of Harry in just a pair of shorts. Oh Merlin, how does Hermione resist throwing Harry to the sand and snogging him senseless? Padma just couldn't help but tease her sister. Who says she does resist? This is a big island, they're hardly likely to do it outside their parents' porches. Seeing she was falling for this, Padma changed tactics. There couldn't be the slightest hint of misunderstanding here. Seriously Parv, it's okay to look, just don't ogle and never, ever think of touching. Those two are great friends but anyone trying to come between them will get squashed like a bug. You were brilliant in Rome, but here it will only be us. We'll swim, play games and generally have a great time. Both Harry and Neville will spend most of the week like that, just be their friend and get used to it. We thought the boys were going to have a heart attack the first time they saw us in our bikinis, they got over it pretty quickly. You mean the boys have seen you in that thing you showed me? No, we took 'em off and swam naked. You did what? Dad, I was only kidding with Parv. Emma and Augusta were there all the time. Do you really think those two would let anything happen? Ramrao had walked out and just caught the end of that conversation. Sorry dear, you just scared your old father half to death. I trust the people you were staying with, the young men involved and more importantly, I trust you. This saw Padma rush to hug her dad. I was very proud of you at that ball, the way you helped Harry. He really didn't want to fight that woman. Ramrao really shouldn't have been surprised at his daughter once more springing to the young man's defense. Of course Harry didn't want to fight her, only a fool would want to fight. We're taught fighting should be your last option. We are also taught how to fight, just in case we need that option. Harry would have made mincemeat of her. Dad, I wasn't joking when I said he was scary with that blade. Neville called it right, she would have gotten 1, perhaps 2 spells off and then it would have been all over. It would also have been all over the prophet too, and certainly hurt the chances of the goblin proposal going through the Wizengamot. He kissed the top of his daughter's head. So smart and so brave. Ramrao then pantomimed looking around him at the idyllic setting. Quote ellipsis. And I just love your friends. Parvati felt a twinge of jealousy at the attention her twin sister was receiving, attention that would usually be heading in her direction. It was also strange seeing Padma with the cool friends and the hot date for the ball. Just thinking of the number of witches who would kill to be in her place soon had the smile back on Parvati's face. It would probably take her until Christmas to tell Lavender all that had happened so far, and they still had Tokyo to look forward to. Remus was also watching the young couple approach, the lump of emotion in his throat affecting his voice as he shouted to them. Still up for a lesson, you two? He couldn't get over just how much Harry reminded him of James, the mature version who finally got Lily Evans' attention in the way he wanted. Hermione might look nothing like his friend Lily but, if Remus closed his eyes, it was almost like talking to Lily again as they did their prefect patrols. He'd led a pretty isolated life for the last decade and was struggling to cope with being in company where he was not only accepted but made welcome. Harry waved over at the man who was a friend of his parents, and his godfather's best friend too. They'd gotten to know Remus from staying in Grimmauld Place, gradually building trust and growing to like the person who must have been the quiet one amongst the marauders. We normally have a practice after our morning run so now works for us, if that's all right for you. Remus quickly agreed and by the time he joined them, their swords were laid down as they ran through some shield drills. These two had effected a variation that Remus had never seen before. They would occasionally let a spell through, only to reflect it back at the caster using the metal shields on their forearms. Neville and Padma joined them and were soon practicing shield drills of their own. The 4 friends had quickly drawn a crowd with everyone currently on the island coming out to watch. Barchoke removed some portable ward stones from a bag, creating a shielded area around the 4 who were practicing. Reema's intentions were for them to carry out their normal practice so he could assess what level they were at. They were clearly a lot more advanced than a normal first-year Hogwarts curriculum would provide. When they finished practicing, they switched to duels with the three going after Harry. It soon became obvious that the ward stones were needed to protect the spectators as curses were flying everywhere as they deflected off shields, magical and physical. The trio were working well together, trying to outflank Harry while keeping him busy defending himself from very accurately cast curses. Harry though had a trick up his sleeve and created a powerful blast of air. Normally this would be worse than useless, normally they didn't fight on a beach. Neville and Padma were soon out the fight, sand in their eyes left them sitting ducks to be picked off. Hermione had used her metal shield to protect her eyes but now knew she was outmatched. With Padma and Neville blinded from the sand, even reviving them wouldn't help. She was still figuring out what to do when her boyfriend clipped her with a stunner. She came back round, hearing Padma's voice. Have I told you I hate you today, Harry? If not, consider it done. That sand went bloody everywhere. Neville's answer to that problem was to strip off his shirt and dive into the sea, creating another problem as three young witches were left practically drooling at the two boys on display. Harry was helping a groaning Hermione into a sitting position. You did well. I did not. That was a brilliant use of our environment as a weapon. I'm still taking too long to make my mind up about what I'm going to do. In a real fight, I won't have 5 minutes to think over what action to take. Don't be too hard on yourself, Hermione. The last word was shouted in shock as a wave leapt from the sea and soaked both of them. He'd been concentrating on cheering up Hermione and missed what her wand was doing. They were soon rolling in the sand, soaking wet and roaring with laughter. Both marauders were also wearing wide grins at the prank, but the morning entertainment wasn't over just yet. Barchoke removed 2 dueling dummies from his bag and brought them to full size. I know some of you were very worried at the ball the other night. You may have noticed neither I nor his 3 dueling partners had any concerns on the matter. This was not bravado, we just know Harry's abilities. He would need to have done something really stupid to be in any danger, and Hermione had him focused totally on the task in hand. I'm hoping we could have a little demonstration here this morning, Harry. He pulled Hermione to her feet, getting a kiss for luck before going over to collect his sword. With this amount of people here, he wasn't going to be able to cast with his sword, but Harry should still be able to manage. Even with this handicap, a golden Harry had destroyed both dummies in under 10 seconds. Amelia had probably more experience with fighting than anyone there. Her knees went weak at what she'd just witnessed. She sat on the beach before her legs actually gave way. Ramrao was reminded of Padma's words earlier and found himself in complete agreement with his daughter. Harry would have made mincemeat out of that witch. Dan and Emma had watched the memory of a very real fight against that giant goblin. Harry hacking a couple of dummies just couldn't compare to that. They now had a better idea of what Harry could have done to that witch the other night. No wonder the kids were really upset when they eventually came home. Remus was standing beside Sirius, Henrika and Barchoke, and wasn't slow to let his opinion be known. Whoever you've got teaching these for defense, keep a hold of them. That was simply brilliant, and devastating. Amelia's sitting there trying to figure out how you would defend yourself from such an attack. I doubt she's having any better ideas than me, and all I've got is get the hell out of there as fast as possible. All could see the pride of a father in his son. That is an attack Harry has developed by combining Cursebreaker Weasley's teachings with that of his goblin weapons training and Centurion armor. If it makes you feel any better, we goblins don't know how we would stand up to that either. He used something similar to defeat someone we all thought couldn't be beaten. If any goblin is ever stupid enough to challenge my son in the goblin arena, they probably wouldn't have time to shit themselves before Harry cut him down. Henrika was nodding in agreement. I've been worried about that since reading through your laws, especially the inheritance ones. Harry could be challenged, and now he's a Centurion, you wouldn't be able to represent him in the pit. It has been a worry of mine for a few years, how Harry would cope if I couldn't represent him. I'm not worried anymore. I don't want to say too much here, but Harry was actually holding back there. Remus glanced toward Sirius for confirmation of that ridiculous remark, only to get a nod that left him with only a one-word answer. Shit. Augusta had been concentrating on something else this morning, watching as her grandson threw magic around with accuracy and ease. She also hadn't missed the reaction of the 3 young witches when Neville stripped off his shirt. For the first time in many years, Augusta saw a bright future for the House of Longbottom. She was in a very happy frame of mind when Barchoke approached her, removing a book with a plain brown cover. This will give you something to read while our charges tire themselves out having fun on the beach. It's a preprint copy of a book that won't be available until the 1st of September. All I ask is that you keep it quiet until then. I have a copy for Amelia too, so you can talk to her about it, and I will answer any questions either of you have. As the little goblin walked toward Amelia, it was an intrigued Augusta who opened the book, only to find herself involuntarily sitting down onto the sand as the title hit home. The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. Harry raced into his room, a shower, change of shorts and then breakfast with Hermione the only things on his mind. He didn't know he had a visitor, and one who appeared really excited to see him. Harry Potter, said the creature in a high-pitched voice. So long has Dobby wanted to meet you, sir. Such an honor it is. Thanks for reading. To a big thank you to everyone who gave such a positive response about the project I'm working on. I only hope your expectations aren't too high. Please remember this is a 2-minute film, made by kids to encourage other kids not to do something foolish. Our school sits in deepest, darkest Lanarkshire, Pixar we ain't. Details will follow around the beginning of February. Blood on their hands. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I make no money from my stories, the only payment received is FFN uses taking the time to read my efforts. Since this chapter will push, Harry Crow, through the 2 million views mark, this makes me a wealthy man. As always, thanks for reading. Chapter 35. Quote ellipsis. Harry Potter must not go back to Hogwarts. Dan had been taking mental notes as he'd been listening and rhymed off a few questions that Harry's story had thrown up. Okay, why would he call you Harry Potter? Traveling halfway around the world to give a warning makes no sense either, if he then pops away and doesn't tell you what you're being warned against. I'll probably have more, but that should do to get us started. Harry was eating his breakfast as he had told those around the table of his encounter. All house elves call me Harry Potter. They just see me as a wizard and I can't hide my family ring from them. He was interrupted by Remus almost choking on his coffee. The tears in his eyes this time weren't emotionally driven as he stared at Harry. You're head of House Potter. I thought Sirius was the one who arranged all this. It was actually Sirius who answered. It's okay, people, I'll vouch for Remus. Moony, there are things going on that I can't tell you about, just know that it's in relation to my duties as a godfather. Everyone sitting at this table wants what's best for Harry, I know you do too. Looking around at those present, Remus had to agree with that assessment. Barchoke, the Grangers and Sirius were all self-evident. Henrika provided her own reason. He's my boss, Remus, and a nicer, kinder employer you could never hope to find. Henrika's pout in Harry's direction would have had grown wizards on their knees proposing marriage. He just continued eating breakfast before making a comment that brought the levity back to the table. Still not getting a raise. Barchoke was delighted to see how well his son was dealing with news of this proposed threat. They had expected some backlash from the darker families. Here was an indication of their plotting. Distance would be no problem to a house elf. The fact it was obviously going against its master's wishes gives us some indication of the seriousness of the problem. Harry spotted Hermione putting her knife and fork down in disgust and reached for her hand. Her boyfriend was certain he knew what was bothering her. Hermione, we talked about this, it's all about perception. Can you honestly say that poor creature was not a slave? He was going to shut his own ears in an oven door because he'd disobeyed his master and warned you. We both know this is wrong, Harry. This was an issue they had talked about and obviously not resolved as well as Harry had thought. You know my opinion on slaves, it's every bit as strong as yours. Goblins would rather die than be enslaved, and it's something we would never inflict on anyone else. Yes, House Potter has house elves, but I refuse to consider them slaves. Harry squeezed her hand to prevent the interruption he knew was coming. Potter elves have been part of my family for generations. You've met some of them, would you say they were happy? She was left with no other answer than to agree. Most were so happy to see us, they were in tears. Remembering something he had read, Harry tried a different tactic with his girlfriend. Supposing your mum and dad decided Crawley wasn't for them anymore. Both then joined a charity that saw them treating people for free, would that make them slaves? That's not the same, Harry, mum and dad could leave whenever they wanted. I told my elves the same, and the tears this time were certainly not happy ones. They are doing a job they love and having all their needs taken care of. They neither want nor need wages. Freedom to them means rejection, shame and exile from their family. They look after us and we look after them. Everybody's happy. That's the way it's supposed to work, Hermione. I do agree that there will be wizards who will abuse the system, but I can't do anything about that, yet. You've seen the fight we've had just to kick goblin relations up a notch. Recognition that house elves have rights too will be a much harder fight. It's a challenge I'm willing to fight, but now is not the time. Are you okay with this? Are we good? Those last 3 words cut right through any objection Hermione had left. She needed Harry to believe her on this. Of course we're good, Harry, and I'm sorry if you thought for even 1 second we might not be. I know you would never mistreat elves, just as I know you will be trying to help this Dobby. I wasn't angry at you, just a system that allows a person to legally mistreat someone who's in their care. Along with relief, Harry felt a hand on his shoulder. As well as that gesture of support, Dan had some kind words to match. Just keep talking things out, you two, you won't go far wrong doing that. Now, what do we do about this warning? Harry looked toward his father, getting a nod of agreement before continuing. He thought his father would leave the decision up to him, it didn't hurt to check though. If Hogwarts is going to be in danger, she'll need her champion. I have friends in that castle and 2 new Potter Scholarship students will be looking to me for help with settling in. Unless we get more information, it will be a case of keeping our eyes open. Henrika will be there full time, with Sirius, Cursebreaker Weasley and Master Pitsley paying regular visits. We tell Neville and Padma what we know, but any more could see rumors starting, rumors that would grow arms, legs and a dozen fire-breathing heads before they were done. Hermione was now very worried. She looked at both her parents. I want to return with Harry. We'll have adult support and a method to get out of there if anything happens. Her parents held a conversation with a few glances before Dan spoke. At the moment, all we've got is some vague warning from a creature whose mental stability is at best questionable. We reserve the right to change our mind if more information becomes available, and we'll drag you from that school if we suspect you're not telling us everything. Barchoke interrupted before Dan could say any more. It would actually be me who would be doing the dragging, something I can assure you I would do if I thought they were in danger. I have constant reports from the castle, we won't be missing anything. Hermione was so pleased she was going back to Hogwarts with Harry, she would actually have agreed to just about anything. That evening, the 7 youngsters sat around a campfire on the beach. They'd spent the day swimming, playing games and exploring the island. All were knackered yet far too excited to sleep. Stories of Florida, the Black Sea and Rome weren't helping to lower those excitement levels. That all 7 of them would be going on to Tokyo was also a much discussed topic, especially since Harry had given Susan and Hannah their belated birthday gifts of a shopping voucher. The adults were all lounging back on chairs, glowing lights now festooned the palm-thatched umbrellas that had provided shade earlier in the day. Barchoke, Amelia and Augusta were sitting at the end table, a silencing charm up so their conversation was private. Barchoke, if even half of this is true, it's going to be the biggest political storm ever to hit magical Britain. Amelia, we have checked our facts, it's all true. I had to convince Miss Skeeter not to offer any conjecture, present the facts and let the readers make up their own minds. I take it you two already have. Augusta was fuming, and had struggled to hold her temper until she finished the book. Something that she and Amelia had spent the entire day reading. How can we send our children to that school? Something needs to be done about Dumbledore and his Death Eater sidekick, Snape. Snape is no longer a problem, and we're hoping most parents will have the same reaction as you. We saw this as the best way of getting Dumbledore out the castle, only the parents of the children who attend really have the power to oust him. The head of the DMLE had sat taking notes as she read the book, looking for things she could bring Dumbledore up on charges for. Barchoke's first remark set Amelia's alarm bells ringing. Could you explain why Snape is no longer a problem? That would be because we have him. This news was greeted by silence, so Barchoke explained how events had unfolded. I tricked Dumbledore into revealing Snape's identity. The old wizard still has no idea I have that information. The minister actually helped with this deceit by banning Dumbledore from the ball. I originally had an agreement for Dumbledore to give me the name on that night. I have now put him off until term starts. Augusta loved the deviousness of that. Quote ellipsis. And this book gets published on the 1st of September, leaving Dumbledore nothing to bargain with. You still haven't explained how you ended up with Snape. He decided to run, and was in the process of emptying his vault when we arrested him. The charges were crimes committed in the name of Voldemort, namely costing Harry's parents their lives. He really is a despicable piece of work, the ultimate Slytherin with a foot firmly in both camps. He gleefully told his master, Voldemort, the prophecy, and then nearly soiled himself when he discovered Lily's child matched the very same prophecy. The goblin's disgust was obvious as he talked about Snape. He's convinced himself that Lily Evans was the love of his life, and one day she would have realized this and left James Potter for him. I knew that couple well, and that view is nothing but an utter fantasy of a sick, twisted and delusional mind. He begged Voldemort to spare Lily's life, not caring about James or Harry. Snape didn't trust Voldemort to keep his word though, so he also approached Dumbledore and confessed everything. Dumbledore actually told a group of us in his own office that the power of love would defeat Voldemort. He must have ate up the story of Severus loving Lily with a spoon. A shudder of revulsion passed through the goblin at the thought of all this bartering in the name of love. He was sure neither of those two men had any acquaintance with the emotion. Whether Dumbledore believed him or not, that didn't stop the old wizard blackmailing Snape to spy for him, and he then kept his spy on a short leash at Hogwarts. In return, he told the Wizengamot his spy was no Death Eater. Amelia was almost afraid to ask this question, but knew she had to. What did you do with Snape? We sentenced him to 5 years. At the end of that time, both Neville and Harry will be of age, if they want to take things further. We thought of having him toiling in the dragon pens, but that would be a waste of a resource. He's working in our potions labs. Last report I got he was asking if his sentence could be increased. Apparently he's never been so happy. I can arrange for you to meet him to confirm any facts, provided you can keep it quiet until the book is published. Well, next week I'm in Tokyo with the gang, so it would need to be after that anyway. The minister has already distanced himself and the ministry from Dumbledore, so no damage limitation to be done there. Content that Snape was out of the picture. Augusta wanted to know if the revelation that had her asking for a sherry before noon was really true. Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald were really lovers. Oh yes, that was actually a beautiful piece of investigative journalism by Miss Skeeter in Godric's Hollow. Hermione entered the leaky cauldron on Harry's arm, instantly spotting Professor McGonagall with the two people they were here to meet. The boy was as hyper as a Springer Spaniel being taken for a promised walk. He was literally bouncing with excitement. The girl reminded Hermione of the iconic poster for her favorite musical. There was a haunted look about Luna's eyes that just shouted, Cosette. Her clothes were certainly clean and well-fitting, but of such an odd assortment, Parvati would be left desperate for a chance to restyle the girl. Good morning, Professor. Hi Luna and Colin, I'm Harry. This is Hermione, my girlfriend, and these two are Sirius Black and Professor Hobson. Luna got in before Colin could say anything. Didn't you used to be in the Hobgoblins, Mr. Boardman? My daddy says it was your fault his favorite band split. Oh no, that wasn't me, Luna. Though, if someone had hit me in the ear with a turnip when I was on stage, I probably would have retired too. This earned Sirius a wide smile from the girl, before the flash from Colin's camera blinded half the pub. Mr. Creevy, what did I tell you about the camera? Sorry, Professor McGonagall, I've to save it until I get to Hogwarts. Precisely, your family saw the leaky cauldron and Diagon Alley on your induction day. There is no need for photographs today. But Professor, they never got to meet Harry. It was Harry who answered the excitable boy. That's fine, Colin, but you've now taken a picture for them. We have a lot to do today, including meeting some of our friends for ice cream later. Are we ready to go? Harry felt Hermione squeeze his arm, drawing his attention to Henrika taking Luna by the hand. With Madame Malkin's being their first stop, both were sure she would see Luna kitted out properly for Hogwarts. This was all about getting these two settled into the castle. Turning up in the right clothes was important for making those first impressions. Ollivanders was every bit as creepy as Hermione remembered, though their circumstances didn't help with that. Old Ollivander was already pretty miffed that Harry didn't get a wand from him. The weird wizard actually got quite stroppy when Harry then refused to show the wandmaker his knife. Professor McGonagall had to intervene and remind Ollivander he had 2 customers in his shop. Colin didn't improve things any by insisting he wanted a knife like Harry too. Having left Flourish and Blots to last, they joined with their friends for ice cream before facing their final task. There were now 9 students at the table, the adults wisely taking one of their own. Minerva was fascinated, and a little shocked, with Amelia's tales of Tokyo. Augusta also proclaimed this as her best summer in many years. The Patels both said they'd considered Tokyo and were delighted the girls had the opportunity to go, but they had no complaints about choosing to spend a week in Rome instead. Henrika's comment that Rome was a city she'd always wanted to visit meant Sirius would be arranging that for next year, when she hopefully wouldn't be so busy with Gringotts. Harry was pleased to notice Colin had quietened down somewhat, probably because of all the girls he was now surrounded by. Luna though remained really quiet. Are you looking forward to Hogwarts, Luna? We have Ravenclaws, Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs at this table, so you should at least know someone if you get sorted into one of those 3 houses. We also have friends in Slytherin too, so don't worry about that. Oh, I'm not worried, Harry. I was just thinking it must be lovely to have so many friends. Hermione reached over Harry to take the little blonde's hand. Luna, we want to be your friend too. Hogwarts can be quite daunting when you're new, but I want you to come to any of us if you need anything. Luna looked around the table, seeing nods of agreement from Susan, Hannah, Neville and the twins. Her face broke into a simply beautiful smile. Yes, Harry, I'm really looking forward to Hogwarts. They headed into a crowded bookstore, noticing the person whose books made up this year's defense list was holding a book signing. Since they had no intention of purchasing those books, they didn't wait in that queue. Hermione was of course on Harry's arm, at least she was until someone shoved her out the way. Bless my soul, the boy who lived. Smile, Harry, together we rate the front paran. Harry didn't know who this perfumed and perfectly coiffed Ponce was, but nobody treated Hermione like that. An arm had went around his shoulder and Harry decided it was time to put some of Reema's recent lessons into practice. He grabbed the pinky of this hand, twisting it sharply backward resulted in a girly squeal of pain from its owner. Freeing himself from the arm, Harry then swept the man's feet from under him while still keeping a painful grip on that little finger. The wizard hit the floor with a thump and Colin still didn't get to see Harry's knife. The mere threat of having his pinky broken was enough to have Lockhart squealing like a banshee. Nobody touches Hermione, apologize, before I really lose my temper. That girly voice was now shouting sorry over and over again. A blinding flash had Harry looking in Colin's direction, only to see innocence reflected back at him. The phantom photographer had now lost himself in the busy shop. Harry quickly went to check on his girlfriend, and then discovered this git had a hide on him that would put a Ukrainian ironbelly to shame. I would just like to thank Harry here for helping me with that little demonstration, and take this opportunity to announce he's going to be seeing a lot more of me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I, Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile, have great pleasure and pride in announcing that this September, I will be taking up the post of defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry couldn't help but wonder at the gullibility of witches and wizards. He'd just kicked this nutter's ass, yet here were people who'd witnessed that applauding like loons at the announcement he would be teaching their children. Supposedly teaching the very thing he was obviously shit at, defense. Harry waited until the applause had died down before bursting this clown's bubble. Excuse me, but you appear to have been misinformed. I have a private defense tutor, one I am very happy with. I will not be in your class. He took a quick look around and recognized some of the faces in the crowd. Guys, anyone who had Cursebreaker Weasley for defense last year with me will have the same chance again come September. You also don't need to buy these books as we won't be using them. An autobiography as well as prescribing the defense texts for all 7 years. Someone must really need the money. Gilderoy was trying not to panic, and not doing a very good job of it. Oh come now, Harry, don't tease these good people. Surely you and these lovely young ladies would rather have me teach you defense. He was going for a reassuring smile, but it came over as lecherous leer, one that saw Neville's arm slip protectively around Padma. Parvati summed it up for all of them. You're right, it really is no contest. We'll take Professor Weasley every time. He at least wears less makeup than me. This drew laughter from the Weasley contingent in the crowd before Gilderoy found himself faced with a trio of very formidable witches. Oh dear, Minerva, it would appear Albus has really scraped the bottom of the barrel this time. The head of the DMLE was studying Lockhart intensely, as if waiting on a suspect to crack and confess his crimes. Augusta agreed with her friend. A defense professor who puts all 7 of his own books on the required list, for every year mind, it's a disgrace. Is he going to be teaching the 1st and 7th years the same course? Minerva also took Hogwarts' newest professor to task. Lockhart, I don't remember you being awarded a defense OWL, far less an Order of Merlin. Centurion Crow's award was front-page news, yours seems to have slipped past unnoticed. Gilderoy missed McGonagall's implied insult, having just noticed the most gorgeous creature he had ever seen in his life. Who is that? That is Professor Hobson, our history teacher. Gilderoy was thinking there was more to this job than book sales when McGonagall went and spoilt it for him. She is here with her boyfriend, Lord Sirius Black. The name alone was enough to strike terror in Gilderoy. He would be giving that witch and her dark wizard of a boyfriend a wide berth. Harry was now enjoying the show, watching as the 3 witches tore this character to shreds. When he felt a tug on his sleeve, Colin had a question. He doesn't look a very good teacher. Harry, can we get our lessons from Cursebreaker Weasley too? I'm sorry Colin, he's a very busy man. He wouldn't have time to teach first year as well. Colin nodded in understanding but had another solution to the problem. Couldn't you teach us then, as extra lessons? You beat him without even using magic, we would much rather learn from you. Luna looked at him pleadingly too. You said to ask if we needed anything. Hermione liked the idea. We could make it a club. It would need to be sponsored by a professor though. Henrika jumped in before Lockhart could offer. I got that covered, we just need to look at the new timetable and pick a suitable time. The Weasley twins then got in on the act. Hey, is this club just for firsties? We don't want to buy his books either. Gilderoy stood helpless as the entire event slipped away from him. This was already a publicity disaster, and then McGonagall really put the boot in. Last year, Professor Weasley held revision classes for our students sitting OWLs and NEWTs, leading to Hogwarts' best defense results in many a year. I shall personally be contacting Ambassador Barchoke in the hope we can call on this special favor again when the exams approach. The cheer this received from those Hogwarts students in the shop had Gilderoy wanting to cry. Just who was this Weasley person, and how could he possibly be more popular than him? Molly was standing there with an armload of books she now wasn't sure she wanted signed. Harry had easily defeated this famous wizard, giving rise to the first ray of doubt. The reaction of the students toward her son, Bill, was a heart-warming moment for the mother. She'd heard from Emma how highly regarded Bill was amongst the 4 he was training. Apparently that regard ran a lot deeper than just 4 students. Her son was going to be an assistant ambassador, one who worked with his father. Her 2 eldest sons had made career choices she hadn't agreed with at the time, but both were now proving successful in their own right. Molly was going to have a lot of time on her hands when all her children left for Hogwarts. She was planning on using some of that for quiet contemplation. The world they lived in was undoubtedly changing, and Molly had brought 7 children into the very same world. She was not going to be left behind like those Roman relics young Harry mentioned in his speech. Molly intended to talk to Bill about this. Ginny was ecstatic. Lessons from Harry and his friends was certainly something she would be putting her name against. She also hadn't missed Harry's reaction when that fool pushed Hermione out the way. He'd been calm and controlled at the ball, but hurting Hermione instantly put an end to that. Harry had their new defense professor on the floor in seconds, and it certainly wasn't planned, no matter what Lockhart said. Amelia stirred the pot some more by pulling Minerva aside for a whispered conversation. When you're speaking to Barchoke about Bill, ask him for a copy of a book that will be released in a week or so. Gilderoy Lockhart teaching defense might be the least of your worries at Hogwarts this year. After completing their shopping, plans were made to meet up on the platform before getting on the express. McGonagall would take both her charges home while Sirius and Henrika dropped theirs off at Gringotts. Neville and his Gran were with Harry and Hermione, both eager to see if there was any sign of improvement with either Longbottom currently undergoing treatment. The young couple left the Longbottoms. Their intended destination was much deeper into Gringotts. They heard their target long before setting eyes on him, the loud shouts and clangs of clashing metal reverberating through the tunnels. Harry led his girlfriend in, both standing respectfully against the wall and waiting to be called. He'd seen what could happen to those who interrupted a lesson. It was not something Harry wished to experience personally. Finally the bellow came in the direction. So Centurion Crow, what can I do for you? Harry and Hermione both came forward and knelt before the large goblin. Master Sharpshard, a gift from a very grateful student. Harry presented his mentor with a katana. The handle, guard and scabbard were all jet black, but the blade was polished to a silver mirror finish. This is exquisite craftsmanship. Centurion, where did you get this? Gringotts in Tokyo. They tried to palm me off with the usual junk they sell to tourists. That was until I told them it was for my sensei, Master Sharpshard. Mentioning your name had a profound effect. They all wanted to be the maker who supplied Master Sharpshard with a katana. Even after leaving, he's still sucking up. Teacher's little pup. The insult was said loud enough for Harry to hear, and sarcastically enough to more than imply an insult. Harry had cursed his luck when he first spotted just who was in this class. He had no intention though of just kneeling there and swallowing this insult. Why Dragonbreath, I didn't know you missed me. Speaking of pups, I see you still have the manners of a dog, poking that wet nose in where it's not wanted and whining like a bitch. I'm also amazed you can hear what we're saying when you're all the way over there, especially with those tiny ears of yours. Dragontooth's insults had the class sniggering. Harry's reply had them laughing out loud. Insulting a goblin's name, ear size and nose in one go was impressive. The goblin those insults were aimed at didn't think so. You and your ugly human bitch strut around Gringotts wearing our sacred blades. You are nothing more than a festering boil on our proud nation, a boil that needs to be lanced before it poisons all of us. Harry now stood and faced his antagonist. Everyone here knows you possess neither the skill nor courage to do that lancing, Dragonbreath. We can settle this right now, and I'll even allow you to choose 2 friends to help, that is if you have 2 friends. The glint of triumph in the goblin's eyes alerted Harry he'd been duped. He was just about to find out how badly he'd been trapped. Quote ellipsis. And I will allow your human bitch to fight by your side. Let's see if she can even hold a blade. At that, Hermione was by Harry's side, surprising everyone in the class by answering in their own tongue. I accept. Fighting a female would appear to be about your limit. Harry then pulled her to the side for a quick word while the class prepared for the fight. Hermione, this isn't wooden swords we'll be fighting with. The duel doesn't finish until someone is bleeding. I know, Harry. I also know he baited you into this. I wasn't having you losing face over me. It would probably be a deadly insult to both parties, but he reminded me so much of Draco Malfoy. His uncle was one of those my father fought in the pit. To say there is bad blood between us would be a massive understatement. They'll be cocky and showing off to their friends. Stick to defense and I will take him out as quickly as I possibly can. Your dad's gonna kill me for getting you into this, and then your mum will dance on my dead body. Hermione gave him a kiss for luck before enlarging and fitting her shield on her left arm. She could feel her bracelet expanding up the same arm, obviously recognizing the danger she was in. Harry had been teaching her for a year, but these goblins would have a lot more training and experience than that. This would also give her an indicator of just where she was with a blade. Hermione could only hope it wouldn't be too painful a lesson. Like Hermione's top, Harry's t-shirt was loose enough to cope with his armor under it. Using his armor wasn't really fair to his opponents, but Harry didn't give a shit. Hermione was in this fight. He intended to make it as short as possible. He knew the class would expect him to use his armor. No goblin would ever surrender an advantage they had in a fight. Master Sharpshard found himself thrust into the role of referee. He called the 5 combatants forward. There were no flowery speeches, he just told it like it was. First blood, fight. The trio of goblins' intentions became apparent at once. All 3 rushed at Hermione. Harry managed to intercept 2 of them, but Dragontooth got through. Thankfully he was showboating for the audience, giving Hermione time to block with her shield. This form of attack also left the goblin wide open to the counter. Hermione took her gifted opportunity. With a triumphant cry, her thrust caught Dragontooth off guard and her blade nicked his shoulder, clearly drawing blood. She glanced round to see Harry had already dealt with one, and just about to dispatch the other. That was her mistake. With her guard now down, Dragontooth lashed out at Hermione, his blade slicing diagonally across her torso between shoulder and hip before Harry hit him like a golden version of the Hogwarts Express. Weapons forgotten, Harry was pummeling the shrieking goblin with his fists until the massive form of Master Sharpshard pulled him off. Harry then remembered what happened and turned to see Hermione trying to piece her clothing back together with her wand, her repaired clothing once more covering the golden webbing that had prevented her being seriously injured. A bloody Dragontooth couldn't believe he hadn't even damaged the human bitch. She's wearing Centurion armor, that's an instant death sentence. Harry's only thought was to protect Hermione. For this to work, he needed to change her status. Everyone clearly saw my family design on that armor, it's not Centurion. Hermione is my mate, and therefore part of my family. The entire class, including the instructor, were now gaping at this revelation from Harry. It was time for some proof. He retrieved his sword from where he had dropped it and sliced open his palm. Realizing what Harry was doing, Hermione didn't hesitate for a second. She used her own blade to mirror Harry's actions. Their bloody hands were then joined, clasped palm to palm, as Harry said the words. You are mine, and I am yours. Hermione's eyes were sparkling with tears that the pain in her hand played no part in, as she gave the required response. You are mine, and I am yours. A silver glow started at their hands and spread up their arms. It had turned golden by the time both were enveloped by it, clearly showing that magic had accepted the vows. The young couple leaned forward to kiss each other, neither noticing their hands were completely healed. With his arm around Hermione's waist, Harry once more turned his attention back to Dragontooth. Today was nothing more than a thinly disguised assassination attempt on my mate. Even when she beat you in the fight, you proceeded with your plan. You will answer to me for that, in the pit. Harry and Hermione then bowed to Master Sharkshard before leaving the class, a class that had just descended into utter chaos. Hermione waited until they were out of earshot before speaking to Harry. What just happened in there? In the eyes of the nation, we are now mates. That bastard will face me in the pit for his attack on you, that entire family has no honor. The only question now is who will kill me first, my father or yours. Hermione though was concentrating on something else. Why does this pit sound so ominous? They were heading straight for Barchoke's office when Harry supplied the answer she dreaded hearing. When two goblins enter the pit, only one comes out alive. Hermione's legs may have kept going but her mind had shut down at that part. This had to be done publicly, it had to be seen to be scrupulously fair and it had to be done today. Ragnik had already heard from Barchoke that Harry wasn't backing down an inch, with Sharkshard confirming that Dragontooth had struck after being defeated in the duel. The blow was also of such a nature and ferocity that Harry's claims of an assassination attempt could neither be ignored or dismissed as fanciful. Word of this incident had spread like wildfire through the nation and the benches around the court were already almost full. Both families were now in front of him, Miss Granger at her mate's side. Time to get these proceedings started. Centurion Crow, you have made some very serious charges and invoked trial by combat. Do you wish to change your mind? No, Director, I wish to proceed as our law dictates. Having expected no other answer, Barchoke addressed the court. Master Sharkshard was present during the entire event. I trust there are none here who would question the validity of his memories. No one wanted to make that challenge, so they settled down to watch Sharkshard's memory of the incident broadcast. Some laughter at the initial insults soon died down as everyone concentrated on the fight itself. All goblins had at least some training in weapons. This knowledgeable audience clearly saw the overconfident boy showing off to his class, only to get nicked on the shoulder by his less skillful but more focused opponent. His actions then set off roars of protest at a cowardly attack, an attack that could really have only one design, to cause major damage to this female. There was total silence as they witnessed two magical humans both become bonded as mates by the most goblin of ceremonies. How was my son supposed to know they were mates? I think it's disgusting humans allow this so young. He was cut off by Barchoke, in no mood to make any concessions whatsoever. My son and his mate's honor was clearly displayed throughout this incident for all to see, as was your offspring's cowardice and treachery. Like us, the humans consider these two far too young to officially become mates. They have already made the choice known though, a choice we just witnessed being accepted by magic. Both certainly intend to wait until they are the appropriate age before taking the next step. This issue aside, Miss Granger was also very clearly under the protection of my house. If the councillor wishes to refute this protection, my family stands ready to instigate a blood feud. With that, the lines in the sand were now very clearly drawn. Dragontooth's father was raging at his son for being so blatant, and getting caught. That didn't mean he was going to stand back and let him be sorted in the pit. Even from watching Sharkshard's memory, the result of any such contest couldn't be in any doubt. Were Dragontooth to face Crow, it would be like sending a lamb to slaughter. My son is not of age, I claim the right to nominate a champion on his behalf. Harry then spoke up. Your son is over a year older than me, but I'm still prepared to step into the pit. That's your father's decision to make. I will work within the law to protect my son. Since my mate has already defeated your son, I understand this cowardice. Know this though, I will fight your nominated champion. After I defeat him, I swear I will cut your son's ears off if he ever comes anywhere near my mate again. Spurred on by the gasps that this most severe of threats had drawn from the crowd, Dragontooth's father turned on Barchoke. Are you going to stand there and let this boy issue threats, and even consider letting him enter the pit of justice? My son is a centurion who has also been awarded the highest honor the Ministry of Magic has to offer. He doesn't need to hide behind his father. As to making threats, let me reiterate my son's words. I will not stand idly by and watch these two young people be sniped at by those who think they are better. His mate already has friend of our nation status and can clearly be seen to be learning our ways. My son has publicly sworn on his blood to defend the nation, and will today fight in the pit of justice on a matter of goblin honor. What more would you want of them? Ragnik really had no option. He may be the director, but the law had to be obeyed. I find the claim against Dragontooth to be proven, and therefore I have no reason to block this honor duel. I find Dragontooth's cowardly attack to be particularly disgusting, but again I'm powerless to intervene and grant him the champion his father has requested. Now let's get this over with. Hermione found they were quickly joined by Master Sharkshard. Bear up, lass, they will be watching your behavior almost as closely as that of your mate. Crow, only I know what you are really capable of, now is the time to display it for all to see. Not only must you win, you must do it in a manner that ensures you and your mate can safely walk around Gringotts. Scrape a victory and you might as well declare yourself a wizard now, because they would be queuing up to get you in the pit, and they all now know just how to achieve that. A threat to your mate has you rushing headlong to defend her. This fight is not just for your safety, Hermione's life is threatened here too. Harry nodded, his face a mask of concentration. He bowed to Master Sharkshard, kissed a trembling Hermione before bowing to his father. It was time. Hermione knew Barchoke and Master Sharkshard were offering words of comfort as she sat wedged between the two. She didn't hear any of it. Her entire being was focused on Harry, and the large goblin that waited on him in the appropriately named pit. The enclosure had a sandy base, better for absorbing spilt blood, about 60 feet in diameter and with walls at least 4 feet deep. While the entire arena was lit entirely by flaming torches, Harry's golden armor made him easily visible, though the massive battleaxe the goblin held certainly grabbed Hermione's attention too. They stood about 20 feet apart, bowing to each other before Ragnik set the proceedings underway. To the death, fight. Apparently, normal behavior for these fights predetermined that the two combatants would circle each other, probing to assess their opponent's strengths and weaknesses before making a move. The big goblin had other ideas. He thought he was facing a human child and wanted this over with quickly, unknowingly playing straight into his opponent's greatest strength. Dragontooth's champion was merely hired muscle, not too smart, and the large bag of gold offered had instantly destroyed any reservations the greedy goblin might have had about his opponent. He also wasn't too bothered about the centurion armor his opponent possessed, positive his battle axe would penetrate it. With a roar, the goblin charged as he swung the great axe in what would be a killing blow should it connect. In a move that Hermione had seen Harry use on Master Sharpshard, the sword of Gryffindor sliced right through the shaft of the goblin's axe. Harry was moving quicker than seemed possible. Having sliced through the shaft, Harry continued his move and pirouetted on his planted foot, bringing his sword back around so the goblin's own charge saw him skewer himself on the ancient goblin blade. The point of Harry's sword entered the charging goblin's throat, and exited the back of his neck, severing his spine on the way out. With his spinal cord severed, the goblin's body hit the sand like a sack of shit, with Harry's sword still embedded in situ. With the life visibly leaving his opponent's eyes, Harry retrieved the damaged axe and knelt beside his dying opponent, laying the weapon gently on the goblin's chest. You faced me and fought with honor, unlike those you championed. When the goblin was finally dead, Harry removed his sword from the body and left the pit with his head held high, to utter silence. Hermione wanted to race straight to him. She'd never seen Harry more in need of someone to hold on to. She really needed one of Harry's hugs herself. There was probably only her and his father who could see how much this was costing Harry. Watching as Harry fought a duel to the death was certainly no picnic for them either. Barchoke held her arm and Hermione was thankful for the support. She didn't think she could have moved otherwise. Harry took Hermione's other arm as the three of them left the still silent chamber. It was Ragnik who finally broke the silence after the party had left. I know there were those amongst you who silently questioned my sanity when I made Crow a centurion. I hope he has answered those doubters for both of us today. Master Sharpshard's opinion is that Crow will someday become one of our greatest ever warriors, and he fought today purely as a goblin. By using the magic he possesses, Crow could have ended this contest before his opponent even got near enough to use his axe. This was more than enough to convince those watching that Centurion Crow was someone you wanted on your side, never facing you from the other side of the pit. The rumors that he had defeated Master Sharpshard were now being believed. How do you fight someone that moves twice as quick as you do? And still has magic to call on if he needs it? Harry and Hermione managed to hold themselves together while Barchoke led them back to their dwelling. The door was barely closed before both of them collapsed sobbing into each other's arms. As Barchoke watched his son and new daughter come apart at the horror they'd just performed witnessed, the goblin took a leaf from Emma's book. Laying the couple down in the seating area, he gently tucked a blanket around them both. He would need to leave them like that for a few moments. Harry and Hermione needed the Grangers here as quickly as possible. Emma's gentle touch and soothing words were required while he would then attempt to explain to Dan exactly what had happened here today. The front page picture of Harry standing over a clearly terrified Gilderoy Lockhart was not how Albus had hoped his new defense professor would announce himself to the country. It had all been so carefully set up too. Book signing, large crowd and guaranteed media coverage. How could that go so disastrously wrong? It was only when he opened the paper and his old eyes caught the vivid advert for a soon-to-be-published book that he sensed the real danger. The title alone had his stomach in a knot. He could see The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore becoming an instant bestseller. When the phrase, "will reveal all," jumped out at him, Albus felt his bowels loosening. Thanks for reading. House of Silence. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I write purely for my own enjoyment, making no money from this venture and claim only my imagination as my own. I always strive to be original but, given the amount of HP fan fiction out there, almost everything has probably been done before. Chapter 36. Both fathers glanced up as Emma re-entered the room. They're sleeping now, but only fitfully. What the hell happened today? I thought it would be better if I showed you. Sharpshard knew I'd want the memory, even after how things turned out. I'll be translating so please save any questions until the memory is finished. We'll be here all night if necessary, but I promise I'll answer every one of them. They watched Harry and Hermione's visit to Master Sharpshard, with Barchoke filling in the background when he wasn't directly translating. Emma had to stuff her fist in her mouth to halt a scream that would have woken the sleeping couple after Dragontooth sliced at Hermione when she wasn't looking. Both were enthralled at the glow that covered the couple, and neither argued with Harry's assessment that this was nothing more than a grasped opportunity to seriously harm the daughter. After the memory finished playing, Dan took a moment before saying anything. There were things happening here beyond his comprehension and he didn't want to begin shouting. He had the feeling that once he started shouting, he wouldn't be able to stop. After watching the daughter almost get disemboweled with a sword, Dan felt he was entitled to do a bit of shouting. Barchoke, I thank you, Harry, and every deity I can think of for that bracelet on my daughter's wrist. Please understand though, a very big part of me is currently wishing I'd kicked McGonagall's ass right out our door when she pulled that, "your daughter's a witch" shit. Hermione seems to be lurching from one life-threatening incident to another. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Emma shifted so she could put her arm around her husband, seeking and gaining comfort. She had a question she wanted answered before her husband exploded. What was the cut hands and the golden glow all about? In the eyes of some goblins, Hermione is thought of as a lesser being, much like some of the more radical purbloods try to look down on her. Sadly, the nation is not without its bigotry too. Harry claiming they were mates instantly changed her status. Their public display of bonding will stop any and all harassment. This was greeted with silence so Barchoke continued talking. When my mate and I bonded, we glowed right up our arms and into our torsos, and that was considered a very strong bonding. What those two did today, well, I've never seen anything like it. Dan's voice was very quiet as he asked a question that had no place in any sane conversation about two 12-year-olds. Are you trying to tell me they're married? Inside the nation, they will be considered mates. Outside of that, no, though you might find the occasional elf referring to Hermione as Lady Potter. This was the final straw, the straw that broke Dan. Emma, go get Hermione, we're going home. Dan, calm down a moment and think. How would we even get home? Calm was something Dan wasn't capable of at the moment. We'll fucking walk if we need to, anything to get our baby away from here. Barchoke held his hands up in an attempt to stop Dan's imminent eruption. There will be no need for anyone to walk. I need to show you something else first, then, if you still want to go, I'll take you home. What you just watched was unfortunately only Act 1, it was the second act that has our children really upset. You need to see this so you both know what you're dealing with. He then played his own memory of what happened next, to stun silence from the Grangers. Barchoke was attempting to accentuate the positive from this. As Harry's mate, Hermione can now walk around Gringotts with impunity. No one will want to challenge Harry now. Dan wasn't buying into that, he was looking at the situation from a whole different perspective. You made my little girl sit and watch that. Emma, get Hermione, we're going home right now. Dan, wait, let's discuss this. Emma could only watch helplessly as her husband stormed right past her. He returned dragging a sleepy and shocked Hermione with him, a Hermione who, now seeing her father's intentions, began fighting with him every step of the way and screaming for Harry. The boy who had been so decisive in battle earlier stood holding onto the door jamb, totally lost at what to do next. Barchoke, we're ready to go home. Hermione's cries of anguish were being totally ignored by her father. Harry, I'll be right back, son. Hermione's father has decided she's going home for the evening. Somehow, I don't think you're invited. Barchoke took Emma's hand before grabbing Dan firmly by the arm and portkeying the Granger family home. Emma finally entered the lounge. She sat on a chair well away from her husband, not even looking in his direction, far less speaking to him. Is she asleep? After crying for over 3 hours, she's exhausted. I don't know if I would class that as sleep. She'll understand. How can she understand? I don't understand. She watched Harry kill that goblin today. Daniel Granger, you have become the thing I hate most, a fucking hypocrite. You tell your daughter to talk things out and then, when you really need to sit and talk things out, you go all Captain Caveman and drag Hermione out of there. Those two have had a pretty traumatic day. You increased the trauma tenfold by your actions. I will not have my daughter married before her 13th birthday. Ah, so now we come to the real reason. Did you honestly think those two were treating this as their wedding night? Emma was shaking her head, trying to rationalize what happened tonight. We've both seen what that boy can do. He could have stopped you tonight with one hand tied behind his back. The only reason he didn't was out of respect, a respect you lost tonight. Did you notice you were suddenly relegated to Hermione's father by Barchoke? You lost both their respect, along with Hermione's, and mine too. Hermione will come around when we enroll her in a new school, one that doesn't have trolls. You can't do that, your daughter is a witch and we signed that right over to Barchoke. Good luck with getting him to rescind it, especially since neither Hermione or I will agree with you on that point. You will also have to arrange cover for my patients. I'll be staying home with Hermione until it's time for her to return to Hogwarts. Emma noticed their holiday photographs still sitting in packets. They had planned on placing the best ones in an album of their summer holidays. She grabbed them and threw the lot at her husband. The packets opens in flight, scattering pictures all around him. There is the girl you profess to love. You'll notice she's smiling in every single one of those pictures. I suggest you put them in frames. It's probably the last time you'll see her smile. She asked me why her dad would rip her heart out. I had no answer to give her. You needn't bother figuring one out, tell her later. Hermione has no intention of speaking to you ever again. She got up to leave but had a parting comment for her husband. If you had just heard Hermione, you might be able to ride this one out. She was looking into Harry's eyes as you dragged her out of there. She'll never forgive you for the pain you caused him tonight. I'll be sleeping in Hermione's room. Try not to waken us when you leave in the morning. Dan was left sitting there, surrounded by memories of a wonderful summer, a summer that just turned to shit. He really wanted a stiff drink but had patients tomorrow. A good few of Emma's patients would end up in his chair too. He hoped things looked better in the cold light of day. They appeared pretty fucked up at 2 a.m. Albus hated getting old. His knees were bloody killing him. He'd been kneeling in the fireplace all morning, with no results to show for all the pain. All he could discover was a company called Alethea Printing would be distributing these cursed books to the shops, and handling the mail orders through Gringotts. The adverts in the profit were vague enough to generate interest yet not give Albus clues about what to expect. They were also handled through Gringotts. Someone was being very clever here, knowing Albus had no contacts with the goblins. He hoped they weren't being too clever, since Alethea meant truth, something he was especially averse to. 5 incredibly long days, 5 of the worst days of his life. It wasn't the coming home to no dinner being made for him. He got the message loud and clear when there was no coffee or breakfast ready in the morning. It wasn't even having to iron his own shirts or sleeping alone. That his daughter would leave any time he entered a room really hurt, but that still wasn't the worst. It was the silence that was slowly killing Dan. His wife did speak, but about nothing of consequence. Hermione hadn't uttered a word in his presence since that night. The Grangers had always been a family that talked, and he was the one to shatter that trait into tiny pieces. Hermione had thrown herself into more intensive training. Dan suspected it was just to keep out of his way. She would be out running when he got up for work, and then again when he came home. If tonight followed its usual pattern, she would come in from her run and then practice in the garden with a wooden sword, her real one being left behind in Gringotts. She entered the house, grabbed a bottle of water and headed straight for the garden, all the while ignoring her father's very existence. He watched through the window as she practiced against imaginary foes. Dan wondered how many of them would wear his face. It was long past time to take some action, so he headed out there. Hermione, you can't ignore me forever. Hermione seemed to be making a right good attempt at that very feat, causing Dan to lose his temper. Hermione, I am your father and you will stop this nonsense. He reached for her shoulder, only to find his hand batted away with her practice sword as Hermione spun to face him. Don't touch me. Why you? As Dan once more reached for his daughter, he found Hermione's wooden sword was far quicker than he was. I said, don't touch me. Each word was emphasized by a blow or a poke with the pole. Hermione though began to lose her own temper and didn't stop there. Tell me, why? At this point Emma arrived and grabbed a now crying Hermione, gently leading her back inside the house. Dan was stunned at his daughter's actions, but what hurt far more than any blows was the look of loathing in her eyes as she was doing it. He was sitting under the tree when Emma returned. I've really fucked up big time, haven't I? His wife didn't think he was looking for an answer to that question. Instead, she told him something she'd learned from Hermione. Between the incidents that day, Barchoke had a little time with them. He sat Hermione down and said, while the conditions weren't exactly ideal, he was delighted to welcome her to the family. Goblin custom decreed that she was now considered his daughter too, something he was going to do his very best to be worthy of. Compare those actions to yours and then answer your own question. Emma then made her own position on this matter crystal clear. I carried that girl for 9 months, Dan, nearly died giving birth to her. You may be prepared to allow your pigheadedness to ruin your relationship with our daughter, I am not. You may have valid reasons for what you did, but there can be no excuse for the way you carried it out. One way or another, our entire future is tied to these people. You dragged Hermione out of there as if Harry had some fatally contagious disease, a disease you desperately didn't want your daughter to catch. I don't know how, or even if, you can come back from that. Emma walked back into the house, leaving Dan wishing the ground would open up and swallow him. Albus was sitting at breakfast but not eating. Today was his favorite day of the entire year, the day the witches and wizards of tomorrow came back into his sphere of influence. Last year's 1st of September was marred by a certain goblin-raised boy attending Hogwarts, that could pale into insignificance compared to this blasted book. Today's headline in the Prophet was all about the new Goblin Treaty being signed yesterday. He dreaded to think what tomorrow's front page would be. There was also the question of how to get his hands on a copy. He could hardly walk into Flourish and Blots and buy one. Having the book owl delivered was also fraught with danger. He was certain the media would pick up on this. As to getting someone to buy it for him, there was really only Hagrid he could trust to carry that out. If he asked Hagrid, Albus might as well place his own advert in the Prophet saying he'd read the book. There was also the deniability aspect to consider. Since I wouldn't read such a thing, I can't really comment on it, was an attractive option. Knowledge though was like the most addictive of drugs to Albus, just something that he had to have. His problem was actually solved from the most unlikely of sources. Minerva dropped a plain covered book beside his untouched plate. A friend arranged a pre-release copy for me. Do Hogwarts a favor, leave before you drag us down with you. No more words were exchanged or needed. The book found its way into Albus's pocket as he headed for his office, leaving his breakfast still untouched. He needed to do some serious reading before the express arrived. There was excitement in the Granger household today, something that had been sadly missing in the 10 or so days following the happenings in Gringotts. Emma entered her daughter's room to see a hyper Hermione with a big smile on her face. Quote ellipsis. And I thought you were excited about going to Hogwarts last year. Both smiled at that, and recognized Hermione was a totally different girl from the one that boarded the train last September. Their problem stemmed from one member of the family not realizing just how much she had changed. Hermione, your dad wants to go with us to the station. No. Hermione, I think he now realizes what he's done. He has no idea what he's done, nor does he care. Harry had just killed someone to keep me safe. You can't understand what that did to him. We were both in a bad place but coping. As long as we were together we could handle it. He took that away from us. Emma could see the determination in her daughter's eyes. It was as she'd feared. Anyone hurting Hermione drew a predictable response from Harry. Their daughter though was every bit as protective of her mate. She'd had long conversations with her daughter about what this meant, and had been greatly relieved to learn the answer. In the short term, not very much. They had no intention of letting any outside factors sway the pace at which their relationship developed. Emma was further relieved to hear her daughter say that she would probably have to be the one to instigate any further steps. Harry was far too much of a gentleman to ever be presumptuous. Hermione wasn't finished with her rant, though was trying her best not to let anger get the better of her. Every letter I send, I'm continually having to reassure Harry I don't think any less of him, something a hug would do instantly. He took that away from us too. Harry has had to live all his life knowing his only living relatives didn't want him. He now has another name to add to that list, a man he actually respected. Until I can make sure Harry's okay, and that was still good, there will be no sympathy coming from me. Emma could clearly see what was really behind Hermione's belligerent attitude. Her father had very deliberately attempted to drive a wedge between her and Harry. There would be no steps toward forgiveness possible until their daughter could confirm his attempt had failed. Hermione wouldn't be able to do that to her satisfaction until she actually got to talk with Harry, and of course hug the boy to within an inch of his life. Your dad is still insisting on going to the station with us. You may be able to use magic that stops him coming into your room. I don't think you'll be able to do that for King's Cross Station. Unless you have another method of getting to the platform, I don't see you avoiding this. Hermione's smile was almost predatory. Betsy. A small pop announced the arrival of an obviously female elf. Yes, mistress, how can Betsy help? She knelt to be at eye level with the eager little servant. Betsy, would it be possible for me and my mother to be taken to platform 9 3/4? Oh easy, mistress. Just call for Betsy when you are ready to leave. With another pop, she was gone, leaving Hermione to speak with her surprised mother. Since Harry and I performed the goblin ceremony of mates, the Potter elves call me mistress. Betsy is my personal elf. She was originally terrified of me, thinking I wanted to set her free. Seeing the hurt I was causing her forced me to change my mind about elves. Harry was right, it's just a matter of perspective. Betsy is part of our family and I will treat her as such. She's happiest when busy taking care of me and sometimes I'm even deliberately messy now. I will be making my own way to the express. You're welcome to come with me, he is not. Emma left, knowing this news would go down as well as telling a patient they needed root canal treatment. It would be painful and costly, but Dan really had only himself to blame. Harry was beginning to lose it. Serious, if this is your idea of a prank, I'm really not in the mood. A bemused godfather stuck his head in the door. What's up, pup? Marauder's honor, I wouldn't dream of pulling a prank on you today. My stuff keeps shifting around the room when my back is turned. I'm trying to get ready but it's almost like something doesn't want me to go. Realization hit Harry at that point. Quote ellipsis. Or someone. Potter elves to me. Multiple pops saw Harry's bedroom at Grimmauld soon fill with elves. I think we have an intruder. I don't want him harmed, just caught and brought to me. It was only seconds later that three elves returned. The trio also had a hold of a struggling Dobby. Stand still, Dobby. No one here wants to hurt you, but this has to stop. Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts. Terrible things will happen there, terrible things. Hermione will be on that train, and terrible things will happen to anyone trying to stop me joining her, understand? Dobby was about to say that he received threats like this on a daily basis. That was until he looked into those green eyes. Dobby now knew he'd never been threatened like this before. Terrible things would indeed befall anyone trying to keep Harry Potter from his mate. He nodded his understanding. I understand you're trying to help, Dobby, I really do. This is not the way though. If you can give me any clues or specific warnings, I would really appreciate it. If not, just stay out my way. Let him go, guys. No sooner had Dobby been released than he was off, something Harry would soon need to do too. Harry was heading for the barrier when probably the last person in the world he wanted to see stepped out in front of him. Harry, can I have a quick word? Not at the moment, Mr. Granger, I'm in a hurry. Dan was ready to insist when a primeval part of his brain screamed not to be so bloody stupid. The same part of the brain that kept our ancestors alive in the days when man was not the top predator in the land. One look at Harry was enough to confirm this would not just be a bad mistake, it might be the last mistake he ever made. Very well, Harry, have a good year. A quick one-armed hug from Sirius and he melted through the brickwork, leaving Dan with an irate godfather on his hands. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and assume you were about to apologize to my godson. Otherwise, you and I have nothing further to say to one another. I was hoping to, yes. At least Harry was civil. Hermione refuses to even speak to me. She's done some kind of magic that won't even allow me into her room. This left Sirius shaking his head. She controls the wards on your home. They need to be tied to someone magical. She could probably stop you entering your own house. You have no idea the trouble you've caused, or just how much shit you could be in. We need to go somewhere and talk. We need to wait for Emma first. I'm giving her a lift home. Hermione arranged transport onto the platform for both of them. I drove here on my own. I've been on my own a lot lately. Hermione was early. That was to be expected. Harry running late was not. Her anxiety levels climbed every time the hand on the platform clock moved a minute closer to 11. She was surrounded by their friends, all of whom were somewhat aware of what was going on. Hermione had told them her father had gotten very angry about something, and dragged her away from Harry. That she hadn't seen him since the day in Diagon Alley more than accounted for the anxiety she was displaying. The group should actually have gotten on the train as they were causing a bit of an obstruction. Hermione didn't care. She wasn't moving from that spot until Harry arrived. As the tallest amongst them, it was Neville who spotted him first. He's here. Hermione took off in the direction Neville had indicated, only stopping when she crashed into her boyfriend. Arms wrapped around each other, they discovered that kissing and talking at the same time was something they would need to practice. Just having her back in his arms made everything in Harry's world okay. He just needed one final piece of reassurance. He whispered in Hermione's ear, "Are we good?" "No, Harry, we're bloody great." Their needy hug was broken by a familiar voice. "You two need to get on the train. You have a long trip to get reacquainted." "Hello, Mrs. Granger." She remembered what Hermione said and let her actions speak for her. She pulled Harry into a hug. "It's Emma, Harry, just Emma. Perhaps, in a few years, we may give something else a try. I don't think either of us is quite ready for that yet." Harry though he couldn't be any happier, only to be proved wrong. Emma kissed them both before shooing them in the direction of their waiting friends. More hugs of greeting was followed by a quick hello to Colin's parents, and a promise to keep an eye on him. Luna was coming with the Weasleys, who were apparently notorious for running late. They needed 2 compartments, counting Luna, and possibly Ginny too. Just as the train was getting ready to leave, the redheads arrived. Sensing that the 4 had things to talk about, Susan offered that they would go and find Luna, now that the train was pulling away. Harry appreciated that, but had another task they could help with at the same time. He opened his trunk and started piling up books on the floor. Transfiguration, I thought you said there wasn't any books on Goblin Transfiguration. There aren't, Susan, and neither are these. I just didn't want them getting confiscated. A book that might be confiscated was certainly one Parvati had an interest in. One look inside the cover had the witch doing her happy dance. Here was enough gossip material to last until Christmas. "Oh Harry, can I get a copy for Lavender?" "Well, since I want this spread all over the castle, I can't think of 2 better witches for the job." The smile Harry wore robbed the words of any intentional hurt. A hug from Parvati saw her shoot out of there with her pockets full of Dumbledore's expose. Susan and Hannah also took more than a few copies, promising to make sure at least a couple ended up in the hands of Slytherins. When it was just the 4 of them, it was Padma who then broached the elephant in the room. What the hell happened that would make Dan go off like that? Did he catch you 2 in bed together or something? Padma had tried to inject some levity into the situation. She wasn't prepared for Hermione's answer. With Harry back at her side, Hermione found she could actually crack a joke about something that yesterday was too painful to even mention. Something like that, "He actually dragged me right out of Harry's bed." Seeing the 2 best friends with their chins on the floor gave Hermione her first laugh in over a week. It was time to tell their story. Sirius waited until their order was delivered to the booth before erecting a privacy charm. "I need you both to sit, drink your coffee and listen. Halloween, 1981, I made the wrong decision and it harmed my godson. I spent 10 years in Azkaban because of that mistake, yet Barchoke barely forgave me. I only got back into my godson's life because Harry wanted it, and his father thought his son needed me. I know I won't get another chance and will do my damnedest to ensure I don't screw up again." He needed a sip of his own tea before continuing. "When I saw that memory of their bonding, I'm not ashamed to say I cried. Although it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I have Henrika Hobson for a girlfriend. I don't know Hermione nearly as well as I'd like to, but a blind man could see she loves my godson, almost as much as Harry loves her. The last week or so has been hell. Watching as that young man questioned everything in his life was not a pleasant experience." Emma had tears in her eyes as she answered Sirius. Hermione has been the same. The only time I've seen her happy was when she finally met Harry at the station. How can we fix this, Sirius? I am not the problem, Emma. You have a very angry goblin, and his bewildered son, to deal with. Harry now thinks Dan hates him, and will try to take Hermione away, not something I would advise. What makes you say that, Sirius? You could lose her, Emma, and I'm being deadly serious here. Hermione belongs in our world now, a world where you have practically no opinion, never mind rights. Deliberately keeping Hermione from her bonded mate could see you lose custody of your daughter, especially if that mate is my godson. He has an in with the ministry that would see such a request almost instantly granted. You've seen enough of how our system works to know this is true. Harry has killed to protect Hermione, he'll do whatever is necessary where she is concerned. Shit, if Harry declared himself Lord Potter, Fudge would change the law to let them marry the following day. Emma was in bits at this news, Dan was in tears too. What can I do? I'll do anything, Sirius, I'm desperate here. First thing, stay away from Barchoke. You not only ripped the guts out of his son, you also hurt the girl he now legally calls his daughter. Hurting a goblin's children, well, not a smart move. You saw the memory of Harry in the pit. Barchoke has entered it twice to protect his son. Don't let the suit fool you. Emma now had her husband by the lapels of his jacket, pulling him toward her. Daniel Granger, you will fix this. I don't care if you have to crawl to Hogwarts on your hands and knees, you will bloody fix what you broke. I will not lose her, I can't lose her. She then lost it and buried her head into Dan's chest. It didn't mask her sobs as Emma's heart broke. The tears were really flowing now from Dan too. Sirius had to cast a mild confundus charm as they were starting to attract attention, even with the silencing charm up. The key to this is Harry, and the way to Harry is through Hermione. I'll be seeing them both this weekend and I'll happily carry any letters you want, but that's it. I think what you did was abysmal, and don't really know where that came from. That should have been one of the happiest days of their lives. It was never going to be because Harry had to step in the pit. You have to understand, Harry now thinks he's a murderer, and no longer good enough for Hermione. You did that, and I think I have a right to know why. Dan did his best to explain the emotional turmoil that night produced. I was still trying to come to terms with not losing Hermione to that attack, only to discover I was going to lose my little girl anyway. Harry is handsome, incredibly rich, so very well mannered and on first name terms with government leaders. My daughter is also head over heels in love with him, and now they're practically married. I just couldn't cope with any more and panicked. I had to get my family away. Dan looked down at his hands and saw they were shaking. I'm a dentist, Sirius. I spend my days looking into people's mouths. I thought my hobby of shooting was a walk on the wild side, add a bit of danger to my life, but paper targets don't fire back. I've never even shot at a rabbit, yet Harry can't go to a ball without someone having a go at him. I keep telling myself I'm okay with this, but obviously I'm not. Hermione attended that same ball with a sword at her hip, her wand in a holster on her arm and 2 shields as part of her belt. As her father, I should be the one protecting the children. She beat me up with a wooden sword, holding back 2, I'll bet. I was a drowning man, Sirius, jumping into the life raft of the life we had before, only to discover that life doesn't exist anymore. The last 10 days have been a constant nightmare for all of us, and I don't know what to do about it. A still tearful Emma tried to help her husband. How do you feel about Harry? Shit, that could have us here all day. On the one hand he's this kind, gentle, fun-loving soul with eyes that captured both of my girls the moment they met him. He's so bloody honorable that he would put knights of yore to shame. Watching the two of them dance together never fails to make me smile at how well they fit together, and how happy he makes my daughter. Then he detects a threat to Hermione and Centurion Crow turns up, kicking ass and taking no shit from anyone. Dan was shaking his head at the inconsistencies he'd just described, but the dentist wasn't finished yet. There is also the boy that has been at my daughter's side for a year now. He makes her happy just being in the same room and would face down the devil himself to protect her. Honestly, if I could design the perfect boy for my daughter, it would be Harry with a haircut. Ponytails are just so 60s. Dan had even more tears running down his cheeks by the time he'd finished, and in danger of succumbing to an emotional meltdown. He was saved from that fate by a kiss on the cheek from his wife. You write all that down and send it to Hermione, you know she'll let Harry read it anyway. I would leave out the bit about the hair though, Hermione and I both love it. Dan was trying to wipe the tears away with his sleeve. I know, but I don't want her thinking he's perfect. Can't have them getting big-headed now, can we? It was a weak attempt at humor, but it was at least an attempt. He then asked Sirius a question Dan pretty much knew the answer to. I suppose Harry spending Christmas again with us is out of the question. Having him and Padma in the house made last year our best Christmas ever. He knew Harry and Hermione would want to spend the holiday together. Not seeing Hermione at Christmas would be really hard to take. He didn't know how Emma would cope with that scenario. I would say that was a definite no. It will take more than a few months to work on Barchoke. At the moment, he wouldn't let Harry enter your house, never mind stay under your roof. You need to have both Harry and Hermione wanting to stay first, and that's not going to be easy. This is going to be a slow, painful process, and you need to remember something at all times. I made the mistake of treating Harry like a kid. He burned my ass and then threatened to go to Bill for advice. The cheeky bugger then asked me what my intentions were toward Henrika. He may be only 12 in years, but he's been raised in an entirely different culture. Sometimes he acts more mature than I do. This found total agreement from Emma. Sitting talking to Augusta of the Black Sea confirmed that. She couldn't believe the difference in Neville, and put it all down to his friends. They may be a group of 4, but we all know who the leader of the group is. Yes, the baby-faced Genghis Khan that I have to get down on my knees and apologize to. Sirius had another worry, one that meeting Dan stopped him confirming. I just hope they're okay together. This was actually the first time they've been apart since they met a year ago today. This actually drew a weak smile from Emma. I don't think you need worry about that, Sirius. I doubt you'll be able to slip a sheet of paper between them all the way to Scotland. Neither looked like letting the other go anytime soon. They were still holding on to each other while they waited on their friends' reactions to their story. You're bonded, you actually blood bonded. Hermione could only nod at her friend, worried about the disbelief in Padma's voice. Hermione needn't have worried. With a squeal of delight, she shot across the compartment and had both of them in a headlock while bouncing with joy. Oh, I wish I could have seen it. Did you actually glow? We watched the memory back. The silver glow shot up our arms. By the time it covered us, it had turned to gold. This saw Padma stagger drunkenly backward to her seat. The disbelief was back in full force. Gold. Neville just had to interrupt. Okay, I should be getting used to not knowing everything around here. So, could you give a guy a break? I have no idea what you three are talking about. Neville, I know what it means to a goblin, but Padma seems to have a different explanation here. I've heard what it used to mean, Harry. The more of your body that glowed, the stronger the bond. Figures you two would glow all over, but gold was supposed to be a myth. Hermione was all over her now. Here was knowledge to be learned, knowledge that concerned Harry and her. Okay, Padma, give. What do you know and where did you hear it? Oh, that used to be the way people married, still do in some Indian provinces. It fell out of favor because everyone at the ceremony could see how well the couple were suited. Imagine a big wedding, hundreds of guests, and then the bride and groom's hands barely glow. Harry interrupted. That's exactly why the goblins use it. We mate for life, you need to know that you are compatible. A goblin bonding where hands barely glowed would see the couple discussing if they wanted to formalize the bond. If their hands didn't heal at once, no bond was said to have existed. No, Harry, that's exactly my point. When marriages became more about arrangements and less about bonds, it became embarrassing when the ceremony clearly said these two people weren't suitable to be together. They wanted the arrangement more than the bond, so it fell by the wayside. It was a still puzzled Neville who asked a question, an action he immediately regretted. Did you two formalize your bond? Both Harry and Hermione were now wearing blushes that would stop a train. Padma decided to go for a third, so Mock whispered the piece of information Neville was missing. A couple formalizes their bond by having sex together after the ceremony. Do you think they've formalized their bond yet? Neville easily now outshone his two friends as Padma burst into fits of laughter. Patil, you're lucky I don't have my sword. It's in my trunk, Hermione, so don't let that stop you. Padma was now squealing with laughter. She still took that laughter into the next compartment as Hermione fished out her sword. That girl could be scary. Their fun was interrupted by Susan arriving with invitations for them. I got handed mine, and they knew we were friends, so I also got the job of passing these on. Who is this Professor Slughorn? Harry quickly scanned the scroll, and then made his mind up even quicker. I have no idea, Susan. If he thinks I would even consider spending time with him, rather than Hermione, he's not nearly as smart as he thinks he is. Harry slid the compartment window back and posted the unwanted invitation straight out it. Before he could close it, there was a shout from Neville. Don't be so hasty, Harry, keep that window open so I can chuck mine out too. Susan shrugged her shoulders and then did the same with her invitation. I would rather spend the time with my friends. The trolley lady then appeared and Harry got sweets for everyone. It was fun watching Colin, Luna and Ginny play the wizarding form of Russian roulette, though with Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, instead of a loaded revolver. With a copy of Rita's book finding its way into many of the compartments, it was probably the quietest trip to Hogwarts in the history of the Express. It was also easy to spot those compartments that had a copy. They would be jam-packed with students, with even more crowded around the door, listening as the occupants took turns at reading the precious copy out loud. That was until they would come to a revelation so shocking, they couldn't read anymore. The book would then be passed on to the person sitting next to them. By the time the Express pulled into Hogsmeade, Dumbledore's dirty laundry had been well and truly aired. Since Henrika had also turned up at the castle with copies, the staff would also be well acquainted with the book too. Albus thought he'd been prepared for the worst, turns out he wasn't even close. His father dying in Azkaban, after being sent there for attacking muggles. Ariana, Abe and even his brief relationship with Gellert, all were plastered across page after page of unmitigated horror. The horror though was unrelenting as it also told Tom Riddle's story, and the part he had played in it. From taking his Hogwarts letter to that orphanage, to teaching him for 7 years. The part that was a real dagger in his heart was where it told of Severus hearing the prophecy, and accurately described what happened next. The events of Halloween 1981 were depicted here more accurately than Albus had thought possible, all was laid bare as even more suspicion was heaped upon him. He was the one who suggested the Fidelius, sent Hagrid to take baby Harry away, dropped him off on his relative's doorstep and then did nothing to stop the boy's godfather being sent to Azkaban without a trial. That Horcruxes were then mentioned really chilled his blood. That the book admitted Harry had one under a scar the killing curse left, one that the goblins quickly removed, was more black marks against Albus Dumbledore. That he'd left the boy who lived on a muggle doorstep with a Horcrux in his head was the conclusion every reader would reach. The Goblin Nation also gave the real reason he found himself barred from Gringotts. That the goblins were openly stating they had spent the last 10 years searching for these abominations, while he did nothing, just increased the depth of shit he was in. What could be the final kicker though was, again in surprisingly accurate detail, a complete account of the entire Quirrell debacle. Albus was sure this book would finish him at both the Ministry and the ICW. Whether he could hold on to Hogwarts was going to be very close. Ideally, he would come out fighting and refute most of the book. Unfortunately, like the company name suggested, every word of it was true. Lucius was happier than he'd been in many months. It was almost too easy. They had all stood there, obviously waiting on someone. More importantly to Lucius, they had been totally oblivious to what was happening around them. He'd taken a massive risk, waiting until the 1st of September, but it had just paid off handsomely. His mood changed the instant he spotted his wife's expression. What the hell had happened now? She slapped a book into his hands, directing him to a certain chapter. Lucius felt the cold hand of fear grip his heart and almost stop it beating. The Dark Lord had created Horcruxes. Lucius remembered the feeling of pride when his master had handed over a most precious item for him to take care of, as well as his disappointment when discovering it was an old blank diary. His first scan though told him this item positively reeked of the darkest magic he'd ever seen, so Lucius had hid it away. Now, the very day he discovered it was probably a Horcrux, the diary was in the possession of a carefully chosen victim and speeding toward Hogwarts. A Hogwarts that held his son and heir. Lucius didn't know if he could survive being this poor the 18 years it would take for a new Malfoy heir to reach 17, he was struggling to last the almost 5 it would take Draco to inherit. If his master returned when he was still poor, Lucius knew none of his family would survive past their first meeting. What had he done? Thanks for reading. 2 I was going to hold this chapter until Monday, the day voting kicks off for our anti-knife crime video, but realized this was unfair. I know a lot of my readers look forward to receiving a new chapter at the weekend, so here it is. Our film, titled Hector's Story, will hopefully appear on the Scottish Youth Parliament website, syp.org.uk, under the heading of their We See TV campaign. I shall post a link on my profile page that leads directly to it once the videos are posted. I hope I can add, thanks for voting, to my usual author's note. The Hormone Charm. Harry Crow. Having previously mentioned our school's film project, and asking readers to vote, I'm hopefully offering a little incentive here. For the last few weeks, I've been pushing ahead with my writing to provide that incentive for those votes, an extra chapter. Yes, I still hope to publish my usual chapter at the weekend, and voting details can be found on my profile. According to my latest reviews, I will probably have a few less readers for this chapter, some were even very nice about it. That's fine by me, no author has the right to expect their efforts will be read, far less reviewed. That's why I end every chapter the way I do, I am genuinely delighted that people take the time to read my efforts. Chapter 37. The gang ensured the 3 new first years made it along to where the rest of their yearmates were gathered, waiting by the boats. The new second years then headed for the carriages, both couples in one, with Susan, Hannah, Parvati and Lavender in another. Harry had been hoping his friend would bring the subject up but was eventually forced to ask. Neville, how are your parents reacting to the treatment? Neville appeared rather embarrassed by the question but answered anyway. The healers are saying it's too soon to say, and Gran keeps telling me not to get my hopes up. The thing is, I think I can see a slight difference. They would normally just sit and stare in front of them. I swear I've seen both of them looking around the room, almost as if wondering where they are. When my mum slipped me her sweet wrapper, I'm sure she squeezed my hand. Gran promised to write but it's going to be hard waiting until Christmas to see them again. Padma snuggled into his side, trying to offer some comfort. Harry though had an idea. What if you didn't have to wait until Christmas? This quickly perked Neville's interest so Harry laid out the idea he just had. Hermione and I will be leaving the castle at Halloween again, what if you two come along? The 4 of us could visit both sets of parents. All 3 could see Neville loved the idea of getting to see his mum and dad. Padma easily guessed what the problem was. We won't expect too much, Neville, but we still want to meet them. Hermione was now cuddling into Harry for a different reason, she needed the comfort of knowing he was there for her. Now they were back together, the multiple implications of the last 10 days were beginning to sink in. We won't be staying at my house this time, will we? He kissed her on the forehead before breaking the news he'd struggled to fit into their earlier conversations. Your dad was waiting for me at the station. Harry could feel Hermione's body stiffen at that news. What did he want? He just wanted a quick word, but you were waiting and I was late. I told him I was in a hurry, he wished me a good year at Hogwarts. Hermione was digesting this when Neville made up his mind. What if I write to Gran and ask if we can all stay at my house? He took the 3 wide smiles this idea generated as a yes. Having Harry beside him at their last visit to St. Mungo's had actually helped Neville, he knew both girls were good friends. Neville was starting to think Padma might be more than a good friend but he would wait and see what this year brought before taking those thoughts any further. Colin appeared disappointed to be sorted into Gryffindor, he went and sat beside Neville. Luna practically floated to the Ravenclaw table, gratefully accepting the position Hermione offered beside her. Ginny was the last first year to be sorted and stared wistfully at her blonde friend as she joined her brothers at Gryffindor. There was a murmur of dissent as Dumbledore stood, it died as he basically just said tuck in and the food arrived. Padma was telling Morag, Lisa and Mandy about some of the things they'd done during their holiday when Hermione's hand shot to her bag. Oh, how could I forget? Mum gave me some of the photographs to let you see, sorry but it went right out my head. The photographs soon replaced the feast as the center of attention at the Ravenclaw table. When Harry saw the pictures being circulated outside their circle of friends, it was time for a warning. Guys, none of those photographs featuring the girls or Professor Hobson will be missing after you've seen them, especially the ones taken on various beaches. Harry didn't need to add, or else, one glance at how serious he was and everyone got the message. Morag though had a cheeky question for the trio. What about the ones featuring the male hunks? Is it okay to sneak one of them into my bag? Padma and Hermione answered in stereo. Hell no. The consensus at the Ravenclaw table was this group had stolen the summer ball, even the prophet had said so. While it had been such a major highlight in Britain, that same ball now looked like only a very small part of their summer adventure. Roger though had a word of warning for the group. Harry, Professor Slughorn is sitting up there and staring at you, he was really quite miffed you didn't respond to his invitation on the train. I did respond, we all threw them out the window. This got a few chuckles before he reassured every second year there. We will still have Master Pitsley for potions, and there is no way he'll be going anywhere near Lockhart's class. Poncy Git probably has the classroom walls plastered with pictures of himself. We will have Assistant Ambassador Weasley teaching us defense this year again. This drew some cheers at the table, there was no one swooning over that peacock in Ravenclaw. Harry looked toward the staff table, picking out Henrika, one glance was enough to tell him that she would rather be sitting having dinner with them. She'd been a great help to Harry over the last 10 days, even keeping his mind occupied by pumping him for information that would end up in her book. Next summer would complete her research and then she was planning on putting it all together. He was promised a signed copy for his help. Having stayed at Grimmauld for the last week or so, he suspected she might be signing it as Henrika Black by then. When Dumbledore stood at the end of the feast to give his traditional welcome speech, the silence that descended in the hall was anything but respectful. No one was quite sure who moved first but Penny and Percy appeared to be the instigators. They started their houses moving to the dorms, with Hufflepuff and Slytherin quickly picking up that this was something they wanted to support. Dumbledore's voice faded to silence as every student now had their back to him, making their way out the hall. The staff were also following their students' example, they started leaving too. Within a few moments, the headmaster was the only person left in the hall. Albus was gripping the lectern tightly, trying to rein in his temper. He'd never been shown such disrespect in his entire life. Minerva left the hall, knowing already who her top candidates for next year's head boy and girl were. Harry had asked Helena at the feast if he might have a word with her later. The ghost appeared in his room that night and listened as her champion passed on the warning Dobby had delivered. Not much information for us to react to. In fact, no information at all. Terrible things could mean absolutely anything. I know. What about the wards? Did they detect anything unusual? The Lady Ravenclaw couldn't hide her disgust. The wards are a total mishmash. There is more effort put into making sure muggles can't see the castle than there is to protecting the school. Each headmaster adds their own contribution, leaving a patchwork quilt of meddling instead of the work of art that the founders originally set. Harry was by no means an expert, but he understood the basics of wards. Even getting rid of Dumbledore and having goblins rebuild the wards might not help. If the threat was already inside the castle, a new ward scheme wouldn't do any good. Helena promised to warn the other ghosts, portraits and elves to keep a sharper lookout. It felt good to be running together again. Harry and Hermione were taking advantage of the good weather to follow the path around the Black Lake. They would be relegated to the room in Hogwarts soon enough. Having no one to fence with during their forced separation, Hermione was keen to cross blades again. Since they both now had armor, Harry agreed to using their actual swords. They were practicing in the courtyard and Harry was delighted at the progress Hermione was making. Holding her own in that very real duel had certainly done her confidence with a blade no harm at all. They were eventually interrupted by their head of house. I can see you've been practicing, Miss Granger. Then again, you have a very good teacher. The news from Gringotts pleased me greatly. Can I assume you will be keeping that quiet for now? Yes, Professor. Only our family and closest friends know. Hermione, we've got quite an audience. They did indeed. Now that they had stopped fencing, Colin thought it would be safe enough to take a picture. It caught Hermione's surprise perfectly. There must have been 50 people watching the golden couple fence. Quite a few of them had surprise expressions too. Even on holiday, both had kept up their exercising. Combined with their tan, and the clothes they wore for exercising, they cut a very unusual sight for witches and wizards. Are we running late? We usually finish before everyone gets up. It's the first day of term, Miss Granger, most students are up early today. That's actually why I came out here, to give you your timetables. You have potions first thing and Professor Slughorn is so looking forward to getting you in his class. I would hate for our new head of Slytherin to be disappointed. Catching on at once what Master Flitwick was hinting at, Harry whipped out his knife and then used it to alter a coin-sized disc on his knife holster that Hermione thought was for decoration. After moving a few symbols about, knife and sword were put away. We better get a move on, Hermione. We need to shower, change and have breakfast before Master Pitsley gets here. You know he hates to be kept waiting. Hermione was too busy solving a puzzle to move right away. Is that your emergency system for contacting your father? Yeah, there was a good chance either defense or potions would be our first lesson. I just alerted him it was potions. There is no way I was going to Lockhart's class. Urge it or Moonlight could probably beat him up. Master Pitsley can take a copy of our timetable back to Gringotts with him. Their head of house was now laughing. I don't think Professor Lockhart would let you anywhere near his class, Centurion. He's terrified of you, and probably Hermione now too. I saw him watching you two fence as I came down here. His face matched the color of his hideous robes, chartreuse I believe he called them. Lockhart avoiding them was good news in their book. Both quickly headed off to Ravenclaw for those much-needed showers. Padma and Luna were waiting by the time Hermione made it down to the common room. I'm hearing you and your boyfriend put on quite the show this morning. Talk of the castle, no less. Well, if you had gotten your lazy backside out of your bed, you wouldn't have to listen to hearsay. Luna though had a question. Why did you call Harry her boyfriend when you know they've bonded? Both girls now staring at Luna made her think she'd done something wrong. I'm sorry, was it supposed to be a secret? She felt a hand settle gently on her shoulder and turned to see Harry smiling at her. It's okay, Luna, you just surprised them. Can you tell us how you found out? Oh, I can see it. I've always been able to see things others miss. I can see the bond between you, and also the one you share with your two best friends. There's no way you wouldn't have told them about the bond. That's why I was surprised when Padma called you Hermione's boyfriend. I can keep a secret. Harry, do you want me to? Yes please, Luna. Hermione and I are very happy about it, but some others might not think the same. We'll be staying as boyfriend and girlfriend until we're a few years older. Ha, that will be when I'm 38, if my father has his way. Oh, was that who I saw talking to Sirius? He looked really discombobulated. This drew looks from the other three, so Luna explained. My daddy used to always use the saying that someone didn't know their ass from their elbow. Mummy didn't like me using daddy's expression, so she taught me the great word. It means the same, and since Mummy taught it to me, I use it every chance I get. I think daddy acts more and more discombobulated just to hear me say it. Padma now had her arm around the girl, leading the little blonde in the direction of breakfast. Luna, you're going to fit right in. These two are much too serious. You're exactly what they need. Harry now had his arm around Hermione. You okay? I think so. Now we're back together. The entire thing just seems like a bad dream. I've never fought with either of my parents before, nothing beyond a mild sulk. I don't know what to do next. Talk to Henrika, or Padma. I'm afraid neither Neville or I will be much use to you on that front. They followed Padma and Luna out of Ravenclaw before Hermione told him what was really bothering her. I know, Harry, and that's what really got to me. Neville was so excited at the mere suggestion his mother might have squeezed his hand, yet I haven't spoken to my dad since that night. She had her head down in shame as she told him the next bit. I actually attacked him with my practice sword. He was about to start on a, you will talk to me, rant and I just exploded. Yes, I was angry, but he didn't deserve that. It's only since we got back together that I'm beginning to see both sides of this. If he was talking to Sirius, then at least there's hope. My father was angrier than I've ever seen him at the incident. We'll need to keep those two apart for a while. We've almost got Halloween planned. That just leaves us the Christmas holidays to worry about. I know one thing for sure, I'll be spending it with you. It's just the way we need to sort out. I hope it will get better, now that everyone has had time to cool down. Hermione took some comfort from that, and they were smiling as they entered the hall. The young couple were immediately approached by Fred and George. Both wanted to check their potions classes still matched, and that Master Pitsley would be teaching them again this year. They headed back to their own table, delighted the answer to both their questions was yes. After enjoying their breakfast, the arrival of Master Pitsley revealed at least one lie Rita's book had missed. Perhaps if they'd gone with the Halloween publishing date, it would have been included. With Snape falling into their hands, the final piece of the jigsaw revealed itself. They were also certain Dumbledore would have gotten suspicious if Barchoke had postponed their meeting again, and there was no way they wanted him anywhere near their Horcrux program. Slughorn exploded loudly at Dumbledore, watching the students as they rose to accompany Master Pitsley to their potions class. Dumbledore, you promised me Lily's boy would be in my class. You told me it was only because he didn't like Snape that Harry arranged a private tutor. Henrika and Minerva both assured me Harry wouldn't be stopping his private tuition, but I believed you. Shows what a fool I am. All the top potions students in second year, and the 2 top fourth years are being taught by someone else. This is not what I signed on for. With today's prophet full of excerpts from that blasted book, Albus really didn't need this now. I'm sorry, Horace, my hands are tied. Harry clearly stated his reasons for not taking potions in front of everyone. I assumed that, since I had addressed that problem, he would take potions with you. I am not allowed to speak with the boy, but will ask Minerva if she will intercede on your behalf. I fear I must point out though, the facility has always existed inside Hogwarts for students to hire personal tutors. I understand he won't be taking the defense course either. Horace left to take his class, a class bereft of Ravenclaws and, more importantly, the Order of Merlin award-winning boy who lived. The boy who was the only reason Horace Slughorn returned to the castle. Roger flopped down at the table for lunch. The look of disgust on his face was hard to miss. Well, that was an utter waste of a morning. One lesson, and I already know Lockhart is the most useless defense professor we've ever had. Harry was trying not to laugh. He really was. How could you know that in one period? He started off with a quiz, but every single question was about him. How the hell is knowing Gilderoy Lockhart's favorite color going to help me pass a defense exam? I hardly think that's likely to appear on any OWL exam paper. Then the Ponce acted out a scene from his book. Funnily enough, not once did he take his wand out. Has anyone seen if he actually has one? They would have suspected Roger was having him on, if the rest of the fourth-year claws weren't wearing the exact same expression of disgust. Luna's first lesson had been charms with her head of house. She thought the class was brilliant. Defense was now looking certain to be a disappointment. Harry, when will you know about those extra lessons? We've got history next, Luna, so I'll talk to Professor Hobson then. We already have extra lessons ourselves every weekend, and astronomy on a Thursday, so we'll need to look at one of the remaining evenings. I'll ask the professor which suits her best and let you know. Can anyone come to these lessons? Roger, you can't be serious. You're fourth year now. A fourth year who's had one bad defense professor after another. Reading books can only take you so far, Harry. How are we meant to pass a practical exam if no one ever teaches you that stuff? You had the person getting paid to teach us defense flat on his back just by grabbing his pinky. I also saw the both of you fence this morning. I may be a fourth year, but you or Hermione would certainly kick my ass in a duel. I want to learn, and anyone here older than me will have suffered through the same shitty teachers I've had, only for longer. Penny raving about Percy's brother as a teacher is good enough for me. I don't want to wait until a month or so before my exams and hope McGonagall can coax him to come to Hogwarts for a few weekends. I'm perfectly happy taking pointers from his star pupils. You do know these two get up practically in the middle of the night, run for miles and then practice, every bloody day. Even on holiday, you get woken by these two going at each other with swords. That's why the good, Roger, they work their asses off at it. Not helping, Padma. Hermione could see that, instead of discouraging anyone, Padma had unwittingly just given him a huge endorsement. It wasn't just Roger who was looking in the direction now, half the house appeared ready to sign up there and then. Harry offered a partial solution. I promised the first years I would help, and we couldn't really run a mixed class at the moment, since the likes of Colin hasn't a clue about anything. Professor Flitwick has helped me with my training before. He's awesome with either a wand or a blade in his hand. Why don't you approach him with your concerns? He is our head of house, and a far better teacher than I'll ever be. If he knocks you back, we'll see if something can be worked out. The relief washed over the table like a comforting wave. It was decided to wait until the weekend, just to give more of them the opportunity to confirm Lockhart was a shit teacher, and then a house delegation would approach Professor Flitwick with their concerns. If he said no, they always had an Order of Merlin winner waiting in the wings to fall back on. Henrika was relieved to see Harry and Hermione had slipped directly back into the two lovely people that she was delighted to know. Henrika had practically to take her wand to Sirius. He was all for storming the Grangers and having it out with Dan. Pointing out that Barchoke was playing it smarter, and that they held all the cards, caused him to stop and think. Hermione couldn't be withdrawn from Hogwarts without Barchoke's agreement, something that would never be forthcoming unless Hermione wanted it. The idea that Dan would deliberately hurt these two was a non-starter. Even a certain enraged goblin didn't think that was ever a possibility. That meant this mess may take some time to sort out, but that Harry and Hermione would be back together come the 1st of September. Now that everyone had a little time to cool off, she was hopeful some progress could be made. She genuinely liked Hermione's parents, and she considered Dan's actions to be really out of character for the man she'd come to know. Seeing these two smiling again was well worth giving up one of her evenings. They decided a Tuesday fitted best. It would certainly be better than having Lockhart stare at her. She thought it was time to ensure he knew Harry was her employer, and just how protective he was of his employees. It was either that or let him see what a transformed Vila was capable of. A fireball shot at his nether regions should certainly put an end to any amorous thoughts. Gilderoy had figured his time in Hogwarts would be spent being fawned on by all the young witches, and associating with the only other wizard who was nearly as famous as him. The boy who lived had turned out to be a major disappointment. The goblin-raised brat was practically a savage. Watching that girl of his battle against him with those deadly goblin swords had his delicate stomach almost in his mouth. He could certainly taste bile. That there were very few young witches swooning around him was a bone of contention too. One of the main reasons for that deficit had just entered the Great Hall, and Gilderoy wasn't impressed. Red hair drawn back in a ponytail, dragon-tooth earring, with the same animal probably giving up its skin for that jacket and boots. This was no refined gentleman, he was barely a step above being considered a scuff. To make matters worse, he was obviously on good terms with the boy who lived, and his friends. With second-year defense classes twice a week, and their extra tuition at the weekends, this Weasley was going to be in the castle 4 days every week. This was far too often for Gilderoy's liking. It was hard to miss all the female attention this scruff was attracting too, the attention that should have been heading in Gilderoy Lockhart's direction. Hogwarts wasn't all bad news though. Dumbledore had been summoned to the ministry and everyone knew he was finished. This could provide a golden opportunity to exploit. It seems only a matter of time before Dumbledore would be booted out of the castle, and Gilderoy fancied a certain promotion as being a nice easy job for himself. His picture, posed while sitting behind the headmaster's desk at Hogwarts, would look grand on the back of his next book. He read about the troll incident last year, if only he'd been here then. A few memory charms and he could have gotten a book about saving the boy who lived from a rampaging beast, out for a taste of young human flesh. He would have to keep his eyes open and see if there were any situations he could exploit this year, and work on his speech for the press. After the fall of Dumbledore, the young witches and wizards of Britain need a figure they can trust and look up to. How could I resist a calling like that? My days of roaming the world and solving its problems may have to be put on hold, but nothing is more important than ensuring our youngsters grow into the fine young witches and wizards of tomorrow. Gilderoy thought that should do as a starting point. Albus had no defense so attacked, he attacked a group the old wizard was sure were responsible for all his troubles. He was using a tactic that had worked for him in the past, provide another target for people to vent their anger on. Members of the Wizengamot, I have been dragged here before you to answer questions. What this chamber needs to consider though is whether it is the right questions that are being asked, or should I say the right person being asked them. For the last few days, Wizarding Britain has been agog over a quite scandalous book. The questions that should be getting asked concern the author, a witch sacked from her post at the Prophet for blatant lies, and her backers. My own investigations have turned up some startling facts. What we have here is nothing more than a goblin-backed plot to destabilize the Ministry of Magic. Albus felt euphoric at the mayhem that followed this statement. He actually thought that he might just pull this off. That was until his gaze fell upon the Bones bitch. She was far too calm, and that faint smirk was a dead giveaway. She obviously knew something Albus didn't. Amelia stood and the chamber eventually grew silent, waiting to hear what she had to add to the debate. Like Barchoke, she thought Dumbledore guilty of multiple crimes. Unfortunately, neither she nor the goblin had any tangible proof. Amelia decided she would need to settle for stripping Dumbledore of the one thing he really wanted, power. Fellow members, over the years I have come to realize that is sometimes what Albus Dumbledore doesn't say that really matters. While I agree a certain book is scandalous, I certainly do not believe, nor has he claimed, it to be libelous. My own investigations have yet to uncover one lie in the entire publication. A shout came from the chamber. Quote ellipsis. But the goblins. Quote ellipsis. Have done us a huge favor. The only person here who thinks Albus Dumbledore getting booted out of the Wizengamot would destabilize the ministry is Albus Dumbledore. Personally, I think their investigations have done the ministry nothing but good. Crouch was clearly a criminal who has now paid for those deeds. This very chamber saw to that. I was actually one of a privileged few who was given a copy of this book well before it was released to the public. This was done purely to ensure the ministry would be prepared for any ramifications its publication might produce. Where Dumbledore sees plots, I see a nation friendly to the ministry, and going out of their way to protect that relationship. Amelia stared down Dumbledore as she delivered the final nails into his political coffin. As to the authenticity of Miss Skeeter's latest work, I can and will offer my personal opinion. Unlike some though, my opinion is formed from investigation. In forming my opinion, I interviewed Lord Black, Ambassador Barchoke, his son, Harry, Severus Snape. Albus was aghast at this. You spoke to Severus. Where is he? How is he? He was fine and content. I also spoke to your brother, though I doubt if that's the proper description for that particular event. Mentioning you and your late sister in the same sentence saw Aberforth practically throw me out. He left me in no doubt though who he blamed for his sister Ariana's untimely death. This saw Albus fall back into his seat as if he'd been physically struck. Abe had certainly never hidden that view from him. Albus had the crooked nose that reminded him of his brother's opinion every time he looked in a mirror. He'd refused to have it fixed for that very purpose. To hear that opinion broadcast to the entire Wizengamot was like a dagger through his heart. Amelia then buried the dead body his political career had just become. I again have to state that, in my personal and professional opinion, the book that started all this is factually accurate. My investigations could find not one untruth in the entire publication. The voting to oust him was still ongoing when Albus rose from his chair and shuffled from the chamber, a defeated figure. The last thing he heard was a member nominating Amelia Bones for his recently vacated post. It was hearing Amelia's nomination that saw Cornelius take his first action of the day. While I applaud the member for nominating a very able candidate, can I ask this chamber to consider something no one seems willing to talk about? The Dark Lord who calls himself Voldemort is not gone. We now have this confirmed from multiple sources. We first heard this almost a year ago. Unlike Dumbledore, we have not been idle. Under Madame Bones' leadership, our Auror department has been quietly expanding to meet this perceived threat. I have no doubt Madame Bones would make a tremendous chief witch, or even Minister of Magic. I for one sleep better in my bed knowing she's head of the DMLE. Cornelius received her backing on this matter immediately. I thank the minister for his kind words and would ask that I remain in my current position until the Death Eater problem is finally behind us. Know this, our history will remember that Crouch, Bagnold and Dumbledore didn't deal with the problem when they had the chance. It is our intention that same history will look on Fudge, Bones and our new head of this chamber in a more positive light. I wouldn't want anyone walking into that position without knowing what is in front of us. It may be painful and even bloody, but we are determined to get the job done right this time. Even those of a darker disposition were forced to join in with the standing ovation afforded the minister and his head of law enforcement for the brave stance on this matter. Some considered it foolhardy too, but today was neither the time nor place to express those views. As Amelia had hoped, stating their aims up front had immediately forced those who would oppose their views take a step back, leaving the way clear for a moderate to be elected to the post. Both she and Cornelius were pleased to see someone like Amos Diggory become chief warlock. They could work with him to reach the goals. After running the quartet through their Saturday morning lesson, Bill was pleasantly surprised at how well they came through it. Padma and Neville especially were reaping the benefits from a summer spent traipsing around the world, swimming and playing physical games. Hermione also told him that a friend of Sirius and Harry's parents had been giving him some defense lessons too. Not having to hurry back to Gringotts, Bill was taking the opportunity to spend lunchtime with his younger siblings. Now that Ron wasn't under a probation order, he was keen to see his youngest brother didn't slip into his bad old ways. Bill was also desperate to discover how Ginny was getting on in the castle. He was delighted to hear she'd been somewhat adopted into Harry's group. Ginny was certainly looking forward to Tuesday evening and lessons from Harry. This certainly earned a smile from her eldest brother. The gang of four were running some stuff past me today to see if I thought it was suitable. I think you'll enjoy your lesson, Ginny. Bill certainly didn't enjoy seeing the re-emergence of Ron the Prat. Bloody waste of time, if you ask me. Professor Lockhart knows his stuff. He had me help him with his demonstration. Those four Slytherins were so jealous. The professor obviously recognizes real talent when he sees it. The other four who'd also suffered Lockhart's lessons were about to refute all Ron's claims when Bill held his hand up. Just what was this demonstration, Ron? His excitement obvious, Ron couldn't wait to describe his moment in the sun. Oh, the professor was using me to reenact how he fought the Wagga Wagga werewolf, from his book, Wandering with Werewolves. I was playing the part of the werewolf, I had to roar and everything. The professor had me in a headlock before casting the hormone charm, making me human again. Bill had a simple question for Ron. And what did you learn? The question was so simple, it had Ron totally flummoxed. What do you mean? When you teach a class, Ron, it's important to have an objective for your students. That they learn a certain spell or technique during each lesson. So, what did you learn? I dunno, I was in a headlock, how was I supposed to see what was going on? Percy was actually laughing at that. I think Bill just proved his point rather well. The twins then got in on the act too. Hey Ron, werewolves don't roar. No, they howl. You saw Harry put Lockhart down. Does he look like someone who could get a werewolf in a headlock? Bill decided to put Ron out of his misery. I also think you meant the fabled Homorphous charm. It's rumored to return a werewolf into human form, and be hideously difficult to cast. It certainly couldn't be done with a werewolf's head tucked into your armpit. Ignoring the fact that only the legend of this charm exists, and it's certainly well beyond the capabilities of any second year to cast, if Lockhart can cast it, I'd eat my boots. Faced with this mountain of evidence against him, Ron reverted to his favorite tactic, ignore it. Well, it's not as if I'm likely to meet a werewolf, is it? Harry spent part of the summer with one. The words were out before Ginny realized what she'd said. With all her brothers now looking to her for more information, she obliged. They were talking about it at breakfast this morning. Turns out that's who taught Harry that grip. You know, the one that saw Lockhart on the floor. He thought Moony would have a great laugh when he heard about it. Ginny stopped as her twin brothers shot out their chairs and headed straight for Sirius Black, who was having lunch with Professor Hobson and smiling in Harry's direction. Hey, Padfoot. Quote ellipsis. You've been holding out on us. With Master Pitsley and Bill already having visited Hogwarts, Sirius had their assurances, along with Henrika's, that Harry and Hermione were fine. It took spending some time with them today though for Sirius to really relax, and now he had a promise to keep. Today's lesson had concentrated on politics, and how they affected the houses of Potter and Longbottom. With Hermione set to be Lady Potter one day, and Padma at least a contender for the Longbottom position, it was a lesson all four enjoyed. As the lesson finished, Sirius produced the letter. Hermione, your father asked me if I would deliver this. Before even considering to give you this letter, I demanded to know why he'd done something so out of character. I've since had a few long chats with both your parents. My mum was never part of this, Sirius. I know, Hermione, just as you're smart enough to know any action you take will affect both of them. All I was going to ask was that you consider this before responding. Talk it over with your friends. Henrika and I are also here if you need us. Padma had a hand on each of their shoulders now. Stay here and read it together, we'll see you later. As soon as they were alone, the room provided a sofa for both to sit on. It was with trembling hands Hermione opened the letter. She had to sit it on her lap to read because her hands were shaking so much. The young couple read it together. My dearest darling daughter. This is by far and away the most difficult letter I've ever had to write. I watched some memories that terrified the life out of me, and then I reacted very badly to them. My actions that night were inexcusable, and hurt the two most important people in the world to me, you and your mother. For that, I am truly, deeply sorry. I'm going to assume that Harry is reading this with you, and take this opportunity to apologize to him too, for all the hurt I've caused both him and his father. When I watched the memory of you attacking Master Sharpshard earlier in the year, I saw you assume Harry was in danger and act without thinking. It would now appear this is a trait you inherited from me. I want you to know your actions that day pale into insignificance when placed next to my own colossal act of stupidity. I assumed a threat to my family and acted without thinking. Had I that evening to live over again, I would have been there all night asking Barcho question after question, and then welcomed Harry to the family like I should have done. Instead, my actions hurt a great many people, including some I was beginning to regard as extended family. I don't have that night to live over though, so all that is left is to admit how wrong I was and ask your forgiveness. To you both I would like to say that it is certainly a long-held dream of mine to walk my daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. Knowing that Harry will now be the one waiting on my daughter at the other end of that aisle makes me happier than I can possibly say here. I'm not naive enough to expect things to instantly go back to the way they were before, knowing respect and trust must be earned. I threw all of that away in one moment of panic and madness. I'm more than prepared to work at building those back up to a level that will allow us to once more be what I really, really want, a family. Your loving father. Hermione was in tears by the end of the letter. Harry just held her close. After a few moments she'd recovered enough to speak. What do you think? When Harry didn't answer right away, Hermione lifted her head to see the concern on his face. Harry, I want to hear what you think, not what you think I want to hear. We need to be totally honest with each other here. This is probably the most important discussion we've ever had. I need you to be honest with me first, Hermione. Your dad mentioned that day you attacked Master Sharkshard. If you had that event to live over, what would you do differently? Well, I would hope to put up a better showing. Harry almost smiled at that. Are you saying that you would still attack? There is no way I could stand there and watch. That's why I practice as hard. This earned her a kiss before Harry continued. That day those girls had you and Padma trapped in that bathroom, nothing would have stopped me rushing to you both. McGonagall gave me the detention, more because we both understood I would do exactly the same again. That's what worries me about this. What will he do the next time something happens? I couldn't let him take you again. A shudder passed through both of them at the mere thought of something like this happening again. In goblin culture, I am now your mate, and also responsible for you. Clearly this is something we need to discuss with your parents, ideally setting boundaries that we can all live with until we're older. Forcibly dragging us apart crossed way over any line that would be acceptable to me, and I hope you. Hermione could hardly disagree with that. She'd made her position pretty clear to her father since that night. The only reason neither my father nor I reacted that night was because he wasn't aware of a line's existence, something my father had intended to spend time discussing. We should have sat down like a family and discussed how we were going to move forward with this. Now it will probably end up more of a business negotiation. Hermione reacted the only way she could to that remark, with shock and horror. No, Harry, I will not have my parents treated like that. My mum and dad will be treated as family, or this goblin magical muggle relationship can't possibly work. I want my family back, my entire family. I've heard over and over how important family is to goblins. Well, my mum and dad are now your family too. My father is as proud as any goblin, yet that letter has him practically groveling. I feel sick inside for being the cause of that. You're forever quoting goblin culture to me. Are you aware that it is customary in our culture to ask a girl's father for his daughter's hand in marriage? We went ahead and jumped right into a blood bond, without consulting either set of parents. There were a lot of mistakes made that day. I don't think any of us were really blameless. Harry couldn't look at Hermione as he asked the question he never thought would pass his lips. Do you regret bonding with me? Hermione now lifted Harry's head before reassuring him with a kiss of her own. You are mine, and I am yours. That is not going to change, Harry, but we are certainly both going to have to if we want to make this work. He held her close and repeated the words that changed their lives forever. You are mine, and I am yours. We've faced cultural differences before, Hermione, but I don't know how we're going to get past this one. In my heart, I am a goblin. The need to protect my mate is incredibly strong. The nation won't expect us to be married until of age, so that lets us set our own timetable. I see us as head boy and girl, sharing that accommodation as husband and wife. This had Harry's arms tightening around her, clearly showing his approval for that idea. My dad is not a bad man, Harry. He watched our bonding and just panicked. We can all learn from this, and stop anything like this happening again. I believe that, do you? Of course I don't believe he's a bad man, far less a bad father. It's now clear to see how he could panic. I don't think any of us were thinking clearly that night. I have just spent a wonderful summer with what I now consider my extended family. Mum, Dad, your father, Sirius, Henrika, with Neville and Padma in there too somewhere. The locations were spectacular, but it was the company that made it so special. That is our family now, Harry, the family that it's apparently going to be up to us to put back together. Harry's thoughts drifted to Emma's hug and then kissing them both goodbye at the station. The sensation of how warm and comforting that had made him feel inside swept through him once more. How could he even consider letting that go? He now understood Hermione's stance on this matter and was more than willing to stand beside her. Emma Granger was certainly someone you would fight to keep in your life. Emma, though, wasn't the problem. To get both of our fathers in the same room without at least a shouting match is going to take something really devious. Remembering Syria's warning from earlier just hardened her resolve. Hermione had seen kids at her old primary school whose parents had divorced. They were passed around each parent in a business agreement drawn up by strangers. Weekends and holidays became nothing more than allocated slots on a calendar. That wasn't going to happen in her family, her now extended family, not if she could help it. Quote ellipsis. Well then you'll just have to show me how devious your goblin side really is. If we have one argument, does that mean we're over? She felt Harry stiffen in terror beside her at that very thought. She drew him into a hug to comfort both of them. Harry, the answer to that question will always be no bloody chance. We will argue, possibly even fight. We're both too stubborn not to. All I was meaning was we would get past it, just like we'll get past this. They needed a few moments just holding each other, just to confirm they were still good. Hermione had been right. This was their most serious conversation to date. When she summed up what they hoped to achieve though, it didn't seem impossible. We know what we need from this, and it's actually not that much. It shouldn't be too hard convincing our parents to agree to something that was practically their idea in the first place. We've been dealing with the differences between our cultures since we first met. I will not see our family split by one mistake. We need to put our heads together and solve this. We both need my mum, dad and your father in our lives. We shouldn't settle for anything less. Harry was admiring how expressive Hermione's eyes were when she got really passionate about something. They practically sparkled, and that was when the idea struck. And thanks for reading, and hopefully voting. The New Marauders. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, since I'm not the owner of these characters, I will probably do things with them that you don't like or agree with. Sorry in advance, but that's the nature of fan fiction. To do otherwise kind of defeats the purpose of writing fan fiction, and copying JKR word for word would certainly see a lawsuit heading in my direction. There will never be a child named Albus Severus in any story I write though. Chapter 38. Both Grangers were nervously awaiting Sirius's arrival, neither could content themselves until they'd heard from Hogwarts. It was Sunday dinner time, but there was no appetite for food in their Crawley home. It was information Emma and Dan hungered for. A pop from the back garden signaled an end to their waiting but cranked up the nervous tension in the house by about a factor of 10. Emma was holding the door open, her first question being asked before Sirius even got a chance to enter the house. What did they say? Have you got a letter? I have no idea what they said, nor have I got a letter. We will need your memory player though. Dan raced at once to get it, and then, for the first time in a couple of weeks, his daughter spoke to him. Hi Mum, hi Dad, this is not something we wanted to put in a letter, so Harry came up with this idea. I'm currently staring into a beautiful pair of green eyes and talking to you, strange or what? Then again, two dentists having a witch for a daughter is about as strange as you can get. With our family, there just is no definition of normal, something that got forgotten by all of us. Emma already had a hanky out and Dan appeared close to tears too. Hermione and Harry had recorded this message last night, so this was the first time Sirius was seeing it as well. A few weeks ago, a couple of incidents happened that have resulted in me standing here talking to you like this. In all honesty, I don't think any of us handled the situation too well. My father was simply desperate to protect me, he just panicked and made the wrong choice. I can see that now. Before I was so focused on the hurt Harry must be feeling, I was simply blinkered to what was happening in my own home. Dad, for not explaining things, and especially for hitting you with my practice sword, I'm really, really sorry. I am ashamed of myself and hope you can forgive me. I have of course forgiven you. Dan now needed a tissue from the box. Harry and I blood bonding seems to have caused most of the trouble. Mum, Dad, I don't know what you've been told, but Harry and I have had time to talk about it now. Here's what this bond means to us. Harry is my boyfriend, a boyfriend that will one day become my husband. The bond was our magic confirming that we could search the entire country and not find anyone more suitable, something we both were already coming to understand. We would only be legally married in the eyes of the nation if we confirmed the bond, not something Harry and I have any intention of doing for the foreseeable future. Shit, talk about strange. I'm standing here with my boyfriend, talking about sex so my parents can watch his memory of this conversation. Told you normal doesn't apply to us anymore. Where was I, Harry? I knew I should have written this down. They saw Harry's hand stretch out and caress her cheek. The look of love the daughter gave him in return took Dan and Emma's breath away. Now, while not officially married, Harry and I are still considered family under the laws of his nation. This is something we're both very happy about, and hope the rest of our family will support. We don't want to be apart, but aren't even considering living together like a married couple, not until at least 7th year and I officially changed my name. We're hoping the model that was used at the start of the summer can be our new normal. Since the 3 people watching this were all being included in their future plans, none of them had any objections to this. After all, it had originally been who suggested it. Harry already has a room at my home, I have a room at his, and we both have rooms at Grimmauld. With us being at Hogwarts for most of the year, a mix of Muggle, magical and Goblin during any holidays has been a perfect fit for us so far. Neither Harry nor I want to choose one over the other two. For that to work though, we need our family, all our family. Mum, Dad, Barchoke and yes, you too Sirius. Sirius now understood them using this method. Watching this was far more powerful than any letter. He also had a sphere in his pocket from Harry for his father. He was beginning to think these two might actually pull this off. After listening to the next part, Sirius was now sure they would. Now, these messages are really just to begin mending fences. What we really need is for our family to get together and talk. Here's what we're suggesting. Padma and Neville are coming with us to visit Harry's parents on Halloween. Harry would like to introduce his whole family to his mum and dad. Sirius, could you tell Henrika and Remus they're invited too? The 4 of us are then going to visit Neville's parents, and Augusta has already invited us to spend the weekend with her. What happens after that is really up to you. Hermione's eyes were now filling with tears as she tried not to think of what could happen if their family fractured. Dad, you said fathers had dreams for the daughters. Well, those daughters have dreams too, and I'm looking right at mine. You leading me up that aisle to awaiting Harry would be a dream come true for all of us, a dream worth fighting for. Dan was almost raising his arms as his daughter rushed towards them. It was different arms though that wrapped around the now crying young witch. The image was suddenly full of Hermione's hair as they heard her last words on the matter. I don't know what else I can say, Harry. They also heard more than saw a gentle kiss on Hermione's neck. You said everything that needed to be said, Hermione. The memory faded, leaving both Grangers needing a couple of moments to get themselves together. After dragging Hermione away from him, he still wants to introduce me to his parents. Dan was having trouble believing he had been forgiven so easily. Sirius was actually shaking his head in admiration. Those two are clever in their own right, but together, they're simply brilliant. We all got a glimpse of what each is like when kept apart. That's not something I'm in a hurry to see again. Both Grangers added their heartfelt agreement to Sirius's words. Their daughter had merely functioned without Harry by her side. Seeing that sparkle of life back in her eyes got Hermione's message across like no letter ever could. Emma was drying her eyes, but this time it was tears of joy. We're going to get to see them at Halloween, and Barchoke too. This sobered Dan's euphoria. Shit, Sirius, how do you apologize to a goblin? Getting their son, and daughter, to pave the way for you will be a massive help. I have a memory message for him too. If anyone would know how to turn that goblin around, it would be Harry. I think that's why Hermione emphasized our family so often. Harry will probably be taking the same line with his father. Barchoke knows that's the one thing his son wants, the one thing that he can't give him. He also couldn't miss the way those two boys looked to Emma all summer. Harry doesn't have a mother figure in his life. It doesn't take any stretch of imagination to see who he was promoting into that role, a role Emma here seemed more than happy to accept. Emma couldn't help but smile at Syria's last comment. From the moment I met your godson, my maternal instincts just seemed to kick into overdrive. There is just something about Harry that has both Granger females wanting to hug him, and never let go. Knowing that he's going to officially become my son one day is the reason for these tears. I hugged and kissed both of them before chasing them onto the train, it just felt so right. Both parents would watch that memory multiple times, but Dan had already memorized the important parts. Hermione is really only happy now when Harry's around, and I don't think Emma or I would have any problems supporting the two of them staying together the way she suggested at one of the 3 places mentioned. Had I known that's how this bond would affect them, I wouldn't have made such an ass of myself. Next time, I'll get Hermione to cast that locking legs thing and Emma can sit on me until I listen. Seeing them marry at 17 is fine with me, it was doing it at 12 I couldn't handle. Sirius could practically feel the energy flow back into this couple. He certainly hadn't enjoyed explaining the facts of life that govern Muggle parents with a magical offspring to them. He still remembered Lily's reactions to learning that her parents' wishes counted for nothing in the magical world. Muggles were expected to put their children onto a train and basically then forget about them. That might have worked centuries ago, but it was something else now badly needing changed in their community. He had to decline the dinner invitation. Sirius would need to visit Gringotts with Harry's message to his father. Last week, he would have thought getting their family back together any time soon wasn't even remotely possible. He was learning though that, when Harry and Hermione were involved, anything was possible. Their timetable this year saw them begin their week with potions. Master Pitsley also started off Wednesday too. With defense classes on a Tuesday and Friday, that left Thursday as the only day on the 4 second years timetable that didn't have a goblin flavor to it, though Henrika was still in the castle if they needed her. While expecting Master Pitsley, Siria's arrival with their potions tutor had a certain young couple really worried. That was until they saw his wide smile. Quote ellipsis. And here was me thinking you two would be pleased to see me. Hermione, your mum and dad loved their little present. They will see you both soon. Harry, as you said, your father wanted to watch his message in private. You wouldn't have understood a word of it anyway, Sirius. What brings you to the castle today? Oh, I need to make sure a certain history professor now keeps that weekend free, and to stare darkly at that fool Lockhart. Henrika will fry his ass if he makes a move on her, though I would expect my godson to get a few blows in there too. I also knew you two would be waiting on news of how yesterday went, so I just rolled all those tasks up into one big bundle, and here I am. I also wanted to say your idea was marauder-worthy, bloody brilliant. Need to go and catch Henrika before class, see you both on Saturday. They may have headed for different destinations, but Hermione, Harry and Sirius all had a definite spring in their step, especially for a Monday morning. The 4 had hung back in defense, wanting a quick word with Bill about the lesson they would give to the first years after dinner. When the group of 5 eventually left the classroom, they could all hear the faint, plaintive cry for help. Recognizing the voice, Bill shot off down the corridor with the other 4 hot on his heels. Bursting into Lockhart's classroom, a scene of utter devastation greeted them. Ron was hanging from the iron chandelier, dangling a good 10 feet off the ground. A group of Cornish pixies were meanwhile having a whale of a time, destroying everything they could get their hands on. A wave of Bill's wand and the creatures were immobilized. It was now answers he wanted. Ron, what the hell is going on here? The pixies grabbed me by the ears and hung me up here. Bill thought his brother had a tedious tendency to state the blindingly obvious, so asked again. Where is Professor Lockhart? When the pixies took his wand, and chucked it out the window, he ran away while shouting for us to deal with it. The Slytherins were at the back of the class while I was sitting down the front. They made it out almost as quickly as Lockhart. The pixies were on me before I could get to the door. Fighting with his temper at this so-called professor's incompetence, Bill asked one final question. Surely he must have given you some instructions. The chandelier was still slowly swinging, taking its thoughtful passenger along with it as Ron harked back to what Lockhart had said. We were warned not to scream, in case it provoked them. Lockhart then let the little buggers out the cage. All he said was, let's see what you make of them. When we all dived for cover, he tried to use a spell that sounded as if Fred and George had made it up. It didn't work any better than the rat color changing one they gave me. After the pixies got his wand, they started pulling his hair. He ran out of here screaming like a girl. Bill, can you get me down now? A levitation charm soon had Ron free, and both his feet back on the ground. Thanks, Bill. Lockhart would have left me up there all night. Those Slytherins will have that story all over the castle by now. Everyone will be laughing at me, again. Help came from an unexpected source though. Helping a fellow Gryffindor just seemed the right thing to do. Just turn it back on 'em, Ron. Say you had the best view for watching Lockhart get beaten up by those pixies, and heard him scream like a little girl. Ron's mind was quickly converting that idea to something where he deliberately let the pixies do that to him so he could watch, while the cowardly Slytherins ran away. Thanks, Neville, that's a great idea. I did have the best view too. And now happy Ron raced away to tell his version of the story. It was also dinner time. Bill was making for the door that led to the defense professor's office when 4 students jumped in front of him. Professor Weasley, this is not the way. Her boyfriend soon offered his backing. While I would love to see you wipe the floor with Lockhart, Hermione's right. Dumbledore would use that to stop you teaching us, and there's no way we want that thing for our defense professor. Padma just had to add her 2 nuts worth. You can't beat him up, not without first giving us a chance to sell tickets. We could make a fortune just from the other professors. Professor Sprout wanted signed photos of Harry to hang in all her greenhouses. Lockhart was telling her how to do her job, until we turned up for class. He took one look at Harry and practically ran away, shouting some excuse over his shoulder. Neville couldn't help but smile as he described that event. The enraged redhead was presented with another option by Harry. You are now an assistant ambassador to the nation. There are other ways to get revenge. Pointing Fred and George at the Pratt would certainly be where I would start. This saw a smile creep onto Bill's features. I suppose it is a matter of Weasley family honor. Giving the terrible twosome first crack certainly wouldn't do any harm. This was greeted with mock horror from Padma. Oh no, they'll want a share of the ticket money. The smile on their tutor's face was now predatory. You're probably right, but they will make sure any audience gets their money's worth. As long as they save me a seat. The pictures on the wall were all empty, leaving the group to suppose that the images displayed the same amount of courage as the subject, none. Like the Pied Piper, Harry led the group of first years up to the 7th floor. Henrika was waiting on him, shaking her head as Hogwarts opened its special door. No matter how many times I see you do that, it still amazes me, almost as much as the rooms we find behind it. The first years appeared pretty amazed too. They were still agog when Henrika got things started. Okay, everyone, gather round and listen carefully. I may be sponsoring this club, but we all know it will be these 4 who will really be teaching you. I just want to set the ground rules before we start. Firstly, you will be getting taught defense in here. That means you have to obey your instructors at all times. As this class progresses, some of the things you will be getting taught could be very dangerous otherwise. Henrika paused a moment to ensure that everyone understood that point before continuing. All those eager little faces staring back at her just reminded the Vila why she loved teaching. Secondly, anything you learn in this room will never be used on another student, outside of these 4 walls. Anyone found breaking these rules will no longer be allowed to attend. Breaking that second one will probably see you in trouble with Hogwarts too. Everyone understand the rules. A chorus of, "Yes, Professor," saw Henrika hand them over to the 4 who would be tutoring them. She stood back and watched the quartet go to work. They quickly had the large group split into 2, with each couple then taking the particular charges to the appropriate side of the room. She couldn't help but notice that each group was a pretty even mixture of sexes, and all 4 houses. It appeared a very deliberate attempt to promote integration. She noticed Padma had taken the lead with the group, though Neville was right beside her and demonstrating exactly the points she was making. Henrika had also noticed these 2 had become much closer over the summer. Parts of their holiday in Tokyo was overwhelming for all of them. Henrika didn't think she was the only one who noticed these 2 would automatically reach for the other to draw comfort and reassurance. Padma and Neville were taking on the task of teaching the group a spell, and then working with them to get the first years to cast it accurately. The room had created half a dozen shooting booths for this very purpose. Neville drew his wand and fired off the spell they would be learning. A colored blob smacked straight into the target's center. This earned him a round of applause, a joking kiss on the cheek from Padma plus a chocolate frog from the box they'd brought as a reward for marksmanship. Colin asking if they got both rewards for hitting a bullseye, or if they could choose drew a laugh from Padma as the first 6 were moved into position to attempt the spell. Henrika couldn't help but admire the thinking behind this. It didn't matter how powerful a curse you could cast if it missed what you were aiming at, teaching accuracy right from the off would stand them in good stead for the rest of their time in Hogwarts. Harry and Hermione were organizing the group to practice the other side of the coin, evasion. Their part of the room had a terrain littered with boulders, broken pieces of wall and tree stumps, all perfect for little bodies to hide behind. As first years, they wouldn't be able to fight back or shield themselves for a while yet. Teaching them to get away from trouble was also something Henrika agreed with. They were using 2 training dummies, set to fire the blob spell the other group was using. Since the blob disappeared in under 5 minutes, it would let them know who was tagged without leaving any permanent marks on their clothes. The dummies would wander around, firing the spell at the hiding first years. Again they entered the course 6 at a time, with last person to be caught winning a chocolate frog. The first years not shooting or hiding were all busy calling encouragement or even warnings to those who were. As a teacher, Henrika could easily see that these 4 had put a lot of thought into this. She could detect Bill's input to their lesson plan too. The mere fact they had one put them miles ahead of Lockhart from the very beginning. That they had engaged their students, focused their attention on the task in hand and then even made it fun put them on a different planet from that faker. Just watching their friends take part was also educational. Luna's tactic of keeping on the move and using all the cover the room provided was soon being universally adopted. It made more sense than the first winner's method, simply hiding behind something and hoping you were last to be hit. The cheering from the shooting booth was also becoming more frequent as their stock of chocolate frogs began to take a pounding. She knew they had discussed swapping the groups over. Halfway through the lesson, all 4 had listened to her opinion on the matter. Tonight was their first lesson, so it was important not to push too much information at them. It also meant that those present knew exactly what was in store for them next week, and Henrika was sure their students would be looking forward to it. By now, every group of 6 had at least 4 attempts at their activity. With the final rotations finishing off, it was time to sum things up. Henrika had an idea how to end the lesson on a real high. Right, first year, you all did very well tonight. Next week we'll see you swap activities. This drew some excited cheering. Now, would you like to see a small demonstration of why these skills are so important? This drew shouts of yes from every single student. Harry had his shide on his arm and was moving into the center of the area they'd been using to teach the first year. Hermione, Padma and Neville drew their wands and took up positions around the area. Kicking off his shoes, Harry decided to give them a show. He also knew he would need the enhanced speed his armor offered if he was to avoid these 3 firing spells at him. Henrika shouted. Beggan and some of the first years forgot to breathe. What they were watching though was pretty breathtaking. Harry was moving like lightning, he needed to though. The other 3 were all moving too, not allowing him to stay in cover for more than a few seconds. They continually attempted to trap him but Harry always seemed to be able to wriggle away. When Henrika called time, his shield was a mass of blobs but none had hit their intended target. There was an explosion of loud cheering for all 4 of their now smiling tutors. If there was a better way to end a first lesson than that, Henrika had yet to find it. Right everyone, 20 minutes to curfew, so don't dawdle on the way back to your houses. Will we see you next week? This was greeted by loud cries of yes from every single first year. They were then approached by a delegation of Luna, Ginny and Colin. The 3 clearly spoke for the rest of their yearmates. The little blonde went first. We would like to thank you for doing this, we know you didn't really have to. We wanted to name our group so everyone would know how pleased we were to be here. Ginny was battling her blushing as she said the next bit. We looked up the name for a group of crows but didn't really want to be called crows murderers so we were stuck. Colin barely let Ginny finish before jumping in with his bit. Then yesterday, Luna heard Sirius use a word that seemed to fit perfectly. We would like to call ourselves crows marauders. Henrika couldn't hold her laughter at Colin's suggestion. Oh, Sirius and Remus are just going to love that. Brilliant. Ginny then lost her battle with blushing as she removed something from her pocket. Dean Thomas heard Colin and I talking about it. He drew this for us. I thought it was good and was wondering if we could get badges made, or something. Harry, taking the parchment from Ginny, saw her courage fail as she melted back into her friends. The drawing was very good, depicting a crow, perched on the cross guard of a sword that bore more than a passing familiarity to the one at his waist. Wow, Ginny, this is really good. I'll look into the club badges thing, if that's what everyone wants. Harry was quickly reassured that's exactly what they wanted. They were filing out the door as Henrika was congratulating them on a very successful lesson. They found Fred and George waiting on them. This looks like a conversation a professor shouldn't hear. I'll see you for tomorrow. They walked in the direction of Gryffindor Tower to drop Neville off, and listen to what the twins wanted. Guys, we need to talk to you about our prank deal. We've devised a way to humiliate that useless arse Lockhart, but it might break our deal. After hearing what the twins had planned, all four were in agreement that they would take their chances. The plan was just too good to pass up. Urgit delivered a letter to Harry next morning. Hermione was absently sharing her bacon between both familiars while watching Harry, concerned as her boyfriend's brows furrowed at the letter he was reading. She couldn't hold herself any longer and just had to ask. Bad news. Harry turned to see Hermione biting her lip. He thought it was so cute. Yeah, it would appear we've stabbed ourselves in the foot. With his girlfriend staring intently, he continued. With a new history course and Professor Snape gone and Assistant Ambassador Weasley pushing up the defense OWL and NEWT scores, Hogwarts has never had it so good. That hardly generates momentum to get rid of its headmaster. Father says most appear to be keeping a close eye on the castle and adopting a wait-and-see policy. Not what we wanted, but at least the old wizard is now being watched. One more incident like last year and he'll be out the door. Both Hermione and Padma shivered at the very thought of another troll, since they were also both aware of Dobby's warning. Hermione then asked about the news she really wanted to know about. Did your father say anything else about your message? Oh, he's taking the points I raised under advisement. Hermione was now stroking Moonlight with one hand while smoothing Urgit's feathers with the other. Both familiars seemed delighted at this arrangement, but Harry could see the worry on her face. He reached out and gently stroked her cheek. Hermione, my father's a goblin. Under advisement, to him means he'll now be looking back at that night from every perspective. That was really all we asked for, all we could hope for. This drew a smile from her. I can't wait to read Henrika's book. I'll get my mum and dad a copy too. They didn't get to say any more as Master Pitsley had arrived. It was time for potions. Urgit flew off, but Moonlight had another target. The little blonde was always good for a belly rub, and perhaps a little more bacon. The twins had confirmed after potions that they had put their plan into operation. Even those two, though, were surprised at the speed the next phase was achieved. McGonagall stood that very lunchtime and announced those plans to the school. Some facts were brought to my attention earlier, and an idea that's just short of genius. George and Fred Weasley, 50 points to Gryffindor, each. This resulted in loud cheering from the Lions, and disbelieving glances from the other three houses. Now, before I get accused of bias, let me tell you the rest. The exact date of Merlin's birthday is unknown. The best it can be tied down to is the last week of September. There are supposedly very few living holders of the Order of Merlin, 3 of whom are sitting having lunch with us today. After pointing out these facts, the Weasley twins then suggested we hold a ball in Merlin's honor, on Saturday, the 26th of September. This was greeted by loads of excitement from the hall. Harry knew this was his part. Minerva spotted the boy standing and thought she might have overstepped the mark. She really should have spoke to Harry first. She didn't give Dumbledore a second glance. Something wrong, Centurion? No, Professor, I think the ball is a great idea. I just wanted to mention the fact that, if we are recognizing the 26th as Merlin's birthday, tradition dictates I must wear my award on that day. I wouldn't want people to get the wrong idea. Understandable, Centurion Crow. Perhaps Professor Hobson could cover some of the protocols involved in her history of magic lessons. Henrika quickly agreed, saying she would need a few days to check the appropriate texts. Albus saw the obvious trap, but, since he wasn't the intended prey, the headmaster decided to play along. He was hanging on to Hogwarts by his fingertips. Here was a chance at some positive publicity. Anything that would see his name linked in a good light with Harry was something Albus couldn't really resist. It was with some trepidation Albus stood. He didn't know if this would empty the hall again. Like Centurion Crow, I also think this ball is a good idea. I hope you don't think I'm being presumptuous either when I also have to wear my Order of Merlin. Albus then had an announcement to boost his own popularity. Well, it really couldn't be much lower at the moment. To help prepare for this unexpected ball, I think an extra Hogsmeade weekend is in order. The 19th and 20th should do. After the excitement this caused, Albus wisely decided to quit while he was ahead and sat back down. Minerva thought that an extra Hogsmeade visit was a good idea, but now she had the bad news to deliver. When Hogwarts has held balls in the past, they have been restricted, with 4th year being the youngest students allowed to attend. Obviously, we're going to have some second years at this event. These restrictions are purely due to the size of the Great Hall. Harry had quickly consulted Helena, the looks of disappointment from those at the Ravenclaw table who wouldn't be eligible to attend forcing him to take action. Professor McGonagall, if that's the only thing denying everyone attending, what if we could solve the accommodation problem? Catching on at once what Harry was alluding to, Minerva only needed confirmation this was actually possible. Can Hogwarts manage that, Centurion? Easily, Professor. When Hermione and I use it in the winter for our morning training, it provides us with a room containing a running track that is at least 3 times the size of the Great Hall. The Patil twins' birthday party proved the elves have no problem finding it. Hogwarts will provide the facilities to accommodate the entire school. In that case, everyone's invited. McGonagall's announcement saw a cheer reverberate around the hall. Only Lockhart didn't look excited by this. He actually appeared horrified. The second years had history of magic next. Harry kept chuckling all the way to Henrika's class. The only downside to this was he would again be a guest of honor, and have to sit with the other holders of the award. This was why Fred and George had warned him, but Harry thought it was well worth the risk. Even if they were wrong, and Lockhart turned up wearing his supposed Order of Merlin, Harry would simply spend most of the evening on the dance floor with Hermione, hardly a hardship. It was Morag who finally asked him what was going on. Harry's answer set them all thinking. My award was put in its box after the ball. Dumbledore's is probably framed on his wall somewhere. Do you honestly think if Lockhart actually had an Order of Merlin, he wouldn't be walking about with it pinned to his frilly robes? Every book of his has the Jit's picture all over it, yet not one features him wearing his most prestigious award. Same with his stories, full of his deeds, yet nowhere does it mention what he did to receive this award. He could see everyone was now listening, even Malfoy and his cronies were paying attention. Harry then delivered the final blow. The man just released an autobiography, Magical Me. It should probably have been called Mysterious Me. He still didn't say how he got an Order of Merlin. Draco had been avoiding any kind of conflict but felt he was safe enough just asking a question. Are you saying Lockhart lied about his Order of Merlin? If you're asking for my opinion, then yes. Everyone will soon know if he turns up without it. The Prophet is sure to get hold of this story, and want pictures. The Prat actually shoved Hermione away for a chance to get a picture with me. Do you think he'll want to miss getting his picture taken as one of the 3 Order of Merlin winners at Hogwarts? Pansy now thought it safe to follow Draco's example. She certainly had no love for Lockhart, but this seemed a tad excessive. So all this is just a plot to embarrass Lockhart. They were nearly at Henrika's classroom, but Harry answered anyway. Embarrass? No. Prove he's a liar? Yes. If he's lied about that, how many of his other claims are true? Morag felt the Slytherins had muscled in on her questions. They may have asked good questions, but she felt there was something still missing. Can't he just buy one, and won't there be records? Susan actually answered this. An Order of Merlin is not just a piece of metal, it's heavily charmed to bind with the person it's awarded to. We could all touch Harry's award at the ball, but none of us could ever wear it. The magic involved simply wouldn't allow it. As to records, a big enough bribe to the right person could make those records say whatever you wanted. Padma had a different theory. I think it might be another case like Binns. Someone says something often enough and it just gets accepted as being the truth. We'll all find out in a few weeks anyway. Hermione had the last word on the matter, and this really was food for thought. I can't believe how far the Weasley twins have come. This time last year, you could bet Lockhart would be sporting a pair of donkey ears and braying like an ass. Padma just couldn't be outdone though. Hermione, I thought he was an ass. It was still warm and dry enough to run outside, so that's where Harry and Hermione were next morning. Harry had to broach a rather delicate matter. Hermione, I've been thinking about your birthday. This caused her to actually stop running. Harry, you totally spoiled me on my last birthday, and then again at Christmas. I don't need expensive presents, I've got everything I need standing right beside me. This earned her a kiss from her boyfriend before they started running again. What I intended to ask you was, if you wanted a big birthday party like Padma, or prefer just some close friends. They ran for a bit before Hermione answered. She was obviously weighing up the options before reaching a decision. She decided just to say those options out loud so Harry could help. On the one hand, I really don't like being the center of attention. It's different when I'm with you, I know no one's looking at me. It was a rather exasperated Harry who answered that. Did it never occur to you that might be because they know your boyfriend's the jealous type, the boyfriend who's never without his sword at his hip? I saw guys eyeing you up all summer, I made sure they knew you were with me. This caused Hermione to stop again, and then throw herself at Harry in a hug so fierce that it almost saw his armor activate. They began running again. Hermione had reached her decision. So, just the holiday crowd then, and perhaps Luna, Colin and I suppose Ginny. What about letting the girls bring dates? This got a puzzled look from Hermione until Harry explained. I intend to spend the entire night with a certain birthday girl in my arms. That would leave Neville having to cope with both the Patil sisters, Susan and Hannah. Padma would just love us for that. Hermione quickly did the maths in her head, and didn't like the number she came up with. That's 13, Harry. We don't need to invite bad luck, she usually turns up herself. How about inviting Henrika? Allowing her to bring a date would see Sirius there too, and having a couple of adults attend would probably square the party with McGonagall as well. Decision made, they pushed on with their run. Both were looking forward to crossing blades after they were warmed up. Lucius was way beyond warmed up, he was quickly getting to the exhausted stage. The little battered creature at his feet was very glad of that. What do you mean, you couldn't find it? I gave you very specific instructions. Dobby followed Master's instructions, I promise I did. I wasn't seen and didn't speak to anyone. I searched the entire room 7 times, I even looked under the pillow when they were sleeping. There was no book there, Master. Dobby looked and looked. This was something Lucius was not expecting. The diary could now be anywhere, even inside Slytherin House. An anonymous warning would be ignored, and anything implicating Lucius Malfoy would come with a one-way ticket to Azkaban included. Even warning Draco was a risk he couldn't take. His son couldn't be seen to be implicated in any way with this matter, or the goblins would soon have Draco barred from the family vault. His idea of revenge was turning into a nightmare that was now running out of control. Hogwarts would soon be visited by death and destruction, and they couldn't even afford to move their son to another school. It was change days indeed for the Malfoy family. And thanks for reading, and especially all those who took the time to vote. Voting closes on the 18th and I will post how we got on as soon as we hear. Slug Club. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, a big thank you to JKR, the owner of Harry Potter who permits us to construct our sandcastles on her beach. Whether those sandcastles resemble Hogwarts or a house of horrors can sometimes be purely down to conjecture. One thing unites us all though, none of us are making any money off our writing here. Please keep that in mind as you read our efforts. Chapter 39. Horace had tried to be subtle, it was something he was usually very good at, but subtlety clearly wasn't working in this case. His repeated attempts to get closer to the boy who lived had been rebuffed at every turn. With his friends always around him, and Harry not taking the normal potions class, his opportunities to get near the boy were being severely limited. With this ball pending, and the 3 Order of Merlin winners being guests of honor, Horace didn't want anyone else getting their hooks into Harry, certainly not before him. As his letters were being ignored, he was going to personally hand-deliver the next invitation. This course of action also presented its own problems, how and when to do it. Mealtimes were out, that could turn into too much of a spectacle. Horace's choices were eventually whittled down, leaving interrupting one of Harry's classes as his best option. Which particular class was then an easy decision. Minerva, Phileas or Pomona would all chase him if he attempted such a thing. The young history professor should provide no such obstacles in his quest to entrap what would be the star acquisition in his slug club. Excuse me, Professor Hobson, sorry to interrupt your lesson. Horace's eyes were drawn, like the rest of the class, to the box held open in Henrika's hands. The history professor had a priceless teaching aid for her lesson, an Order of Merlin, first class. Henrika had been loaned Harry's award to demonstrate exactly what the Order of Merlin actually looked like. It took a couple of days to research the material, but, since Monday, all her classes had learned the facts and protocol behind this most prestigious award. Sirius had practically fallen over with laughter when he'd heard what they were up to, accepting the invitation to Hermione's birthday party on the understanding that he would be invited to the ball too. The history professor hid her shudder well, as Call Me Sluggy entered her class. There was something about this man that just made her skin crawl. She'd grown accustomed to males eyeing her up and down, almost exclusively as an object of sexual desire. With Sluggy, it felt as if he was calculating how much he could charge others for renting out her sexual favors, once he owned her. Henrika had never met anyone with a more appropriate nickname. Horace Slughorn was one slimy bastard. None of this showed on her beautiful face as she contrived a weak smile for her Hogwarts colleague. How can I help you, Professor Slughorn? Oh my, that's spectacular. His eyes glued to Harry's award, Horace was now more determined than ever to add the boy who lived to his exclusive club. Sorry to disturb you, Professor Hobson, but I seem to have a slight communications problem. Every owl I send to Harry here seems to go astray, so I thought I would deliver these invitations myself. I know how disappointing it can be for second years to watch those merely a year above them heading off to Hogsmeade, so near and yet so far, that is why I have organized one of my little intimate soirees for Saturday night. I have invitations here for Miss Bones, Mr. Longbottom and Harry. Horace held his invitation out to Harry, only to be greeted with a steely glare. It's Centurion Crow, and the answer is no. A flustered Horace could only splutter at what. In reply, Harry then spelt it out for the head of Slytherin. It is no secret Professor Hobson spent part of the summer holidaying with my family, yet she still refers to me in class as Centurion Crow. On the other hand, we have never met, far less been introduced. By what right do you refer to me as Harry? Slughorn tried to steer the conversation onto calmer waters, having no idea this was as calm as it would get. My apologies, Centurion, no insult was intended. I hope this didn't influence your decision and we can start again. Let's use this party as the first step to getting to know one another. Apology accepted, I still have a previous engagement though. Oh come now, what else is there to do inside Hogwarts on a Saturday night? Horace was then faced with the unusual sight of the entire class laughing at him. Neville was next to speak up. I too have a previous engagement, Professor. I have no intention of missing Hermione's birthday party. Thinking of how he could still swing this deal around, Horace referred to the invitation that was still clutched in his hand. These invitations are for you and a partner. I had of course assumed Miss Granger would be a guest too. That will be a perfect way to celebrate her birthday. Again this was met with laughter, even members of his own house were laughing at him now. Susan was next to decline. I too have a previous engagement. I was lucky enough to receive an invitation to Hermione's party, and have no intention of missing it. Harry throws the best parties. This was greeted with total agreement, some of it grudgingly given to be sure. That was more to do with those not receiving an invitation to the latest one, rather than in any way disputing Susan's statement. Horace was a trio though, it took a lot to dissuade him once he'd set his mind to something. Ah, then you'll need staff supervision. I of course offer my services. He was cut off immediately by Harry. That won't be necessary, Professor Hobson has already agreed to fulfill that role. But surely you will need a male adult there too. That avenue was also swiftly closed off. Lord Black has kindly agreed to give up his Saturday night to be here in the castle. These arrangements have already been agreed with our head of house and Professor McGonagall. Horace still had Harry's invitation in his hand but was left clutching at straws. Very well, I would still like to attend though. Surely that is possible. It was Hermione who finally lost it at this point. First, you want to invite us to your party, now you want to gatecrash mine. No, in a muggle school, a professor inviting children to a little intimate soiree would see the police, their auras, involved. Who chaperones at your parties, Professor? It was an enraged Horace Slughorn who took a step toward Hermione. How dare you? Just as Dan Granger had predicted to his wife and Sirius in that cafe, a threat to Hermione and Centurion Crow showed up. He was firmly between his bonded and Slughorn, it was time to lose the niceties Sirius had been teaching them. Sometimes, Harry just had to let his inner goblin out to play. Miss Granger is a friend of the Goblin Nation, and under my personal protection. Any threat, verbal or otherwise, will be met with a goblin response. Are you threatening me, boy? I'll have you expelled. Not threatening, Professor, just passing on a warning. I'm a Centurion first, and a Hogwarts student second. You need to understand that fact. Screeching abuse at a goblin female will see you lose your head, literally. No goblin would ever stand back and allow that to happen. I have now explained the situation to you, I trust it won't happen again. Harry then turned his back on Slughorn to talk with Hermione. We have people like that in goblin society too, they eke out a living by putting one contact in touch with another contact. They don't actually contribute anything to our society, they've just found a nice, comfortable, niche for themselves. We call them leeches, rather appropriate name in this case, don't you think? His wink almost had Hermione laughing before Harry turned around to face a stunned Slughorn again. This is the part where you tell me how impressive your list of contacts is, and how much they could help me. Can I just point out my father is an ambassador, Lord Black is my godfather, I am heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter and that's my Order of Merlin, first class, in Professor Hobson's hands. Add to that I holidayed this summer with the Bones, Longbottoms and Pattles, now tell me what your contacts can do for me. The class was stunned, having never seen Harry act like this before. It was reminiscent of the most arrogant of purebloods. He wasn't finished though. Tell me, Professor, do you count Tom Riddle among those contacts? This drew gasps from the other students, and saw a shocked Slughorn take a step back. Harry's attitude now began to make sense, and he still wasn't finished. I'll bet Riddle was in your slug club. You were his head of house, you made him prefect, and then head boy. Did you use your contacts to help Riddle after he left Hogwarts? Slughorn couldn't have gotten any paler if a plague of leeches had attached themselves to his bloated body. Blows were being delivered here that his ego might never recover from. You should have worked out by now that my friends and I have been avoiding you, now you know why. Stay away from me and my friends, we have no intention of becoming part of Sluggy's collection of misfits and Death Eaters. That Slughorn was receiving hostile stares, even from his own house members, rang the death knell for a resurrected Slug Club. He couldn't give invitations away to the starving after Harry's tirade. Horace though wasn't about to stand here and take that, not from a second year. Who are you to accuse me, boy? You think brandishing a name makes you brave. You have no idea of the power the Dark Lord wields, or the consequences we'll all face when he returns. Horace decided to say no more, the sword now pointing in his direction certainly played some part in reaching that decision. He was honest enough to admit the sword was not the major reason for his silence, looking into those green eyes was a lot more frightening. He'd often heard that Harry had his mother's eyes, Horace would now refute that. They may be the same color and shape, but that was all. These contained a fierceness and ruthless determination Horace had rarely witnessed before, and certainly never in one so young. This sword is the consequences your Dark Lord will face when he returns, it won't be alone. My sword will be backed by every blade Gringotts can muster, and every one the Ministry has to hand. Voldemort had way less than 100 followers last time, yet people like you cowered in fear and almost let him win. Sealing a house in the middle of the night, as decent people slept in their beds, before burning everything to the ground is nothing more than the work of rabid animals. These animals will be rounded up and dealt with, just how many of those animals will be current or former slugs? As if to emphasize Harry wouldn't be alone, Hermione had her blade drawn and wands were finding their way into hands all around the classroom. No one felt Harry needed help with Slughorn, this was purely a gesture of support. As well as Henrika, there were also Slytherins with their wands now drawn. Horace was just glad none of those wands were pointing at him, the glare from a sword-wielding boy who lived was more than enough to put him off his crystallized pineapple. You are standing there now, no doubt with information that would help us win this fight. Will you go and speak with Amelia Bones about this? I really don't think so. Even by your inactions, you have chosen your side, and everyone in this classroom can see it. By all means, use your fabled contacts to pass the word, tell them this from me. There is no more middle ground, this coming fight will affect all of us. You have already chosen your path, and it's a path that disgusts me. How Dumbledore thinks you're fit to lead a house is just one more crime to lay at the headmaster's door. It was a livid head of Slytherin who scuttled out the room. To his credit, Sluggy managed not to leave a trail of liquid behind him. They were just finishing off the dinner when their head of house approached the Ravenclaw table. Centurion, I have been asked to accompany you to a meeting with the headmaster. This left Harry puzzled. Master Flitwick, you know that can't happen without my father present. I informed the headmaster of this, he said the issue was so serious it couldn't wait. The claim is you threatened Professor Slughorn with your sword. The second year Ravenclaws responded en masse to that allegation. Phileas didn't need to be head of the House of the Smart to understand they were collectively rubbishing that allegation. I've been advised that, should you decide not to accompany me, the headmaster would have no other option but to take Professor Slughorn's word. That would lead to the cancelling of Miss Granger's party on Saturday night. Hermione was first to react. No, Harry, I will not be used by Dumbledore to force you into anything. Sorry guys, the party is now cancelled. This drew groans from those who were invited but Hermione wouldn't be budged. She held her mate's hand to emphasize her point. We both know Dumbledore is trying to provoke a reaction here, let's not give him one. As long as I get to spend my birthday with you, I'll be happy. Harry spotted the Ravenclaw ghost and asked her advice. My Lady Ravenclaw, can the headmaster do this? Her answer was not what Harry hoped to hear. In matters of indiscipline, the heads of house and headmaster have a wide range of options open to them. This party is clearly something you want, withholding it is therefore an appropriate form of punishment. Padma was furious, seeing her friends get punished like this. Quote ellipsis. But my lady, surely if the punishment is unjust. The headmaster has finally wised up. This drew all the attention onto Harry, waiting on an explanation to his statement. Dumbledore probably knows these allegations are nothing more than a pile of dragon dung. He's punishing Hermione while smugly sitting back, waiting to see what I'll do. If I rush to his office, proclaiming my innocence, he wins a small victory. If I contact my father and allow him to deal with it, again I appear weak. Accepting the punishment still works for him, because he gets some payback for all the trouble I've caused him. He felt Hermione squeeze his hand before speaking proudly to him. Those lessons with Sirius are really paying off. Harry looked to Hermione before answering their head of house. Master Flitwick, I won't be accompanying you to the headmaster's office. He knows that option is not available without my father present, or is old age affecting his mental health. Phileas supposed he really shouldn't have been surprised that these two quickly spotted the trap Dumbledore had set. I'll tell him, Centurion. You may also tell him this will not go unanswered. Using Hermione's birthday as a lever to get to me is about what we've come to expect from Dumbledore. It makes me wonder why I actually come here. Potions, defense and history are all organized by my father, and I'm teaching Professor McGonagall our method of transfiguration. No offense intended, Master Flitwick, but charms, herbology and astronomy can be tutored too, and I wouldn't have to put up with Dumbledore, Slughorn or Lockhart. Phileas left to deliver Harry's answer, knowing how much this must be hurting. He tried to explain to Dumbledore that, since goblins don't celebrate Christmas or any other holidays like that, a person's birthday was the most important day of the year. Knowing that this was Hermione's first birthday as Harry's mate made this an extra special occasion, not that he told the headmaster that last piece of news. Dumbledore had been supremely confident the threat to Hermione's party would quickly see Harry comply with whatever scheme he'd conjured up. Hermione had instantly taken that option away by declaring the party cancelled. The head of Ravenclaw didn't think Harry's threat to leave was an idle one either. To Harry, not being able to celebrate his mate's birthday would seem too high a price to pay for what the castle had to offer. Filia's main worry though was how many others he would take with him, and whether Hogwarts could survive the public outcry his leaving would generate. Dumbledore certainly wouldn't survive as headmaster. Knowing that fact just might be the thing that would finally tip Harry's hand, he may consider that a price worth paying to leave the castle. Back at the now shocked Ravenclaw table, it was Padma who asked the question that a lot of people wanted to know the answer to. Would you really leave Hogwarts, Harry? He could see the looks of disbelief from all around the table, a table that contained more than Ravenclaws as his friends had rallied round. He tried to explain his position. Last year was the first time I ever celebrated Christmas, something I plan to do again this year. To a goblin, someone's birthday is the most important day of the year. What would you do if Dumbledore just announced that Christmas was cancelled, made into just another day? You were in that class, that smarmy slug has been chasing after me since the Express, am I just supposed to play along? I hate my fame, and am certainly not going to play along with anyone else trying to use it for their benefit. It was a very nervous Padma who asked the next bit. What about the rest of us? My main reason for attending Hogwarts in the first place was to see if I could make some friends. I happen to think I've made some very good ones. Whatever I do, whether it's tutoring or another school, any of my friends who want to join me will be more than welcome. What about me? The quivering voice sounded as if its owner was close to tears. It was also so faint that Harry wasn't sure if he was supposed to hear it. A miserable Luna was not something Harry would ever tolerate, not when he could easily fix it. You weren't listening, Luna. I said those friends who want to join me will be more than welcome. As the implications of what Harry said slowly dawned on Luna, her smile was like the rising sun. It just got brighter and brighter. Watching this, Harry felt he knew how to brighten up a few more of their friends. All were disappointed that the party was cancelled. I was keeping this as a surprise for Saturday, but now seems a good time to let you know. The 3rd through to 7th years will all be able to hit Hogsmeade this weekend. Most will be making preparations for the ball while we'll need to attend in what we brought to Hogwarts. I didn't think this was very fair, so, as part of Hermione's birthday celebrations, there will be a squad of Gringotts tailors in the castle on Saturday morning. They will be bringing loads of suits and dresses in the style we wore to the summer ball, and they are exclusively for those who can't leave the castle. Namely, the 1st and 2nd years. I would advise you to get down early as they will be working on a first-come basis. They will have clothes for everyone. You may not get exactly what you want though if someone picks it first. Morag was not alone in almost hyperventilating at that thought. She did though manage to express her thanks. Harry, that's fantastic. I'll gladly wear anything they bring, but you didn't leave us much time to send home for the gold to buy them. Probably because you won't need gold. It's part of my gift to Hermione. For us to attend the ball dressed differently would make us stand out from the rest of you, not something we would intentionally do. At the same time, why should we let some of the older students attend the ball dressed finer than us? The solution was simple. Even the smart Ravenclaws were struggling to understand this. Mandy needed confirmation. So, you're buying us dresses as a birthday present for Hermione? Yes, so Hermione can wear the new dress I got her to the ball. Harry, you got me a new dress. I still have the one from summer. Quote ellipsis. Which has been all over the prophet. Can't have people thinking I can't buy my girlfriend a new dress. This was said with such a smile that everyone understood the prophet had nothing to do with it. Harry just wanted to buy Hermione a new dress, one that would probably see her become the belle of the ball, and was prepared to kit out everyone else in a similar fashion so she could wear it. Oh Padma, Parvati, Susan and Hannah, there are new dresses with your name on them too. Neville didn't get one though. This got a laugh from all of them as news of this quickly spread to all 4 houses. Albus was waiting with Horace in his office. Getting Harry to apologize to the head of Slytherin would be a good start. It would get Horace off his back and teach Harry a little humility, something the boy was sadly lacking in. It was a good job he was sitting down though as Phileas entered the office alone. Phileas, where is Harry? Sitting chatting with his friends. The little professor refused to say another word. Phileas was really angry with Albus and had no intention of making this easy. Albus was struggling to believe the lad wouldn't rush up here. Harry had raced to the infirmary that night on the merest chance Miss Granger could be in danger. How could he possibly be still sitting with his friends? Did you pass on my message? Yes. The silence drew as Phileas refused to say any more. If Albus wanted to treat him as a message boy, he would act like one. What was his response? I believe he is currently debating with his friends why he bothers attending Hogwarts. Most of his classes are already tutored and he wouldn't need to endure 2 professors who want to use his fame, and a headmaster determined to assert control over his life. Personally, I can see his point. Albus was so shocked at his miscalculation, he didn't even notice Minerva and Henrika entering his office. Quote ellipsis. And Miss Granger's birthday party. Oh, she saw right through you. Miss Granger refused to let it be a lever for you to control her boyfriend. She cancelled the party immediately. Horace then totally misread the situation. Well, if he apologizes, my offer for Saturday night still stands. Henrika exploded at that. Dumbledore, where did you get this slimy bastard? He comes into my class, causes a rumpus and then goes running off to you with a story of big bad second years beating him up. Harry verbally destroyed this smarmy git, and his sluggy club. He was prepared to back those views up physically after this buffoon started shouting at Hermione. Slughorn's reputation is now shit even amongst the Slytherins, yet that's who you chose to back, instead of even talking to me. It was my class, it should be me you are summoning, not a student you were forbidden from speaking with. Kindly remember who you are speaking to, Professor Hobson. Quote ellipsis. And you would do well to remember that I don't work for Albus Dumbledore, I would never have taken the job otherwise. If Harry is seriously considering leaving Hogwarts, you can bet he'll take his friends with him. I honestly don't know if the school could survive the publicity of that. I know you couldn't. No one will be going anywhere once Harry calms down and comes to his senses. This time it was Minerva who got ripped into the headmaster. Harry was sitting laughing with his friends. There is no calming down for him to do. Judging by the amount of excitement being generated down there, I would guess Harry just announced his surprise. His father wrote to me requesting permission. I of course said yes. The headmaster made no attempt to hide the sarcasm in his question. Since I am the headmaster, don't you think I should be aware of this surprise? Well, since you've left me to run the school for years, that would be a no. Harry has arranged for goblin tailors to come here Saturday morning, providing dresses and suits. No, I will not allow such a thing. Promoting goblin wares, while denying trade to the village of Hogsmeade cannot be allowed. I'm surprised at you, Minerva. There was no way McGonagall was going to stand for that. Perhaps if you would shut up and let me finish, you wouldn't be. These tailors are here specifically for all the first and second years, students not allowed to attend Hogsmeade. This is a service Centurion Crow is providing free of charge, all bills are being met by him. The greed expressed in Slughorn's face was visible to all in the headmaster's office. He's paying for new clothes for the entire 2 years' worth of students. Minerva didn't really try to hide the disgust she felt for Horace when answering him. Yes, for some of these children, these will be the finest clothes they've ever owned. They will also attend their first ball, dressed as well as their peers. Was I supposed to say no to an offer like that? On behalf of Hogwarts, I graciously accepted Barchoke's offer, and offered him our gratitude in return for making such a gesture. You thank him by forcing Miss Granger's party to be cancelled. Horace felt his situation was being ignored. You can't have hoodlums threatening their professors with swords. An angry Veela cut him off before any more could be said. Point number 1, Slughorn, you are not one of his professors and had no reason, other than your own personal gain, for approaching Harry in my class. Point number 2, Harry never threatened you with his sword, which destroys your entire reason for running off to Dumbledore in the first place. If looks could kill, Henrika would have been vaporized by the glare Horace was directing at her. The Veela was unconcerned as she told the true story of what had happened in her class earlier. Professor Slughorn here was loudly proclaiming the fate that would await us all when his friend, Voldemort, returned. Harry drew his sword to demonstrate exactly what was waiting on Voldemort should he return. At no point was Harry's blade anywhere near Sluggy. Was this the story you heard, Headmaster? Albus now had his head in his hands, wondering how things had went so wrong. Again. He understood that the game was over the instant Miss Granger had cancelled her own party. With no leverage, Harry was always going to refuse his request. Now, he was in an even worse position, one that it was probably impossible for him to recover from. There was no way he could reinstate the party. Any remaining credibility would be instantly destroyed. Albus might as well resign here and now. He needed some leverage on Harry, anything at all he could use, and time was running out. There was no doubt there would be a full report on its way to the boy's father. Hobson would see to that. Amelia and Augusta would also be receiving full reports, only their sources would be different. Both their charges were actually in the class. I suppose we should be grateful he hasn't withdrawn from next week's ball. Again Minerva cut off her boss. He may not have withdrawn but already asked for a set of conditions. He won't sit near you or Lockhart, and refuses to be photographed with either of you, and that was before your latest escapade. Henrika then added to their misery. You both will also have his godfather to deal with when he comes here on Saturday. Sirius will not be pleased that a party he was invited to was forced to be cancelled. You can expect an irate Lord Black to make his opinion known. Phileas followed both witches out the headmaster's office, leaving Horace to ask Dumbledore if he was still going to punish Harry. Horace, cancelling the party is punishment enough, especially since it's now emerging all the boy did was refuse your clumsy approach. Trust me, Horace, you don't want to push this any further. Sirius will be livid and Harry's father isn't exactly the forgiving type. My advice would be to stay well away from Harry, and even further from Miss Granger. Approach her again and you just might get a closer look at Gryffindor's famous sword. It was a very disgruntled Horace who left the headmaster's office. He hadn't gotten one single thing he wanted. Albus hadn't either, but he was slowly getting used to that outcome when dealing with the boy who lived. The birthday girl made her way down the stairs to the common room, finding herself engulfed in a pair of oh-so-familiar arms. Hermione made a startling discovery. Getting kissed as a teenager was so much better as her boyfriend delivered her birthday kiss. Harry was nuzzling into Hermione's hair as he wished her a happy birthday. We may not be able to have a party, but I'm still hoping to make your day special. Hermione was in Harry's arms so gave the only answer she could. Harry, it's already special. You don't need to do any more. I know, but I want to. We better set off for our run. I have plans for the rest of the day. Harry, you know I don't like surprises. Oh, I think you'll like these ones. Ones, as in more than one. Come on, at least give me a clue. It is my birthday, you know. Ha ha, Granger, nice try. Let's go. Showered and dressed in her dueling robes after her run, Hermione now found Padma and Luna waiting on her. Birthday hugs were followed by gifts. There was no joke item from her best friend this year. The book's title might have caused some raised eyebrows amongst muggles. To Hermione, The Bonds of Love would be read from cover to cover, looking for information on the special bond she shared with her mate. The present she received from their younger friend was exquisite, strange, yet very touching at the same time. Hermione found herself holding a flower that had been turned into glass crystal, reflecting the light in a rainbow of colors. That the flower was a dandelion was neither here nor there. Hermione's smile saw Luna's face glow with a happiness that outshone her gift. It's a family spell my mother taught me. That's the first time I've cast it not using her wand. My room at home is full of them. It's beautiful, Luna, thank you very much. Harry's arrival saw them all head down to breakfast, to find a great hall almost bereft of first and second year students. Neville soon joined them, wishing Hermione a happy birthday and handing over his present. Opening the wrapping revealed an elaborately carved silver photo frame. Hermione was in tears at the inscription, never mind the subject matter. Friends Forever was a precious gift to a girl who'd been friendless just over a year ago. The picture featured the four of them at the Black Sea, and Hermione remembered Augusta taking it. It was a wizarding picture that had them all laughing and clowning around for the camera. How happy they were was clearly projected from the frame. The girls were so happy at this gift. Neville got a thank you kiss from both Hermione and Padma. Harry loved the gift too, but refrained himself to a comment. Okay, Longbottom, way to set the present bar high. I'm sure you've got it covered, Harry. When Gran showed me that photograph, I knew it would be perfect for this. I've got a copy for you and Padma too. Mine is in a frame beside my bed. Hermione had it sitting in the middle of the table and kept glancing at it as they ate breakfast. It was Padma who broached the subject of the missing students. Where is everybody? Well, the boys are queued outside Professor Flitwick's room, while the girls are waiting at Henrika's. New clothes for the ball are apparently more important than breakfast. Neville's explanation had Padma looking toward Luna. She quickly answered the unspoken question. Oh, I'm just happy to be going. I'll pop along later and pick up a dress. Well, we should be thankful for small mercies. At least we won't have Colin shoving his camera in our faces while he's waiting to get fitted for a suit. I swear some days I can still see flashes when I close my eyes. I think you should have a word with him, Harry. The blank looks coming from her fellow Ravenclaws generated the first twinge of unease in Padma. He does follow you around, taking pictures when you least expect it. Hermione was shaking her head. Not since the first day or so. He's calmed down since then. The giggles coming from Luna told them they were all missing something here, all except Neville. His head was down as he tried to eat his breakfast and blend into the surroundings. Unease was quickly turning to alarm as Padma asked for answers. Okay, Luna, what's going on? Nothing at all. Colin is just sweet on you, very sweet. Padma's gaze shifted to Harry. He was clearly trying to stifle his laughter, and just as clearly didn't know about this beforehand. Hermione appeared as shocked as she felt, but Neville still had his head down, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Neville. That was enough to see his feeble defenses crumble. I'm sorry, I should have told you. I thought Parvati would have mentioned it. It was an even more confused Padma who asked for some elaboration. Parvati, what has she got to do with this? Neville was struggling with what to say, so decided to just blurt it out. Colin asked her if she could teach him to dance. He wanted to learn for Hermione's party. Colin also wanted to know what it would be like to dance with you. Padma visibly winced at that. Ouch. I'll bet Parvati took that well. I think she got him with 3 stinging hexes before Colin managed to make it up the stairs to his dorm. It's been a running joke in Gryffindor for almost a week now. This news certainly didn't improve Padma's mood. My sister is being made fun of, and you never mentioned it. This was greeted by Neville shaking his head. It's more Colin they're ribbing. It's good-natured though, and he's fine with it. I tried to speak with Parvati about this, and got my head chewed off. She told me that she didn't need her sister's boyfriend looking out for her, and then told me to piss off. While the other 3 were contemplating that, Luna focused their thoughts. Fred and George are almost the one person, but you and your sister are very different. I could never mistake you for Parvati. Padma decided she would need to speak with her twin later. Professor Weasley had arrived for their lesson. Harry was receiving strange looks from his 3 friends as they found themselves once more in the room that had held the diadem. He offered an explanation. Today's lesson will be a bit different. We've been learning how to detect threats. Today we get a chance to use this. Last time we were in here, we didn't really have time to explore. This morning we will, and hopefully sort some of the treasure from the junk. Oh, anything that has Hermione's name on it is hers. This certainly got the birthday girl's attention. You hid presents for me in here. A smiling Harry answered his enthusiastic mate. Just some of them, Hermione. The quartet started searching, with anything that caught their interest being checked first. Bill was also on hand to make doubly sure they didn't come across anything they couldn't handle. They were working in pairs when Padma's shout had Hermione running over to see what she'd found. A small box with Hermione Granger written on a gift tag. Opening the box, she discovered a pendant that had a familiar design. A golden chain was attached to a 2-inch hoop of the same material. A beautifully carved golden crow had its wings spread in flight across the hoop, but held a golden heart in its claws, instead of a sword. I've got the badges ready for the Marauders on Tuesday night, but I had this one made especially for you. Do you like it? Harry, I love it. Will you put it on me? Hermione lifted her hair as Harry fastened the clasp before giving her a kiss. Beautiful, now let's see if you can find the other one. That was all the motivation Hermione needed, soon finding her other hidden gift. The young witch's hands were trembling as she realized what the ancient book was she now held in her hands. Harry. Helena was disgusted that Dumbledore forced you to cancel your party. She hopes this will help make up for that. The Goblin translation charm Professor Flitwick cast on you is in there too, along with quite a few others. Helena also knew you would really appreciate it. What Hermione held in her hands was a gift beyond treasure, a notebook belonging to Helena's mother, Rowena Ravenclaw. Thanks for reading. 2 The video vote closes on Monday at noon, GMT. Thanks to all who voted, and we should know if we made the final sometime this week. We'll pass on the result with my next chapter. Surprise birthday guest. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, I neither own Harry Potter nor profit in any way from my writing here. That people take time out of the day, or night, to read my efforts is all the payment I could hope for. Thanks for all those who voted for the video. Unfortunately, we didn't make the top 5 in our category, therefore don't make the final. Just to clear up any misunderstandings, I didn't make any money from the video either. Any prizes available would have gone straight to the kids involved. Chapter 40. If you closed your eyes in the Great Hall of Hogwarts, it would be impossible to guess that 70% of the students were off having their lunch in Hogsmeade. The first and second year students, who had no choice but to remain in the castle, were generating enough noise and excitement to easily compensate for those missing. All had gotten new outfits this morning and were busily describing them to anyone who'd listen. Hermione's eyes were currently closed. Well, Henrika's hands over them meant she couldn't see anything. The oss and ass of the Great Hall's occupants alerted her that something was going on, then bursting into singing, Happy Birthday, was also a rather large clue. Henrika, removing her hands, left Hermione looking at a rather large cake, complete with 13 candles, all waiting to be blown out. Sirius was levitating it to a space on the table right in front of her that her friends had cleared. She may have been blushing from all the attention, but Hermione was one happy witch. Blowing the candles out resulted in much cheering, and a pile of plates appearing beside the monster cake. Hermione cut a few pieces for her friends before allowing Hogwarts to take over the distribution. Pretty soon, everyone had a piece. With almost the entire first and second year sitting at the Ravenclaw table, Sirius and Henrika joined them. The Marauder was far too jovial for the current situation, telling those who knew him that Sirius was up to something. They didn't have long to wait. Well, Miss Granger, I also have some presents for you. I am under strict instructions though not to hand them over unless the homework we gave you last week gets an outstanding. Hermione wasn't alone in asking. Homework. Oh dear, I expected better from you four. What will we do about this situation, Professor Hobson? Well, Lord Black, they really leave me no option. I'm so disappointed in you four, I think your attitude really needs to be worked on. We shall do that tonight when the four of you have detention with me. Don't bother with dinner, oh, and wear something nice. Hannah may have started the giggling, but it soon spread as more and more students realized exactly what was happening here. The loud laughter soon attracted an unwelcome visitor, the headmaster. I couldn't help overhearing, Professor, that you gave 4 students detention for tonight. I hope you intend to have them doing meaningful work. Henrika had an answer ready for that particular question. You mean like Professor Lockhart has students assist him with answering his fan mail? These 4 have been taking extra lessons on wizarding etiquette. Lord Black and I intend to ensure they don't embarrass us at the Merlin Ball next Saturday. We'll be working their socks off tonight. Forgive me for saying so, Professor, but that sounds like a party to me. A party that you know I cancelled. A party requires invited guests, headmaster, therefore this can't be a party. These 4 will be serving detention with us. That detention will consist of learning how to behave at a party. Of course, it will only be a simulation. The sniggering from some of the pupils wasn't helping Albus's mood. This appears to me to be a clear case of you attempting to undermine my authority as headmaster, something I can't allow. Sirius cut him off, though it was clearly Lord Black who stood to face Dumbledore. I have with me the proper signed authority to take these 4 from Hogwarts right now. I would also like to add that this parchment doesn't contain a date for when they may return. This had Albus in a cold sweat. Might I see this signed authority? If I have to take the parchment out of my pocket, it stays out, and these 4 leave with us. It's your call, headmaster, what do you want to do? It wasn't lost on the students that this was pretty much a similar decision to the one Harry had been forced into by the headmaster, only Dumbledore didn't have Hermione to help him out. Albus was sorely tempted to call Black's bluff, but he couldn't be 100% sure it was a bluff. The goblin would certainly sign the papers to allow Harry and Miss Granger to leave. The other parents had also holidayed over the summer with Black. He really couldn't take the risk of losing Harry over something so trivial. It would be forgotten by the time the Merlin Ball came around. Carry on, Professor Hobson. With that, Albus headed off to his office. A delighted Hermione now pounced on Harry, leaving him to thank the person who made this possible. Sirius, have I ever told you that you're the coolest godfather on the planet? Sirius was apologizing to the other girls for not being able to give them detention, too, hence the large birthday cake at lunchtime. Padma was delighted for her friend, and then she felt the tug on her sleeve. Parvati appeared in a right temper. Were you really going to just leave Hogwarts with them? Don't I count for anything anymore? Parv, if I know Sirius, he doesn't have any such parchment in his pocket. This didn't lessen Parvati's glare, or ire. I notice you didn't answer any of the questions I just asked. I suppose that in itself is an answer. Padma watched her twin sister storm away, before Lavender spoke to her. I'll try and calm her down, but she'd gone to a lot of trouble to get a date for Hermione's party. Hearing it was cancelled was bad enough. Now it's back on, but she can't go. Lavender didn't say the final part. Both girls knew what she meant though. Parvati couldn't go, but Padma could. She felt a comforting arm slip around her shoulder and Neville's reassuring voice in her ear. It's not your fault, Padma, it isn't really Parvati's either. Dumbledore spoiled it for all of us. We both know Sirius would have everyone there if he could. Deep down, Parvati knows that too. When she cools down, she'll be sorry for what she said. Neville found himself being kissed by Padma for the second time that day. What did I do to deserve that? Just for being you, and keep your arm there. If I have to protect you from witches, you can start repaying me by discouraging amorous first years, especially ones with cameras. Hermione was having a wonderful time. A lovely meal had been shared by the 6 of them, now it was time to dance. Hogwarts had provided a room that was a lot more intimate than anything they were used to. Next week's ball would be a much grander affair. Harry glanced at the witch in his arms and smiled. I did have contingency plans in place, you know, there was no way we weren't doing this on your birthday. As they waltzed around the small dance floor, Hermione's curiosity was piqued. Oh, and just what did you have planned? Dinner for 2, followed by dancing, in my room. I had already arranged with Hogwarts to remove the bed and gotten my hands on a wizarding wireless. That sounds lovely, though I'm sure Dumbledore would still have found something to complain about. No chaperone. I can just see Slughorn volunteering. Oh, I had a chaperone arranged too, one that not even the headmaster could fault, Lady Helena. Remembering her gift saw Hermione's eyes sparkle even more. That would have given me a chance to thank her in private. Mentioning I've got one of her mother's notebooks would start a riot at the Ravenclaw table. You really get on well with her, don't you? She's a very nice lady, I can kinda understand what it must have been like for her. I have the whole goblin boy who lived rubbish to put up with. Imagine trying to live up to being Rowena Ravenclaw's daughter. Recovering her diadem was a big relief from the guilt she had been carrying. You must have noticed she now smiles a lot more than she used to. This had Hermione nodding. I came down the other morning and she was sitting having a conversation with Luna. Both looked really pleased with their chat. I'm so sorry Luna couldn't be here tonight. She was really looking forward to going to a party. Hermione had another reason to regret her original party being cancelled. I hope Parvati doesn't give Padma too hard a time because she couldn't come here tonight, Sirius explained it to everyone. Harry was hoping that his final gift for Hermione went as well as the rest of her birthday. With this one though, he could only hope, and wait for Urgit's arrival in the morning. Dan had Emma wrapped in his arms. They were sitting on their sofa, watching Hermione's message replay on a loop setting. Both parents really missed the daughter, especially today, and this way it at least felt as if they got to see Hermione on her birthday. I still can't believe how much she's grown, or that she didn't have this written down, word for word. Her reading from a prepared script wouldn't have had anywhere near the same impact as this did. That is our Hermione, wearing her heart on her sleeve. This was not the first time Emma had disagreed with her husband over their daughter, it was time to face her own mistakes from that night. Dan, I'm so sorry. You had legitimate concerns for our daughter's safety and I just ignored them, and you. I saw Hermione breaking her heart and immediately cast you as the villain. Seeing the kids' reactions just scrambled my brains and I panicked too. Dan just held his wife closer, providing comfort as she cried into his chest. Sirius wasn't the only one who noticed you, mothering, those two boys. I know we always wanted more children, we only drew back from adopting when Hermione started having bouts of accidental magic, I wish we could have known that's what it was at the time. Emma well remembered the numbing terror of thinking there was something wrong with the daughter, toddlers shouldn't be able to have their picture books floating to them. Her husband's arms provided comfort as he attempted to analyze exactly what went wrong that night. Our reactions were all pretty predictable, and it hurts even more because of that. I saw Hermione in danger, and tried to remove her from the threat. Hermione saw me trying to separate her from Harry, there was only one way she was ever going to react to that. You saw a distraught daughter, and Mummy Bear went into protecting Cubs mode. We were all right, but at the same time all wrong. As both contemplated their actions that night, they were interrupted by a knock at the door. That it was the back door immediately focused their attention, that door was now only used by people porking into the garden. The quizzical glances were soon replaced by excitement as Emma had a thought. Sirius, he must have had to bring the kids home. This had both racing to the back door, not realizing Hermione wouldn't have knocked at her own home. Their visitor was the last person they expected to be standing there. Noticing Emma had been crying, he asked if this was a bad time. The entire situation was awkward enough without adding anything else to the mix. Both Grangers quickly reassured the guest that this was not the case, inviting the goblin into their lounge, where the message from Hermione was still playing. This halted Barchoke in his tracks, he was unable to take his eyes off Hermione pleading for her family to be put together again. As the recording ended, Dan stepped forward to stop the cycle repeating. He and his wife were wondering just what the goblin was doing in Crawley when Barchoke spoke. Children are a wonderful blessing, and sometimes we have to stand back and look at things from their perspective. We have Sirius providing lessons to them on wizarding culture, while you have done your best to equip them both to survive in the Muggle world, as have I for our culture. In all that we made a terrible mistake, no one is teaching the parents about these cultures that are totally alien to us. Our children hope to be able to wrap their lives around all three, yet we are totally ignorant about two of them. I believe this was the basis for our misunderstanding, and really hope we can move forward from here. This left Dan and Emma gobsmacked, and Barchoke wasn't yet finished with the shocks. I understand from my son that not asking a girl's father for her hand is a serious breach of your protocol. On behalf of my son and I would like to offer our apologies for this. Harry assures me it is something he intends to put right, he will be asking your permission before they get engaged. I believe Hermione's 17th birthday was mentioned as a possible date for this event. Dan had thought about what he was going to say to Barchoke, but the goblin turning up here and apologizing to him blew all his carefully considered words out through his ears. Should Harry approach me with that question, my answer will of course be yes. I'm hardly likely to grill him about his future prospects, or whether he can support my little girl. Emma held her breath at Dan's attempt at humor, especially at a time like this. A sly grin from Barchoke signaled that her husband had actually judged the mood right. You know fine well that the reason I'll be saying yes is I truly believe what Hermione said in her message to us. Their bond indicates they could search the entire country and not find anyone more suited. They make each other happy, and what more could a father ask for? I should have taken the time to see that, instead of acting the way I did. For that, I too am sorry. The goblin nodded his acceptance. Harry also sent a message to me, saying that an ambassador has to be able to see both sides of any arguments, and then negotiate a settlement that lands somewhere in the middle. Is that why you're here? Emma just had to ask. My son's words made me stand back and think. It was something else though that brought me here tonight. I asked Harry what I could get my daughter for her birthday. He replied that putting our family back together again would be the greatest gift I could give Hermione. From what I saw of her message, my son was right. The shocked silence this was greeted with by both Grangers saw Barchoke think he'd overstepped the mark. I'm sorry if I got it wrong by calling Hermione my daughter. Emma's hand on his arm stopped him saying any more. Providing you don't mind us considering Harry as our son too, I certainly have no problems with that. Dan's nod of agreement saw a lot of the tension leave the room. Stay and celebrate our daughter's birthday with us. There is so much we need to talk about, so much we still don't know about each other. Let's sit and chat, and try to ensure something like that evening will never happen again. Dan's words started the rebuilding of their family. That it was being developed on the love each parent had for their children meant their family was being rebuilt on a strong foundation, and would rise like a phoenix from the ashes, reborn and be even stronger than before. Hermione could see Harry was nervous about something as they headed down to breakfast. She couldn't think of any reason for this and resolved to ask him about it as soon as they were alone. Urgit's arrival saw that anxiety spike before Harry's face wore a wide smile. She couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. Harry, anything you want to tell me? Switching to his own language, Harry gave his bonded her final present for her birthday. My father asked what he could get his daughter for her birthday. I told him putting our family back together would be a great gift. He celebrated your birthday in Crawley last night, with your mum and dad. Hermione had been blown away with the stud earrings Sirius brought from Barchoke. Her real gift though left her speechless. Fortunately, she didn't need words to display how much that news meant to her. Leaning forward, she gave Harry a kiss that contained all the love she felt for her wonderful mate. There were witches sitting at the Ravenclaw table who still harbored hopes of dating the boy who lived. Those hopes died as they witnessed the kiss. It wasn't by any means a snog fest, it wasn't even passionate. There was just so much love and tenderness expressed between the couple by this simple act that you would need to have been really stupid to harbor any hope that these two weren't a very serious couple, and stupid people didn't get to wear the blue and bronze of Ravenclaw. Padma hadn't noticed Harry's anxiety, though could hardly miss him conversing with Hermione in his own language. Her fears were immediately quashed by Hermione's reaction to whatever the news was. It was now time to tease. Okay, now you two have gotten that out of your system, care to share the good news? Hermione's eyes never left Harry's as she gave her friend enough information to fill in any blanks. Harry's father celebrated my birthday with my mum and dad last night. This saw Padma dive on both of them, knowing how much this meant to her friends. The comment from Roger followed on close behind. Any news you'd like to share there, Harry? Only that I am one lucky guy, Roger. Sitting there with two girls hugging you at breakfast, it's kinda hard to disagree with that. This drew some laughs and Harry was quite prepared to joke right back. Patil hugs are only surpassed by those from a Granger, though I don't think Neville would agree with me. Seeing Padma blush at that just added to the good mood. She teased Harry and Hermione enough to warrant some gentle payback. Bill's arrival signaled it was time to get serious. They were all up for their lesson today. Crow's Marauders were also up for their lesson on Tuesday evening. Having them swap activities last week meant tonight was the time to put those lessons into practice. They were split into teams of 4, wherever possible, ensuring that each team had a member of the 4 houses and was a balance of the sexes. They were then involved in a round-robin tournament that whittled them down to 4 teams. A semi-final and final soon followed. Luna's team actually reached the final, and she was the last member standing. Unfortunately, there were still 2 left from the other team and she got tagged taking one of the pair out. There was loud cheering from all present and the winners got a bar of Honeyduke's finest chocolate. The 4 friends ended the evening by handing out the club badges to all members, leaving a lot of extremely happy first years heading back to the dorms. Henrika walked back with them as the quartet also headed back. They were discussing what had worked, what hadn't, and who had excelled. Neville was shaking his head at Colin's antics. He's bought into the whole brave Gryffindor persona, that's why he keeps charging right into battle. His curses are accurately cast, but against 4 opponents, you are always going to get hit. I think we need to start using stinging curses. That should discourage the behavior a lot more than a blob of color that disappears. In any real fight, his tactics would see him hit every time. Hermione found herself agreeing. He's agile enough to be good at evading, he just doesn't seem to want to. There were a few more who acted the same. Harry had experience of this phenomenon from his own training. When you make training fun, there's a tendency to treat it like a game. Goblins are taught with wooden swords but are moved onto real blades as soon as thieves mastered the basics. I agree with Neville, nothing focuses your mind more than knowing your opponent is trying to do you an injury with their weapon. I think we would then need to cut it down to pairs though. Having 8 first years firing off stinging hexes at the same time is a recipe for disaster. The 3 claws entered their common room to hear the first years raving about their lesson, and proudly displaying their badges. Harry needed his lightning-fast reflexes when a curse suddenly came flying at them. He deflected it harmlessly into the ceiling while Padma and Hermione took down their attacker with a couple of very accurate stunners. Roger woke to find himself flat on his back, and the sword of Gryffindor resting under his chin. I would like an explanation, Davies, and I would like it now. The explanation didn't help the trio. Quote ellipsis. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we need 'em to train us in defense. I'm a 4th year, near the top of my year 2, yet 3 second years easily handled my surprise attack, before handing me my ass. You might also notice that every wand in 1st and 2nd year is currently pointing at me. Now that is how it's supposed to be. Harry felt a gentle hand on his shoulder as Penny spoke to him. It's okay, Harry, I've got this. Professor Flitwick turned down their request for extra defense lessons. He said it would cause problems with the other houses if these lessons were only available for Ravenclaws, and he doesn't have the time to basically do the job Lockhart's already being paid to do. Roger here, however unwisely, was trying to prove a point that you were our next best option. I expected to get taken down, but not that easily. What did I do wrong? Harry sheathed his sword before helping his friend to his feet. Your curse was powerful enough but your aim was slightly off. It was going to hit my shoulder, making it easier to dodge, but I knew Padma was behind me. I deflected it upward to be safe. Padma then joined the critique. You fired a curse and then just stood there, waiting to see what would happen next. Against multiple opponents you should have continued to cast, and been on the move at all times. This was normal procedure for the Ravenclaw trio, they did it after every fight. The rest of the house though watched on in astonishment as Hermione continued ripping Roger's technique to shreds. As he was the one who ended up on the ground, they couldn't find fault with one word of it. You also didn't use any of the advantages your ambush site provided. There is big heavy furniture and doorways to provide cover, you didn't use any of it. Okay, I'm now more convinced than ever I need some defense lessons from you guys. Anytime, any place, just say the word and I'll be there. Roger's pleading meant Harry was always going to cave on this one. We have the ball on Saturday, you get a list together of those who want to be involved and we'll see what we can do next week. The older wizard now had his arm around Harry's shoulders. Thanks Harry, I knew we could count on you. Roger now had a puzzled look on his face as he removed his arm and prodded Harry on the chest. Merlin, Harry, you're solid. What the hell do you eat to get like that? Mr. Davies, would you kindly stop prodding my boyfriend? You don't get like that from eating, rather years of hard work. I happen to like it, very much. She now had her arms wrapped about Harry as Roger appeared more embarrassed over this than getting stunned. Penny then dragged him away for a severe bollocking, explaining in no uncertain terms what would happen the next time he fired a curse in the common room. The second-year trio got their books out and joined the rest of their yearmates in some studying before bed. It was potions first thing tomorrow and no one wanted to enter that class unprepared. Checking that everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to be doing had become a bit of a ritual the evening before Master Pitsley's classes. Gilderoy had something of a dilemma on his hands. He so wanted to attend the Merlin ball. Gilderoy had the exact outfit in mind. The problem was that, as a guest of honor, he would be obliged to wear an Order of Merlin. He'd worried the problem like a dog with a bone before finally getting to the marrow of the problem. Gilderoy had narrowed it down to 2 choices. Each option though was not without risk. His first was to feign illness. This was risky in that Hogwarts had its own healer on the premises and his presence at the ball was sure to be missed. There was also the fact that Gilderoy really wanted to go to the ball. His other option was to attend and just bluff his way through the evening. This was his favorite option for 2 reasons. The first one was obvious, he got to attend the ball. The second was also self-explanatory. The gullible wizarding public had been swallowing the shite he'd been passing off as the truth for years. Why should Saturday night be any different? Harry felt different as he walked down to breakfast and it wasn't hard to work out why. He was wearing his tunic as normal on a weekend, his sword was at his hip, his epaulets were displayed on his shoulders, his centurion bands, as well as Hermione, were on his arm. The only difference was the award worn on his chest, and yet it seemed to change everything. Hermione had given him his morning kiss, but then said he looked so handsome. He himself felt like a warrior on parade, awaiting an inspection from the director. Harry thought letting Henrika borrow his award to display to her classes would have lessened the effect, but people were certainly treating him differently, almost reverently. He wondered if this was how Dumbledore became so detached from reality. Harry had this reaction for less than an hour and already knew he didn't like it. Dumbledore had been receiving this treatment for decades. Harry also had friends who would quickly put him right if his head started getting too big. Padma would soon puncture an inflated head with a few well-aimed barbs, and he didn't even want to think what Hermione's reaction to any arrogance on his part would be. On entering the Great Hall, custom dictated Harry headed for the staff table. Harry added the centurion salute to his bow to the headmaster, a fellow Order of Merlin holder. His award shining brightly on the dark purple robes that could almost have been classed as demure for Dumbledore. Whatever Harry's dispute with the headmaster, it was irrefutable that Dumbledore had earned his Order of Merlin, first class, the hard way. He had been a great warrior for the light once, though appeared to have lost his way as he'd aged. Well met, headmaster. A good morning to you too, centurion. Albus had stood and returned the bow. If nothing else, the award pinned to the lad's tunic deserved it. It would appear the third member of our exclusive group has yet to join us for breakfast. Since I know you have lessons for the rest of the day, I'm sure you can leave the formalities until tonight's ball. Both Harry and Albus were smiling as he headed back to the Ravenclaw table. That in itself was something of a major achievement. When Bill arrived for their lesson, a quick word saw Harry reach a decision. Roger, you're with us. If you want to learn so badly that you'll ambush us in the common room, I think it's time you learned what you're letting yourself in for. Roger was out of his seat like a shot, following him out the hall. Lockhart never made an appearance at breakfast. The defense professor was also conspicuous by his absence at lunch, as was Roger Davies. It was actually Cho who worked up the courage to ask where he was. This inquiry was greeted with 4 smiles before Harry answered. He's in his room, probably sleeping by now. Will someone make sure to wake him in time for tonight's ball? Oh, and do it early enough to make sure he has plenty of time for a hot bath, best thing for sore muscles. What did you do to him? Padma resented that question, she didn't even see who asked it, but that didn't matter. We didn't do anything to him, he just wanted to do the same lesson as us. Roger spent the last half hour of the lesson lying exhausted on the floor. We do this for 6 hours every weekend. Roger thought he could dive right in and do the same. He's physically and magically exhausted but should feel better after a few hours sleep. We have another set of lessons to go yet, and then the ball. No more questions were asked, though Roger would be well and truly quizzed later. Harry was left questioning his eyesight as Hermione floated down the stairs to meet him. He knew his mate was beautiful, but this was just too much. Her blue dress just did something that melted his insides. A gentle kiss of greeting got his brain into gear once more and he offered Hermione his arm. His, my lady, comment wasn't missed by anyone there either. Hermione was certainly his lady. Harry then offered his other arm to Padma. Miss Patil, may I escort you to your date? I wouldn't want anyone to get the idea you were available. Neville would be most upset. The trio led the students of Ravenclaw House toward the 7th floor, where quite a crowd had gathered. The headmaster, and most of the staff, were waiting on them, along with the Lady Helena. Harry bowed deeply to the ghost. My lady, please thank Hogwarts for providing the room tonight. Helena's voice held some mirth as she replied. Hogwarts is very pleased with the changes her champion is instigating, and welcomed the idea of the entire school being able to celebrate on this special day. I would like to propose that the last Saturday in September be set aside to make this an annual event. It certainly gets the school year off to a magnificent start. We've never seen the students so happy and think this should be encouraged. Albus quickly stepped in to gain some more much-needed positive points with the students. I think that is a tremendous idea and will certainly add it to the school calendar for future years. The evening was off to a flyer and Harry hadn't even opened the room yet. When he did, more than a few jaws hit the floor. The room surpassed anything they had seen before. Yes, it was slightly bigger than the Great Hall, but Hogwarts had solved the accommodation problem using a different method. There was a stage for the band located in one corner of the square room, with tables that held 12 all around the sides. Above those tables was a series of balconies that, except for above the stage, surrounded the hall. The entire room was of a grandeur that hadn't been seen since the height of the Baroque period, and outside of a royal palace. Harry couldn't help but think that was appropriate, since the girl on his arm was like a princess to him. This also meant the period dress of the first and second years now fitted right in. An ornamental and exquisitely carved fountain occupied the middle of the dance floor, with all the hall's carvings and gold trimmings being highlighted by 20 magnificent crystal chandeliers. There was more than a glint of humor from the Ravenclaw ghost as she jokingly inquired if the room would do. Harry's answer though showed just how much he had picked up from Syria's lessons. My lady, I appreciate Hogwarts' attempt to match the beauty of my date. It was a valiant attempt. No living person had ever heard the Grey Lady laugh before. The delightful and almost musical sound had everyone considering they would need a more appropriate name for the Ravenclaw ghost. When Helena smiled, there was nothing grey about the ghost who'd clearly been a great beauty when alive. We thought the first, second and third years would appreciate the balconies, allowing them to see everything that happens, without feeling obliged to dance if they don't want to. This proved a really popular suggestion as the lower years headed for the staircases. Dumbledore was not alone in being surprised at just how much control this second year had over the castle, or how much the Lady Helena had changed. Hannah and Susan had invited Ernie and Justin to be the dates for Hermione's cancelled party. They naturally just continued that arrangement for the ball. Parvati surprised them by arriving on the arm of Blaise Zabini, though Padma made sure there were 2 seats next to her available for her twin and her date. Colin was rather chivalrously about to give up his own place at Harry's table to allow Ginny and Luna to join him, when Hogwarts increased the size of their table. Not only was there a place for Colin, there were 2 as yet unoccupied place settings. That puzzle was soon solved by the arrival of Henrika and Sirius. Do you mind if we sit with you lot for the evening? Downstairs is just so. What in the name of Merlin is that? His godfather's exclamation had everyone at the table turning to see what had caused this outburst. Not that every eye wasn't now turned in that direction anyway, just as he'd expected. If there was one thing Gilderoy knew how to do, it was make an entrance, and what an entrance. He timed it to perfection. Everyone else had arrived but dinner had yet to be served. He stood there in what Gilderoy considered a heroic pose, allowing everyone to get a good look at him. His black patent leather boots hugged his calves to just below his knees, their heels adding 1.5 inches to his height. Those same boots melted into a pair of purple breeches that had bright red cavalry stripes down the side. They also gave new definition to the phrase, tight. The bulge at his groin caused Luna to ask if he wasn't staying for dinner, since he'd brought his own lunchbox. His royal blue bum freezer jacket had more gold braid than a dozen admirals, and he actually wore a leather scabbard, containing his wand instead of a sword. His ridiculous ensemble was completed by a short fur-lined cape, jauntily worn over one shoulder. There was no way Gilderoy Lockhart was going to hide his trademark golden locks under any kind of hat. Harry audibly groaned, knowing what was required of him now. He stood to find Hermione right beside him, the grip on his arm saying she was accompanying him. If he tries to grab my boyfriend again, I'm going to introduce him to my blade. This drew smiles from all around the table. They all knew Hermione was really going down there to drag Harry off the prat if he started anything. They just hoped she let him beat Lockhart up a bit first. Beat up a lot worked for them too. The couple found the headmaster waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Together they walked toward the still posing professor. Excuse me, Professor Lockhart, I failed to spot your Order of Merlin amongst the rest of the paraphernalia you're currently wearing. Hermione had a closer view than anyone else, but she was sure those in the hall were reaching the same conclusion as she was. Dumbledore wore his award with pride, and effortlessly projected the image of an elder statesman. Harry on the other hand looked the epitome of a young warrior. Even as he walked toward Lockhart you could see he was ready for instant action. Lockhart on the other hand had deliberately aimed for a military theme, something again he had no right to. He'd gone for huzzah, and ended up with bizarre. He looked like someone who'd been kicked out of the village people for being too outlandish. Hermione wondered if she could get the band to play YMCA. Gilderoy then unveiled his master plan, and his award. Headmaster, I was sure you would notice that. When the Merlin committee were debating my award, it was mentioned that my greatest wish was world peace. They then struck my award especially for me. The defense professor then indicated a gold peace symbol hanging from a scarlet ribbon, a symbol that was recognized even in Goblin society. Hermione had also spotted an I Heart NY medallion hanging from a piece of ribbon too. While Harry and even Dumbledore were struck dumb by the audacity of the wizard, Hermione's mind went into hyperdrive. She moved her own medallion onto her dress, just above her heart, and a quick sticking charm saw it held there. How silly of me, I forgot to wear my Order of the Avis, first class. The awards committee knew my greatest wish too, a golden crow holding my heart. The second class award is of course silver, and features a sword. Can we assume the committee also knew of your allergy to bronze, and made your third class award out of gold instead? Albus was actually enjoying watching these two take someone else apart for a change. That was until he noticed the glints of silver from above. Miss Granger's actions had set off a chain reaction amongst the first years. It would appear as if every single one of them had brought the badges to the ball, all now wore them on their jackets and dresses like Miss Granger. Devotion like that reminded Albus of another young man, though Tom was in 4th year before he began gathering followers around him. Harry already had 1st year wrapped up, along with the vast majority of 2nd. With the Weasley twins and the Davies boy, they were making inroads into 4th too. Albus couldn't help but hear the Ravenclaw boy raving about the defense lesson he attended this morning. His claim that he had learned more in those 3 hours than his previous 3 years at Hogwarts was certainly being believed. He almost opened his mouth to say something before deciding to let Lockhart be the one to put his foot in it tonight, and Lockhart duly obliged. Totally missing the sarcasm from Miss Granger, he quickly confirmed her suspicion that he was indeed allergic to bronze. The three walked away, leaving Lockhart thinking that once again he'd fooled everyone. Thanks to Henrika's lessons, the entire student population now knew Lockhart's outrageous claims were a pile of shit. That neither Harry nor the headmaster bowed to Lockhart also indicated that they both knew that too. The only one fooled was the fool himself, Gilderoy Lockhart. Thanks for reading. Double Trouble. Harry Crow. Disclaimer, JKR owns Harry Potter. I'm just delighted she allows all of us to have some fun playing within the world she created. Since none of us are being paid for the hours we spent writing these stories, while reading, could you please remember that this really is just for fun. Chapter 41. Albus sat in this magnificent room and watched as his entire school, excuse the pun, had a ball. None of the staff had been involved in the preparations, nor were they needed to supervise their charges. Jugs of punch and pumpkin juice were on every table, refilling before they had time to empty. The house ghosts patrolled around the tables, chatting with anyone who had the time to talk. After the elves had provided a wonderful meal, the band had turned up and now dancing was the order of the evening. Albus also noticed some couples sitting on the marble ledge around the fountain's circular basin, the entire structure acting as a cooling-off area for the dancers. Albus was here tonight purely as a guest, and that's exactly how he felt, a guest in his own school. Losing even a little control would normally have Albus reaching for his wand to rectify the situation, but not tonight. The reason for that was simple, it was Hogwarts herself who was in control here this evening, and doing a magnificent job of it. Horace watched as everyone had fun, he was so depressed. How had 2 Gryffindors and a couple of Ravenclaws managed to destroy a famous wizard's reputation so easily? They also did it in a way that the fool still hadn't realized. Every single person in the hall now knew he was a liar. The head of Slytherin thought he was dealing with a couple of second years, and that gaining their confidence would be easy. He hadn't done his homework and gotten savage during his clumsy approach. Albus of course hadn't mentioned any of this when he conned him out of retirement and into returning to Britain. Horace was only now beginning to realize just how much he hadn't been told. His only chance now appeared to be somehow gaining the boys' respect, grudging or otherwise. To do that though would take every piece of Slytherin cunning he had. Minerva watched her students having a great time and, reputation be damned, she just had to smile. Between her time as a student in the castle and then her teaching years, Minerva had almost half a century of experience inside Hogwarts. In all that time, Minerva could honestly say she'd never seen anything like this. Hogwarts sure knew how to throw a party. Her eyes caught a sight she still didn't believe, a second year dancing with a Vila professor, with both of them laughing and chatting away. That second year being one of her young lions, Mr. Longbottom, just added to her sense of astonishment. Minerva would bet her pension she wasn't the only person inside the castle who was continually having to upgrade her opinion of that young wizard. Gilderoy also noticed Henrika dancing with the second year and was considering cutting in, until he recognized who that second year was. He then spied Black dancing with the sword-wielding witch, and Crow soon followed them round with his friend's date as a partner. This just seemed to sum up his evening. He'd been so looking forward to this ball but it was turning into a personal disaster. He was expecting the girls to flock to him, not scatter in different directions anytime he approached. Not only had every witch spurned his advances and offers to dance, most of them had rushed away in the opposite direction before he could even ask them. Hogwarts was turning into a major disappointment. The press didn't even ask to take his picture when they arrived. Harry was back dancing with Hermione as they twirled around the fountain, holding his princess in his arms as they waltzed around this magical setting. This was worth putting up with Lockhart and Dumbledore, this was priceless. Hermione smiled as she asked him about tonight. Do you think this will see Lockhart chased out the castle? I doubt it. That would mean Dumbledore not only admitting he was wrong but doing something about it. Remember, this was a prank Fred and George played on Lockhart. Looking at it from that angle, it's a fantastic success. The entire castle now knows Gilderoy Lockhart is a liar, and we even got a ball out of it too. When she followed Harry's logic, Hermione had to agree. She also knew the news would be filtering out to homes all over the country. This might not be the knockout blow that finally flattened Lockhart, but it was the first step to destroying his reputation. Unlike Dumbledore, a reputation would appear to be all that Lockhart had. She was reminded of the Emperor's new clothes, and how it was children who solved that puzzle too. The group of friends left the ball together as they headed back to the dorms. Whether it was chivalry or the presence of Harry and Neville, Blaise kissed Parvati on the back of her hand and thanked her for a lovely evening. Colin escorted an almost floating Ginny through the portrait hole after Parvati. Ginny just had the best night of her life, a night that also included a dance with Harry. She was in heaven, until her brother spoiled it. You traitorous bitch, why don't you go down to the dungeons where you obviously belong? It was only when Parvati answered that Ginny realized Ron's tirade wasn't aimed at her. Listen Weasley, who cares what you think? Take your attitude out of my face before I decorate the common room with it. Oh yeah, think Crow is going to come running to save you. He only does that for your sister. Padma had been outside saying goodnight to Neville when she heard the shouting, discovering her sister was involved saw her head straight into the lion's den. Ron suddenly had double vision with both Patil sisters now in his face. Listen Weasel, my sister doesn't need anyone to rescue her from the likes of you. We always have each other's backs and there won't be enough of your bigoted carcass left to decorate this common room with if you forget that. Looking desperately for help, Ron attempted to turn the argument around in his favor. First she dates a Slytherin, now we have a Ravenclaw in our common room. Is everyone else here okay with this? Neville had of course followed Padma inside and stood squarely behind the twins on this argument. What Parvati does is none of your business, Weasley. She hasn't broken any rules and you have no authority inside Gryffindor, far less Hogwarts. Well, we can't all be school champions. Is your buddy Crow getting ready to come in here and wave his fancy sword around? Is that what happens next? What happened next was Percy entering the common room. Ron grasped this fortuitous event and treated it almost as if the cavalry had arrived to save him from the circling savages. Percy, not content with dating a Slytherin, she then has a Ravenclaw in our common room. Ron confidently stood back, expecting his brother to now administer the justice he was unable to. Percy looked to Padma for an explanation of her presence here. She didn't take long to provide an answer. Your prat of a brother is probably the only person in the castle who didn't have a great time tonight. He then decided to spread that misery around by screaming at Parvati. I was outside saying goodnight to Neville and wasn't about to let him get away with that. She dated a Slytherin. Ron appeared to think that if he achieved enough volume then everyone would finally understand the point he was trying to make. Unfortunately, for Ron that is, he chose to shout this in Padma's face from a distance measured in mere inches. As Ron's spittle sprayed over Padma's face, Neville's fist connected with his, dropping Ron onto his ass. Percy's hand gripping his arm stopped Neville taking any further action, apart from removing a hanky and offering it to Padma. Ron, go to bed. But Percy, he just hit me. Surely you're going to do something about that. Had you acted that way to Penny, I would have flattened you, if Penny didn't do it first. Go to bed, now. As Ron slunk his way up the stairs, Percy turned his attention to the girls. I must apologize for my brother's behavior. It was Padma who cut him off. No you don't, Percy. Apart from your brother, Charlie, we've met your entire family. We've liked them all but Ron sticks out like a sore thumb with his crass behavior. You shouldn't have to apologize for him, he probably doesn't even realize what he's done wrong. Thanks for that, Neville, I was about to reach for my wand when you flattened him. She then turned her attention to her sister. Are you okay, Parv? I was perfectly capable of dealing with that situation on my own. I don't need you, or anyone else, rushing to my rescue. This took the breath from Padma. Quote ellipsis. But we've always looked out for each other. Well, you've made it plain that situation has changed. Christmas, summer and now Halloween. How can we look out for each other when you're never around? Parvati headed for her own staircase, leaving Neville to escort Padma back outside where the rest of their friends were waiting. Neville's comforting arm was replaced by that of Hermione as Padma found herself now sandwiched between her two friends. How much of that did you hear? Hermione's arm tightened around Padma as she answered. All of it. It looks like Parvati didn't take the news you would be going with us at Halloween as well as you thought. Christmas is nothing more than a break from school for us. Halloween is different. This will be the first one we've ever spent apart. I don't know if I want to go now. Harry tried to help. Neither Hermione nor I have any experience of siblings, but we have had to work our way around the differences thrown up between us and our families. Trying to look at the situation from different perspectives has helped us. What would you think or do if the shoe was on the other foot, if it was Parvati who was going with us at Halloween? This got Padma thinking. I see what you mean, but this is hard. Hermione confirmed it had been hard for them too, encouraging Padma to continue. I would like to think I'd be pleased for her. Parvati would look at this weekend as being the lead up to an offer of betrothal from Neville. That's probably what's got her so mad. She would never understand that Neville and I could just be friends. Hermione had a front row seat as she watched their two friends begin the journey from friendship to possibly something more. If she could see that, it was a certainty Parvati could too. Padma herself had said that her sister was always the twin who drew the most attention. Watching Padma with Neville must be hard for Parvati to take. Her less popular sister appeared to effortlessly obtain what was Parvati's greatest wish, a boyfriend who had the potential to be so much more. That this was a boy Parvati had previously attempted to ensnare must be particularly rankling. Like the rest of their friends, the smartest witch in their year dismissed the problem as jealousy on Parvati's part. Padma herself had reached the same conclusion. It didn't hurt any less because of that. That morning's prophet pleased everyone, except Lockhart. They had led with the headline, "A celebration Merlin would be proud of," accompanied by a picture that showed lots of first and second years posed around the fountain. That his school was shown in such a positive light pleased Dumbledore no end. He was more than happy to bask in the reflected glory this story generated. The way things had been going lately, Albus was happy simply not being publicly berated for something. It made a pleasant change. Harry was also happy. Apart from there being some mention of the Order of Merlin winners in attendance, he didn't feature in the story. 30 or so very happy students had their picture on the front page of the Prophet, and the article promised more pictures from the ball in their sister publication, Teen Witch Weekly, which intended to do a full spread on that new fashion sweeping Britain's magical community. Roger was unhappy that he wasn't going to attend the extra defense lessons today. That was until Harry had a private word with him. Having someone older there certainly helped us, so we're thinking of making it a permanent arrangement. We're also thinking of including Fred and George, but don't know any older students well enough to figure out who else to ask. Penny would be the obvious choice, but that would really mean taking Percy too. I don't know if we're ready to mix it with 6th years just yet. Roger privately thought Harry could mix it with just about anyone but had a suggestion to make. What about Cedric Diggory? He's a 4th-year puff, and I'll vouch for him being a good guy. Didn't his father just become the chief warlock? It was a puzzled Roger who answered the question with one of his own. Yes, do you have a problem with that? No, but I wouldn't want him thinking that's why we were asking. Harry, you don't even know Cedric. Oh, I see. I'll tell him the truth. It was me who suggested he join us. This got a nod of agreement. I'll need to check with Assistant Ambassador Weasley first, but you can see if he's interested. If nothing else, it gives us a mixture of houses. Roger immediately headed off to the Hufflepuff table for a talk with Cedric, though Bill spotted a potential problem the minute Harry mentioned the names. I know you don't pay much attention to Quidditch, Harry, but those 4 are all on their house teams. The chance of them having every Saturday morning free are nil. Bill was right. Quidditch held no interest for Harry, but he did know Roger and the twins played. What about having them join us every Sunday? That would still leave us Saturdays to work on things ourselves. Liking that idea, Bill suggested it was time to put it to the group. He signaled for the twins to come over while Harry did the same with Roger. The 4th-year Ravenclaw brought Cedric along and introduced him to the 4 friends. Bill then laid out the proposal. You 4 want extra tuition in defense, and I want to match this lot up against some older opponents. We're proposing to do both every Sunday morning, if you're up for it. The twins agreed at once while Roger had a question. Cedric mentioned Quidditch. Is that why you're offering Sundays? Yes, this lot might not bother with the game, but I knew you 4 had Quidditch commitments. Both Roger and Cedric confirmed they would be delighted to accept, only to quickly discover what they'd let themselves in for. Okay, we've already wasted 5 minutes standing here blethering. Let's move it. There was no hesitation amongst the 4 friends. They shot out of the hall, leaving the others to chase after them. That same quartet of second years sat showered and changed at lunch, while a certain 4 4th years were conspicuous by their absence. A certain professor noticed this, and the esteem this gained the second years from the other students. It was time to try a different approach. Before they arrived for breakfast on Monday morning, Harry must have denied he was holding a dueling club at least a dozen times to excited questioners. Apparently notices for this club had appeared in all 4 houses. Padma attempted to look on the bright side. At least they're holding it tonight, and not in direct competition to Crow's Marauders. I think I prefer the Order of the Avis. Harry's suggestion was instantly outvoted by his 3 friends and all the first years within hearing range. It seems he was stuck with that name. So, are we going to go along tonight? The other 3 thought over Neville's question and couldn't come up with any reason not to. Between the ball and now this club, morale in the castle had rarely been higher. Everyone left the Great Hall straight after dinner. There was no dawdling tonight. They understood the hall would need to be set up for the club, and on regaining entry it certainly looked promising. The house tables had been removed, and a dueling platform now dominated the hall. All that early promise was for naught though with the discovery of just who was running this club. Gather round, gather round. Can everyone see me? Can you all hear me? Excellent. The loud groans that greeted Gilderoy's arrival told the professor he was the only one who thought this situation was excellent. Now, Professor Dumbledore has granted me permission to start this little dueling club, to train you all in case you ever need to defend yourselves as I myself have done on countless occasions. For full details, see my published works. He then rather grandiosely, in a move that must have seen him practicing in front of a mirror for hours, swirled his cape off his shoulders. Deliberately choosing a group of girls, he tossed his cape toward them, only to see it hit the floor as they all moved away from the item that had actually touched Lyle Lockhart. Undaunted, the intrepid professor pushed on with the meeting. Now I would like to introduce the professor who has kindly agreed to assist me with this demonstration duel tonight. Professor Slughorn. This was a surprise to just about everyone in the hall. No one knew what Slughorn was like with a wand in his hand. The unanimous consensus though was that he couldn't possibly be worse than Lockhart. The blowhard counted down from 3, and then promptly ended up on his back, a simple disarming spell doing the damage. That this was met with loud cheering did more damage to Lockhart than his opponent's curse. He of course claimed to have let the curse through, purely for demonstration purposes, but no one was buying that anymore. Slughorn seemed to take heart from the cheering, not realizing it was more for Lockhart's defeat than the person inflicting it. Their next demonstration duel, the potions professor really went to town. Within seconds, Gilderoy was dressed like a circus clown, complete with red nose and green frizzy hair, while trying his best to perform Riverdance without music. He was waving his wand around more like a conductor of an orchestra rather than a wizard. Gilderoy would probably have gotten better results from the string section than he achieved trying to cast a counter spell. What was riotously funny at the beginning was now becoming cringeworthy and decidedly unpleasant. There is a fine line between a prank and bullying. Slughorn was leaving that line far behind him. A silencing curse ended Gilderoy's pleas for the spells to be lifted. The defense professor was now entering a clear state of physical distress. Horace was enjoying this, and now for phase 2 of his plan. Oh dear, I can see why there is such a demand for private defense tuition. I just hope tomorrow night's lessons are better than this. The first years were on him in seconds, defending Crow's marauders, Ginny being especially vociferous. Harry used that distraction to cast a finite incantatum at Lockhart, drawing no pleasure from watching the now physically exhausted man collapse to the floor. Slughorn turned his attention to Harry. It would seem your charges are quite impressed with your defense teachings, Centurion. Then again, they don't really have much to compare it with, do they? Hermione was muttering a warning to him. That she was speaking in his own language told Harry how serious she thought the situation was. This is screaming setup, and making me wonder just whose idea this club was. What do you say, Centurion? Want to show us what you're teaching the first years? Let's have a friendly duel. You're bound to at least last longer than our current defense professor. He's deliberately goading you into fighting him. I just can't figure out why. This might not be a bad idea, Hermione. I really need to get some idea what level I'm at, and he can't really go too far with all these witnesses. Horace wasn't getting the reaction he expected, so goaded Harry some more. Do you need your girlfriend's permission to duel? Is that what the problem is? Perhaps I should duel her instead. That might get your attention. He'd been expecting those comments to be accompanied by some derisive laughter, especially from his Slytherins. The entire school though had learned, some of them the hard way, that you don't anger Harry. The one sure way to do this was by targeting his girlfriend, Hermione. Harry though was very calm as he answered the head of Slytherin. You have been misinformed, Professor. I don't teach the marauders how to duel, I teach them how to fight. If you wish to fight a Centurion, I just happen to know one who will accommodate you. Harry might be calm, but Hermione was nervous enough for the both of them. Don't mess about, Harry, end it quickly. Horace was pleased his plan had worked. He needed to show he was so much more than the image the students now had of him. Dumping the boy who lived onto his ass would be his first step on the road to regaining some of the respect he had lost. Certainly, Centurion, won't you join me up here? As I said, Professor, I don't duel. We'll ward off an area down here and the fight only finishes when someone is bleeding. Harry handed a stone to both Neville and Padma, before kissing Hermione and giving her a third. They then moved everyone back to clear a large space on the floor. Harry moved Luna, Ginny and Colin up onto the dueling stage so they could see more clearly, a move that was soon copied by most of the lower school. When they had a large enough area cleared, they each placed a stone at a corner and activated them. Harry kicked off his shoes and opened his shirt. Horace though was already playing mind games. Armor for a friendly duel? Surely not. This is a fight, Professor, and there is nothing friendly about one of them. I can no more leave my armor off than you can discard all the years of experience you have over me. Like your experience, my armor is a part of me. Don't forget, you agreed to fight a Centurion. I told you I am a Centurion first, and a Hogwarts student second. Harry had his shield and knife ready before he drew his sword. Count us off, Hermione. Horace was now faced with this golden warrior. All trace of the boy he thought he was dueling seemed to vanish when that magnificent armor activated. He was beginning to suspect this might not be as easy as he thought when the girl set him off. First blood. Fight. Harry's first stunner reverberated off the shield that Horace had hastily erected. That shield though was no protection from a blade. In a move that was almost as quick as his stunner, Harry was on Slughorn and sliced a chunk out of his robe. The professor let out a yelp of surprise before managing to get a combination of spells off. They didn't do any good. Crow was so fast, dodging or deflecting every single one before that sword flashed and another chunk of his robes hit the floor. Horace felt as if he was fighting for his life here, yet really couldn't use any of his heavier curses against a 12-year-old boy, at least not with so many people watching. The third time Crow's blade had cut through his robes, the experienced dueler knew this boy could finish the fight anytime he wanted. This had changed from an opportunity for Horace to gain some respect to a training exercise for Crow that could not be allowed to continue. He'd bided his time and was now ready. A starburst charm should momentarily blind everyone in the hall, allowing Horace to cast the necessary spells to put Crow down. He clamped his eyes tight as the starburst illuminated the entire hall, but Horace never got time to put the rest of his plan into operation. When Hermione's vision returned, she saw a knackered Harry leaning on his sword, and no sign of Slughorn. She deactivated her corner and rushed to him, throwing her arms around her mate to confirm he was okay. I thought I said not to mess about. He nearly had you on a few occasions. I wouldn't have learned anything ending it in seconds, and he was sticking to spells that wouldn't really hurt me. Padma and Neville had also collapsed the corners and joined the couple. It was Padma, of course, who just had to ask the question. So, what did you learn? Not to mess about. Ouch. No need to get violent, ladies. Harry had just received a punch on each arm from both girls. Neville, though, had a different concern. Hey, Harry, where's Slughorn? Harry looked up, and his three friends were the first to burst into laughter as they followed his line of sight. They certainly weren't the last. Slughorn was dangling from the ceiling of the Great Hall, robes ripped to shreds and entrapped in a web. Everyone, though, could easily read his expression of disbelief as he cradled his bleeding wand hand. I barely scratched him. I wonder if old Sluggy is afraid of heights. Roger had made some pretty outrageous claims about the defense classes these four attended at the weekend. Not one Ravenclaw doubted his word now. Cedric had also stated in Hufflepuff that any of the four would kick his ass in a fight, and Harry regularly fought the other three, all at the same time. Susan and Hannah's claims that Harry and Hermione practiced every day, even on holiday, had also been taken with a pound of salt. These two were now being believed. Even the first-year Gryffindors knew not to believe a word Fred and George said. Their house did know a fighter when they saw one, though, and Harry was undoubtedly a fighter. The Slytherins didn't know what to think. Their head of house had deliberately goaded Crow into a fight, and then lost. Anyone who'd seen him use either of his blades knew Harry could have cut Slughorn with any of those strokes that sliced through his robes. This seemed to send a mixed message. There was certainly no love lost between Crow and Lockhart. It didn't escape their notice, though, that Harry had just dished out the same treatment their head of house gave Lockhart earlier. One thing was for sure, no one would openly challenge Crow after that display. The prefects had to step in and stop the Great Hall from descending into chaos. With Lockhart now sleeping from exhaustion, he snored too, and Slughorn hanging from the ceiling, they were forced to take charge. The ruckus Harry's victory had started was bound to attract staff attention, with McGonagall and Flitwick soon arriving and demanding some answers. There was no shortage of people willing to supply those answers, and soon McGonagall had only one question for Harry. Centurion, how long do you intend to leave Professor Slughorn up there? Professor Slughorn didn't seem in any hurry to remove his Tarantallegra from Professor Lockhart. He left him dancing, so I see no reason not to leave the good Professor dangling. Excuse us, Professor, but it's been a long and tiring day, with tomorrow probably being longer still since we have our defense club. I'm heading off to bed now. They walked out of the Great Hall, leaving both professors to restore order, and also deal with a swinging Slughorn and snoring Lockhart. Neville and Hermione were practically carrying Harry by the time they reached Ravenclaw Tower. Goodnights were said as Neville then escorted Ginny and Colin back to their own dorm. Luna found herself sitting with Moonlight at Harry's feet. Padma and Hermione had plonked him between them on a sofa. Luna was delighted her friends trusted her enough to discuss what was going on in front of her. I've never used my armor to enhance my speed for so long before, it really drained me. I think it's something that I might need to build up some endurance too. Padma agreed with his assessment. Magic will always extract a price. Why didn't you end it sooner though? It didn't really hit me until the fight was over. That's the scary part. If I had continued, would I have just dropped from exhaustion? Harry Crow, you will not be practicing that. I think I need to, Hermione, it could prove vital in a fight. He could see the scared look in her eyes and made a concession. I promise I won't attempt it without supervision and have at least one healer present. Hermione could see this was something he would need to get a handle on. That Harry was going to do it as responsibly as possible was really the best she could ask for. They got Harry up the stairs before he fell asleep on the sofa. Hermione did offer to take a morning off from their exercises, but Harry wouldn't hear of it. A quick kiss goodnight and he collapsed on top of the bed. Shouldn't we undress him? Padma Patil, get your thoughts off my Harry. I'm throwing a cover on him, that will keep him warm until morning. Padma was in full teasing mode now. You could stay with him. No one would know. Hermione was pleased to see her friend returning to something like her normal self. Padma's relationship with her sister could currently be described at best as strained. That's precisely why I won't be staying. When I spend the night with Harry, I at least like him to know I'm there. Padma had no answer to that, so both witches headed back down to the common room, stopping to watch as Luna attempted to teach Moonlight how to play hide and seek. Harry was almost back to normal next morning, though the couple did knock a few miles off their run. At breakfast, Harry found himself receiving vicious glares from the Hogwarts potions professor. It was almost as if something he'd been missing had returned. He much preferred the glares to the covetous stares Slughorn normally aimed at him. Breakfast also saw Harry face a barrage of questions, and even more requests for defense tutoring. He held up his hand to gain some quiet to be allowed a chance to answer. First off, Slughorn was holding back. He couldn't really go full power against a second-year student. In a real fight, I think you would see a different approach. This set the Ravenclaws thinking, though Harry knew they wouldn't like the next part. Working out lesson plans for the first years is taking nearly as long as teaching them, and they are all at the same level. To try and run another class couldn't fail but have an impact on our own studies. I'm sorry, but it has to be a no to more defense lessons. Roger and the other three are being tutored by Assistant Ambassador Weasley, and again, increasing the size of that class would seriously cut into our lesson. The one thing about Ravenclaws was that they could see the logic behind Harry's reasoning. None of them would endanger their own studying or grades to tutor others. They may understand Harry's reasoning, but that didn't mean they had to like his decision. They had defense after lunch, and once more the four stayed behind to run over their plans for tonight's defense club. Bill, though, was more interested in Harry's exhaustion. We all noticed you were knackered after fighting Master Sharkshot, but you were wounded too. This is something your father needs to hear about, and I really do think we need to find your limits. Bill headed Hermione's objections off with simple logic. It's much safer to discover what those limits are under test conditions than in a battle. None of them could really argue with that. By the time they were due to meet Crow's Marauders, Harry's exhaustion was nothing more than a memory, and the four friends were all raring to go. You all did really well last week, but tonight we're going to change it up a level. We noticed that some people weren't concentrating on their evasion, prepared to take a hit to get their own spell off. That is never the way to behave in a fight. The curse that you let hit might be the last thing you'll ever feel. Harry let the seriousness of this sink in before continuing. Because of this, we're going to learn a new spell tonight. It's called the Stinging Hex. Any idea why? Ginny was first with an answer. She'd seen her mum fire it at the twins for years, usually as they were running away from the mayhem they'd just created. That's because it stings when you get hit with it. Ginny's exactly right. It does sting people, but it won't do you any harm other than that. The secret will be not to let it hit you, and we want you to learn to treat all spells cast at you in the same manner. After having learned to cast the blob spell, no one had any trouble mastering the Stinging Hex. Then the real lesson began. Harry had asked the room for some protective headgear. A stinging curse to the face was not something they wanted any of the first years to experience. You are now going to take part in an exercise the four of us do all the time. Same teams as last week. One will be casting the Stinging Hex while the other will be doing the best to evade. There will be a strict time limit of 1 minute. When we call time, you'd better stop casting. If you get hit, lie down on the floor and you will not be targeted again. There was a much more serious atmosphere about the lesson tonight. Even the ones doing the casting knew it would be their turn to evade next. Harry and Neville kept their eyes on the casting team, while Hermione, Padma and Henrika looked after those evaders who'd been hit. There was no cheering from the sidelines this time. Everyone was too busy watching for ideas that would see them come out of this without being stung. Hermione made sure to be the one who led Colin to the sidelines after his team's minute was up. He would probably have looked upon Padma having her arm around his shoulders as a price worth paying for taking a Stinging Hex. Once each team had their turn at both exercises, Harry reintroduced the format they had used last week, only this time using Stinging Hexes. All were pleased to see the battles this time were a lot more cagey. No one wanted to rush into a brace of Stinging Hexes. At the end of the lesson, they had all the marauders sit in a large circle and the elves provided comforting mugs of hot chocolate for each of them. Harry then spoke to the class. Up until tonight we've tried to make these lessons fun. The downside of that approach was some of you were treating it all as a game. I hope you now know it's not. We will still try and have some fun, but you have to understand that learning to defend yourselves is a very serious business. You are witches and wizards. A wand in your hand gives you the power to perform magic. The point of this club is to teach you how to do that properly and responsibly. We realized tonight might be a bit of a shock to the system and hope you'll still be back next week. They had worried that tonight's approach might scare a few of them off. Luna though seemed to speak for all of them. Why wouldn't we come back next week? This is stuff we need to learn, and who else is going to teach us it? Professor Lockhart. You are giving up your evening for us, and I know you'll be studying for Master Pitsley's class the minute you get back to our common room. I think what I'm trying to say is thanks to all of you. They weren't sure who started clapping, but soon all the first years were applauding their 4 tutors and staff sponsor. The first years had taken to wearing the Crows Marauders badges on their robes, and Harry couldn't help but feel proud of what they were doing here. It was fear rather than pride that saw Lucius shoot up into a sitting position in bed. The nightmare had left him sweating. Draco and Pansy had been in the picture that appeared on the Prophet's front page, just 2 of many purebloods who were clearly having a good time. Lucius was the only person who knew that those good times were going to come to a crashing halt, and that the pictures he saw in his nightmare were of dead pureblood children. That Draco's face was amongst those dead children was the reason for his nightmare, that and his inability to do anything about the situation. His son was just going to have to be left to take his chances, along with the rest of Hogwarts. Thanks for reading.